I was sitting in the dirt outside a truck repair shop, writing the same 4 numbers over and over with a stick, and every time I finished writing them, I scratched them out because if I left them there, somebody might ask me what they meant. 1984. I wrote it again. 1984. Then I looked at my hands. 16 years old, and they had never held anything heavier than a ledger. Then I looked at the workshop wall, which carried a slogan in letters a meter tall about production and the motherland. Half the paint had flaked off, so it now said something much less inspiring. 3 weeks ago, in a different life, I was 52 and I owned factories. Now I owned a stick. Here is the thing that got me sent to this yard, and I want you to appreciate it. I worked in the accounting office. I made one mistake. 100 yuan misplaced in a column, and I found it myself the next morning. But 100 yuan was 3 months of a worker's pay, so the company decided the correct punishment was to take a 16-year-old kid out of a clean office with a ceiling fan and drop him into the repair shop permanently as an example to others, so I stopped showing up for 3 months, which, I will admit, did not help my reputation. Ho Guangming! Fang Jianjun came around the corner of the workshop like a small angry weather system. 50-something, arms like rebar, a Korean War veteran who used to repair tanks and had never entirely stopped talking to people as though they were tanks. You've been sitting there for 40 minutes. Get inside. I'm thinking. Think inside. Even if you're just bored and want to fart, you have to do it in the workshop. In my old life, I would have said something clever and gone right on sitting. Instead, I stood up, brushed off my pants, and said, "Okay." Fang Jianjun stopped walking. Ming turned around and looked at me the way you look at a dog that has just recited a poem. "Is he sick?" he said, to nobody. Inside, the workshop smelled like diesel and hot metal and 40 years of somebody else's bad decisions. There were 4 trucks up on blocks, and every one of them belonged in a museum. An old Jifeng, a gas that had been driven here from Russia sometime around the Korean War and had clearly been holding a grudge about it ever since. A Yue Jin. And in the corner, and I want to stress that I am not making this up, an American Dodge from the 1940s, still running, still hauling freight, still technically listed as company property, 16 mechanics, half of them permanent workers, which in 1984 meant that short of murder you could not be fired, and half of them temporary, which meant they did everything that involved crawling under something. I found an empty stool near the door and sat on it, and I started doing the only thing I could actually do, which was wait for somebody's truck to break in an interesting way. It took about an hour. Master Gao came in towing an old Jifeng behind a tractor, which is a sentence that should tell you everything about the state of our fleet. The truck was a 1975 model and it would not start, and Zhang stood in the middle of the shop announcing this to everyone at a volume normally reserved for weddings and funerals. Chen Bo got it. Chen Bo was 26, permanent, the son of somebody in the logistics department, and he had the specific confidence of a man who has never once been told he was wrong by anybody who could afford to say it. Ming pulled the carburetor. Ming put in a new one. The engine caught on the second turn and settled into a rumble, and everyone made the noise mechanics make when a thing works, and Chen Bo wiped his hands on a rag with real ceremony. I looked at the fuel line and I felt my stomach drop because I knew exactly what was about to happen to Master Gao on the road, and I knew it because I had spent 3 years in this exact shop the first time around, and then 6 more years in Japan learning how engines actually work. "Master Gao," I said, "if it stalls on the way, bring it back and find an experienced mechanic." The shop went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when the junior idiot has said something. Chen Bo turned around slowly. "You probably can't even tell the difference between a brake and a clutch." Fair. From where he was standing, completely fair. I didn't argue. I got up and walked out to sit under my tree because there was nothing I could say that a fuel line wasn't about to say better. The train station was 10 kilometers away. The truck stalled 6 times. I could hear Master Gao before I could see him, which is impressive because he was inside a truck cab. Ming came through the gate at a speed that suggested the brakes were also a matter of opinion, jumped down, and started shouting a sequence of words I am not going to repeat, the general theme of which was that the car was not fixed. Fang Jianjun came out of his office fast, and I watched his face do something interesting. Ming wasn't angry at the truck. Ming was scared. Because in a state-owned enterprise, a workshop that can't fix a truck is a workshop that needs a new director, and Fang Jianjun had exactly one thing in this world, and it was that title. "Who touched it?" he said. "Who signed off on it?" "Chen Bo fixed it," said Master Gao. "And that kid told me it was going to stall." "Which kid?" "Hao Guangming." Fang Jianjun turned and stared at me for a good 3 seconds, and I watched him try to fit that sentence into his head and fail. "Why is it Hao Guangming?" I walked over and tapped my wrench twice against the pipe running down from the fuel filter. It made a dull sound. Everything in that shop made a dull sound, but this one was the wrong kind of dull. Take this pipe off, I said, and you'll know why the carburetor broke. I'm not taking anything off, said Chenbo. The carburetor was broken. I replaced the carburetor. The problem is the driver. Master Gao took a step forward and Fang Jianjun put a hand out and said, take it off. There is a particular moment available to a man who is 26 and permanent and the son of somebody. It is the moment he works out that he is about to be corrected in front of the entire shop by a 16-year-old who has not turned up since spring. Chen Bo had that moment standing there holding a wrench. Ming took the pipe off. It was heavy. That was the first thing. Ming nearly dropped it because a fuel line has no business weighing that much, and then the black sludge came out of the end of it and hit the concrete and kept coming, and somebody in the back said something under his breath. The line's packed, I said. So the filter never had anything to filter. Everything the fuel picked up went straight into the carburetor. You can put a new carburetor in that truck every week for the rest of your life, and you'll get the same result, except you'll be poorer. Bang Jianjun crouched down over the sludge with his hands on his knees. 66 octane, I said. Sometimes 70 if the depot's feeling generous. You know what's in the rest of it. How do you know this? And here we arrive at the problem I was going to have for the next several years, which is that the true answer was unavailable to me. Even if you haven't eaten pork, I said, you've still seen pigs run. Fang Jianjun straightened up and looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him deciding not to believe me, and I could also see him deciding not to say so out loud in front of a truck that was leaking evidence onto his floor. Clean the line, he said to Chen Bo, and went back into his office. I got out of there the second the whistle went. I want to explain something about that run home, because it is the only part of this story where I am not going to sound clever. The first time I lived through the 1980s, I did 3 years in that repair shop and then got a desk as a dispatcher, and then in the 90s the company shed half its people, and I was one of them. I went to Japan as a trainee, 6 years, and I came back with 200,000 yuan and a head full of things nobody in my hometown knew yet. After that, it was chemicals, then machinery, then a lot of money. I ended up with more than I could spend. My parents did not live to see any of it. Both of them were gone before the money arrived. I bought a very large house and put nobody in it. So I came through the gate of the family compound at a dead sprint, and there, under the tree by the bike shed, was a man in a white undershirt with a chessboard on a stool in front of him and one hand in the air holding a cannon piece, arguing about a move. My father, Hu Guozhong, 61 years old, alive, and losing at chess. I stopped about 5 meters away and stood there and could not make my face work. Ming looked up. Ming looked at my empty hands. Then he looked at my face, and his whole expression changed, and he said, in the voice of a man bracing for genuine catastrophe, was the car stolen? Which is when I found out I owned a bicycle, a 28-inch flying pigeon bought in 1979. In 1984, that is not a bicycle, that is an automobile. A man could get married on the strength of one. Somewhere in the shuffle of coming back to life at 16, I had completely forgotten it existed, and it was, at that moment, exactly where I had left it, leaning against the wall of the workshop, unlocked, in the manner of an idiot. No, I said, it's fine, it's at work. Then why do you look like that? Dust in my eye. Dinner was 3 rooms and a shared corridor, and my mother, Guo Meiling, at the stove. Fried cabbage, tofu with scallions, a dish of pickles, rice. No meat, because it was the middle of the month and meat was the beginning of the month. I ate the cabbage and had to stop and put my chopsticks down because I had forgotten. That is the thing nobody tells you about coming back. I had eaten in restaurants where a single plate cost more than my father earned in a year, and it was not as good as my mother's fried cabbage, and I had lost the taste of it so completely that getting it back felt like getting hit. Ming's crying over cabbage, my father announced to the room. Ming's growing, said my mother, and put more in my bowl. My father poured himself 2 ounces of Qinghedak and turned on the radio, and the radio gave him a revolutionary opera about a lantern, and he settled back with the expression of a man whose evening has arrived on schedule. I went and looked in the mirror on the wall by the door. 16, skinny, a haircut that appeared to have been performed as a punishment. 6 kids in this family, 4 sisters, 1 younger brother, and me, and here I was with 50 years of business inside a body that could not legally sign anything. So I did what you do. I started listing ways to get rich, and I crossed all of them out. Stamps. The monkey stamp, everybody knows the monkey stamp, issued in 1980, 4 years ago, also worth nothing for another 20. I would be 40 before that paid, and I would have spent 20 years being the guy with the stamps. A street stall. Do it, and my father dies of shame in front of his chess friends. In 1984, the son of a state enterprise family selling socks on a corner is not a businessman. He is a family disaster with a folding table, bonds, currency, anything clever with paper. No capital, and more to the point, the crackdown had come through the year before, and people had gone to prison for exactly that, and I did not want my second life to be shorter than my first. And underneath all of it, the real wall, the one nobody writes into these stories. In 1984, a private individual gets nothing from the plan. Not electricity, not steel, not land, not a permit. The whole country ran on allocation slips, and you could not buy an allocation slip with money because money was not what allocation slips were for. I sat on the edge of the bed with the radio going and came to the least romantic conclusion of my entire life. Rebirth novels are all nonsense. I had come back with 50 years of the future in my head, and I was still going to have to claw my way up inside a state-owned enterprise, one meeting at a time, like everybody else. Fine. I happened to know where every single one of the doors was. 3 days later, Fang Jianjun got called upstairs to see Secretary Zhou and came back with a face like a closed gate and grabbed the loudspeaker. The whole shop came in and stood around the pit while he told us, 50 EQ140s. Bought in 1982, the newest trucks the company had, the pride of the fleet, and every single one of them had an idol that wandered like a drunk. They had been through the shop 3 and 4 times each. Nothing held. Leadership has decided, Fang said, and stopped and started again. Until the problem is solved, the workshop bonus is suspended. You could feel the temperature of the room change. I need you to understand the size of that. Base pay in that shop was 30 Yuan a month. The bonus was 20. So they had just taken 40% of every man's income and hung it on a problem nobody could solve, which is a wonderful management technique if your goal is to make 16 people hate each other. Whoever can find the reason, Fang said, will be the advanced worker of our workshop this year. I mean it. From the back row, I put my hand up. I said. I know why the idling speed is unstable. The laughing started before I finished the sentence. The kid who hasn't come to work since spring. Careful, he'll fix it so hard it explodes. Let him talk, it's free entertainment. Fang Jianjun didn't laugh, which I noticed. Ming had watched a fuel line vomit onto his floor 3 days earlier, and he was no longer certain what I was. Speak. First, if I find the cause, I get the advanced worker title. Say it in front of everyone. That got a much bigger laugh than my first sentence, because a 16-year-old negotiating terms in a state-owned workshop is genuinely funny, and because every man in that room assumed he was about to watch me fail in a way he could enjoy for years. If you find it, Fang said, it's yours. So I started with the textbook out loud. In my first life, I learned one thing about walking into a room full of experts, and it is that you never open with the answer. You open by earning the right to be in the conversation. Idle mixture too lean, idle jet blocked, ignition timing off, weak spark, valve clearance, vacuum leak. I went down the whole list in the right order, and the shop got quieter with every item, because these were the correct answers, delivered by a kid who was supposed to be functionally illiterate about engines. And you've checked every one of those, 3 times, on 50 trucks, because you're not bad at your jobs. Somebody grunted. That grunt was worth more to me than the bonus, so it's the last one. It's a vacuum leak, but you've been hunting for a crack and there isn't one. The intake manifold gaskets and O-rings are bad out of the bag, all of them, same supplier. They came sealed, said a master in the second row. They came sealed and they came wrong. Pingzhou, Red Star rubber. And there was the reason nobody had found it in 6 months. Red Star was a national second-class enterprise. They did defense work. When a part arrives sealed from a factory that supplies the army, you do not stand there holding it and think, this is garbage. You think, I must be missing something, and you go check the ignition timing for a 4th time. They rolled an EQ140 into the pit right then. New gaskets and rings from a different maker. Turn it over. The idol came up and sat flat and steady, like a heart that had finally been told to calm down. Nobody spoke. 16 men listening to an engine behave. Then the skeptic from the second row said, put the old ones back. I loved him for it. It is exactly what I would have said. Old ones in. Shaking inside 30 seconds. New ones in. Steady. Old ones in. Shaking. Ming wiped his hands on his thighs and said, to nobody, well, I'll be damned, and went outside for a cigarette. Here is what I knew and could not say. In 1983, Shanghai began localizing the Santana. Red Star tried to get into the supply chain, and a German engineer took one look at a batch and threw the entire thing out. That triggered a review that went up through the whole ministry, and everyone found out at once that Red Star had been shipping bad rubber for the better part of a year. The first time I lived through this, our workshop lost the bonus for 3 months before that news reached us. 80 Yuan a man, because information travels at the speed of paperwork. Not this time. That night, my second sister, Ho Huifang, came over with her husband, which meant braised mackerel, which in the middle of the month was practically a national holiday. Guo Ziqiang taught at a middle school and was about to be made vice principal, and he had that quality some men have where they read one book about self-improvement and decided it was a public duty. I stood behind my father at the chessboard and murmured, "Cannon takes the horse." Then bring the chariot down. Ming did it. Ming won. Ming announced he had seen it 4 moves ago. "I'm going for the Advanced Worker Award at the workshop this year," I said to the table. My brother-in-law put down his cup and gave me the smile of a man about to be helpful. "Guangming, you have to be down to earth. Young people today want to eat the fat before they've caught the pig. Do small things well. In 10 years, if you keep your head down, maybe. Sure. It isn't about ambition. It's about being realistic regarding your position." "I'll show you the paper at the end of the year," I said, and ate a piece of mackerel, because no argument you can win at a dinner table is worth as much as the same argument won in December with a document. 2 days later, the loudspeaker crackled and Fang Jianjun announced that the manifold parts had been confirmed defective. The fault lay with the supplier and not with us, and the bonus would be paid as normal. The cheer lasted about 11 seconds. Then it curdled, and I felt it curdle from across the room, because the money was safe, and now the only thing left on the table was the title, and the title was going to a 16-year-old who had skipped a quarter of the year. 11 years, dawn till dusk, somebody said, not quietly. "I've never had an Advanced Worker Award." Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. The 15th was payday, cash and meal tickets, and I was in line when Fang Jianjun put his head out of the office and said my name. There was a second man inside, in the good chair, with his own mug and a cardigan over his shirt and the relaxed posture of a person who has never in his life had to fix anything. Guo Lihua, Section Chief, Purchasing. Oh good, I thought. This old goat too. I had the advantage of having already seen the film. Guo Lihua was not a capable man. Ming was a world-class flatterer, which in 1984 was a substantially better career than being capable. In the 90s, they would open his apartment and find 5 million yuan in cash, foreign currency, and gold. Ming got life. Ming came out in his 70s, which I have always considered the universe being unnecessarily thorough. At the moment he was pouring me tea. Sit, Chin-ho, everybody's talking about you. Thank you, Section Chief Guo. My boy Guo Hao has been in this workshop 2 years. Temporary status. Ming works hard. Ming's had a hard time. Guo Hao had spent his adolescence as a designated layabout, which was an actual administrative category, and in about 6 years would get 10 years for aggravated assault, part of which he would serve in the same institution as his father. Some families do reunions at the new year. Ming needs something on his record to go permanent, and you're young, you have decades. You'd be doing a good deed. Like Comrade Xiaolong. I let it sit a second. What benefits do I get? Ming blinked. Genuinely blinked. Ming had not budgeted for that question. It isn't about benefits, it's about being a good comrade. Then let Guo Hao be a good comrade. Ming can find the next effective batch himself. I'll even tell him where to look. The warmth went out of his face like somebody had unplugged it. Chin Hao, you already agreed. No, I said your son wasn't capable of earning the award, and that I was. Those are 2 different sentences. You put them close together and hoped. Ming stood up. Ming gained about 4 centimeters standing up, which was less than he expected. Your liberalism is rampant. Do you believe I will report you? I looked at him, not angry. I made myself look at him the way you look at a man who bought a very expensive suit for a party that has been cancelled. Ming sat back down. Ming actually sat back down. Trying to frighten a 3-year-old, I said. No wonder they all say you're useless. All flattery, no function. Fang Jianjun was in the corridor holding his mug and had clearly been there a while. Fang Jianjun's word is law. This year's workshop award is yours. Then 2 fingers on my shoulder. That one fights dirty. Ming learned it in a period when people learned it properly. Don't turn your back. I found out how properly by the next morning. The defective parts came back to us, all of them in crates, dumped in the corner of our yard. Purchasing had declined to return them to the factory, which meant they stayed on our books, which meant the workshop absorbed the cost. Which meant the bonus was coming out of it after all, only now with a week of hope inserted first so it would hurt properly. And by lunch, the story going around the shop was that Section Chief Guo would arrange the return the moment Hu Guangming stopped being selfish about a certificate. 16 men, one night, every single one of them turned around. The canteen served jiaodong steamed buns the size of a child's head, 3 to a plate, and I was working through the second one when Master Chen sat down opposite me and began to talk in the gentle circular manner of a monk chanting over a man who has not yet been told he is the funeral. You're young. Leadership has to have face. A workshop cannot fight the head office. Then Master Wen sat down on my other side and set his enamel mug on the table between us with the reverence of a man laying down a relic. 1977, red characters, advanced worker. This, he said, is what it gets you, a mug and a wash basin. It's a good mug. They all have elderly parents and young children. There it was. So sacrifice me and the whole workshop benefits. That's the arrangement? Ming didn't answer because it was, and we both knew it, and there is nothing to say after that. 4 more came at me before the whistle, some kind, some not. I have watched this on television, in a house I paid for with money I had not yet earned. A lion pulls down one animal at the edge of the herd, and the herd stands 20 meters off and watches it eat, chewing, calm, because while the lion is busy, it is not busy with them. Better your fellow than yourself. Every man in that canteen was decent. That is precisely what made it work. So I went and found Fang Jianjun and said the sentence that had apparently never been spoken out loud in that building. We'll return them ourselves. Ming looked at me as though I had proposed we fly there. Purchasing returns goods. Purchasing declined to return the goods. Then the goods don't get returned. And I watched a man who had repaired tanks under artillery fire walk face first into a wall that was not made of courage or competence. In a planned economy, every task belongs to a department, and when that department says no, the task does not become difficult. It stops existing as a category of thought. That batch was bought outside the plan, I said. It isn't allocated stock. There's no rule stopping the user unit returning it directly. Pingzhou is 300 kilometers. Give me a travel order. Ming chewed on it a long time. 1 man going is personal gain, he said at last. 2 is for the public good. Fine. Who? Chen Bo. Of course, Chen Bo. The man whose carburetor I had publicly executed in front of the entire shop. I understand. You're sending the 2 most expendable idlers in the workshop. Correct, said Fang Jianjun, and stamped the paper. 300 kilometers in a 1970s Jifang takes almost 10 hours, and I would like to walk you through the vehicle because people romanticize this era and they are wrong to. There are no seats, there is a bench. I felt for a seatbelt out of pure habit and then remembered that nobody has had the idea yet. The suspension has 1 setting, and that setting is vibration massage. The clutch requires double declutching, so every gear change is a small percussion performance. The steering has no assistance, so turning at low speed is an upper body workout. And the horn and the high beams are operated by foot with buttons in the floor, so a driver overtaking on a mountain road looks less like a professional and more like a future esports player, absolutely maxing out his actions per minute. There is a reason every long-haul driver of that generation had a dropped stomach. Chen Bo drove. Chen Bo did not speak for the first 90 kilometers, which I respected. We slept in a work unit guest house, which you could enter on a work ID without a letter of introduction, and in the morning we drove up to the Red Star rubber factory, which had electric gates. Electric gates. In 1984, that was the architectural equivalent of a man wearing sunglasses indoors. The gatekeeper ignored Chen Bo completely. Then I handed him a cigarette, at which point he became willing to communicate, and what he communicated was, "Don't you know left from right?" Inside, in the corridor, a man from the Huixian tractor plant explained the rules of the building to me while we waited. To buy from Red Star, you brought local specialty goods. Ming had brought 2 truckloads of mandarins. 2 truckloads. That was the entry fee to be allowed to give them money. What did you bring? Chestnuts. Ming gave me a look of real sympathy. Nobody wanted chestnuts. The sales clerk had never in her working life heard the word return used in that sentence, and had to go and get her boss. The boss was Zhou Wenbin, sales director, a thin intellectual in glasses who had clearly decided what kind of conversation this was before he came through the door. Our Hongqing factory is a national second-level enterprise. How could our products be substandard? You little brat, you're here to cause trouble. And out we went. Chen Bo was furious in the corridor. I was smiling, and I could see it bothering him more than the ejection had. What exactly is funny? Nothing, I said. How's your tolerance for liquor? Back at the guest house there was a telephone, and in 1984, a telephone was a wonderful instrument because it did not tell the person on the other end who was calling. This call, I told the operator, is for Volkswagen. Chen Bo's mouth opened. I got through to Shanghai Automotive. I introduced myself as the Red Star Rubber Factory, calling to confirm a matter regarding the rejected batch, and the man on the other end confirmed it in about 4 sentences. The German engineer had thrown out the shipment. The written notice had already gone out. I thanked him warmly on behalf of Red Star and hung up. Then I called the Pingzhou post office and asked very politely, as a factory expecting an important delivery, whether a registered letter from Shanghai had arrived for us. It had. It was with the postman that morning. I put the receiver down. Chen Bo was staring at me the way you stare at a magic trick you are certain is a crime. How is your alcohol tolerance? I said again. Half a gin of white liquor. No problem. Good. Tomorrow at noon, we're going to make the Red Star factory buy us a drink. We went back the next morning, and I got exactly 1 sentence out before the room changed. I also heard that your factory's product quality was found unqualified and rejected by the German engineer at Shanghai Automotive. Zhou Wenbin's face came apart in real time. Ming had learned about it the previous afternoon in an emergency meeting behind a closed door, and here was a 16-year-old from a truck depot 300 kilometers away saying it out loud in his own sales office. "Where?" he said. "Did you hear that? Our company has some connections at Shanghai Automotive," which was a complete fabrication and completely unverifiable, and therefore the most powerful sentence available to me. "A small matter," said Zhou Wenbin, who 30 seconds earlier had called me a brat. "The return. I'll handle it for you right away." Lunch was Huayang cuisine and a bottle of Gujinggong, lion's head meatballs, squirrel fish, the whole apology. And somewhere around the third cup, I decided to prove I was not bluffing, using a detail I could not possibly have obtained by luck. "Do you know why the Germans keep rejecting your horn contacts?" Ming did not. "Because they test them to 100,000 presses and yours are built for 50. And you all think the Germans are being difficult. They're not. In Germany, it's essentially illegal to lean on your horn in a city. Their driver presses it maybe twice a week. Here, if you don't lean on the horn, you don't get to move. Same part, two completely different lives. They aren't testing your rubber, they're testing our traffic." Zhou Wenbin put his cup down and looked at me for a while. After that, he would have given me the building. "Director Zhou," I said, "since we're being friendly, could you approve 200 heavy truck tires for me?" "Done." Then I gave him the thing I had actually come to give him. "Your rubber isn't bad. Your storage is. There was a typhoon in July. It took part of the roof off your raw material warehouse. Your storekeeper patched it himself in the rain and never reported it upward because reporting it would have been his neck. Everything under that section of roof got damp. Go and look at the batch numbers from the last week of July." On the drive back, Chenbo said, "I really didn't realize you could lie without even blushing. You've probably never even seen the Huangpu River." "I have. From a hotel window. In about 25 years. Zhou Wenbin went and looked at his warehouse, found exactly what I told him he would find, and reported the discovery to his own director as his own discovery, which was the correct professional decision and which I had fully counted on. So there was a second banquet, and this one had a bottle of Mutai class liquor on the table, and there was a new allocation slip. Not 200 tires, 250. The extra 50 were hush money, obviously, and I have always found it funny that the man chose that number because 250 is not a number you call somebody in Chinese unless you want to be hit. Plus a sack of honey mandarins from the pile that the tractor plant had spent 2 truckloads to earn. In the yard, before we set off, I picked up the entire sack and put it in Chenbo's arms. All of it? All of it, on one condition. Nobody hears about the tires until I say so. Ming hugged the sack and agreed instantly, and I want to note for the record that I bought the loyalty of a 26-year-old permanent worker with a bag of fruit, and that it held for years, because buying tires was Guo Lihua's job. Buying tires was, in fact, his entire justification for existing, and I wanted to walk into a room at a moment of my choosing and put that piece of paper on a table. That same week, at the other end of town, Guo Lihua came home drunk and unhappy. I got this part later, from his own son, for the price of 2 cigarettes. Ming had spent the evening buying dinner for the director of a tire plant, and had received in exchange the sentence every purchasing officer of that era knew by heart. "No stock, come back next year." On the stairs, he met his son. Guo Hao was wearing a floral shirt, flared trousers, and a pair of dark toed glasses, at night indoors, and was singing a Cantonese pop song in a voice best described as duck. His father hit him across the back of the head. "The decadent music of capitalism." Then Guo Hao, still rubbing his skull, mentioned the news going around the compound. The defective parts had been returned, the bonus was being paid, some kid from the repair shop had driven to Pingzhou and done it himself. Guo Lihua sobered up in about 1 second. "How can that be? Ming's a mechanic. What right does a mechanic have to return goods?" And then he said the sentence that made my entire month. "Tomorrow I'll report this to company leadership. Ho Guangming has to be punished." I was under a GAZ-24 when I heard. The GAZ-24 was interesting all by itself because the plate on it belonged to the regional administration, which meant it belonged to somebody at least at deputy commissioner level, which meant somebody upstairs was doing a favor for somebody upstairs. Chenbo came under the truck to tell me, because Guo Hao had spent the morning telling everyone in the yard that his father had gone to leadership to have me dealt with. As a criminal, he was providing outstanding assistance to the investigating officers. Fang Jianjun came and got me himself and walked me across the yard. "If the sky falls," he said, "I'll hold it up for you." Which was a nice thing to say and completely untrue, and I liked him a great deal for saying it anyway. Secretary Zhou Hongwei was behind the desk, 56, 3 years off retirement, a man whose entire remaining career strategy was to not have anything happen. And in the chair beside him, which was the detail that mattered, sat General Manager Chen Changfu, 50, smooth, Guo Lihua's patron, Let me give you Chen Changfu now so you have him for later. In 3 years, he would have all the power in that company. Ming would fill it with relatives, sell off the assets piece by piece, and by the end of it, the state would be down 500 million and Chen Changfu would be up 30. Suspended death sentence. The money never came back because he had already sent his daughter-in-law and his grandson to America. Right now, he was smiling at me and pouring nothing. I put my hand against my jacket pocket. The allocation slip was still there. Guo Lihua opened, and I have to give him credit, because he did it well. Ming did not attack my work. Ming attacked my organizational discipline. A worker went on a business trip without the purchasing department. A worker took an action reserved for a department. This is not about parts. This is about a young comrade with no respect for procedure. It was smart because it moved the fight off the workshop, where he would lose, and onto the individual versus the collective, where nobody wins. Without rules, said Chen Changfu comfortably, nothing can be accomplished, so I went where it hurt. Section Chief Guo, can I ask a question? It's the end of 1984. Why is our company still short of tires? Over at the freight department, they've got 5 trucks sharing 1 spare. Drivers are turning down routes because they won't risk the road. The room got cold. Watch your mouth, said Guo Lihua. You have no idea what purchasing involves. If you can buy the tires, I'll give you my position as section chief of the purchasing department. I took out the slip and unfolded it and put it on the desk. Zhou Hongwei put on his glasses. Ming leaned in. This is 250? Ming said the number twice, and I watched Chen Changfu's face come off its hinges very slightly at the corner. Impossible, said Guo Lihua. It's fake. Ming forged it. It's stamped and signed by their sales director, I said. The telephone's right there. Call Pingzhou. I'll wait. I've got nowhere to be. I'm a mechanic. Nobody picked up the telephone, which told me everything about how much they wanted the answer. Section Chief Guo, I said, don't worry. I'm not going to take your position. Ming went a color I have not seen on a person before or since. Zhou Hongwei did what men 3 years from retirement do, which was to declare the matter a misunderstanding, and then Chen Changfu cleared his throat and began, in the voice of a leader restoring order, to tell me that I should reflect deeply on my methods and submit a written explanation. So I repeated it back to him, word for word, same cadence, same pauses, right up to the written explanation, and then I picked up the allocation slip, folded it, and put it back in my pocket. 250 tires, walking out of the room. Chen Changfu performed a 180-degree turn so fast I heard it. If anyone dares to slight our hero, he announced, I, Chen Changfu, will be the first to disagree. Zhou Hongwei offered me a commendation, a red flower, a photograph on the board. No thank you. Ming offered a cash bonus. No thank you. However, I do have one small matter. Here is the small matter, and it is the only thing I actually wanted out of that room. My father had been a cadre. When he retired, I inherited his post, which is how it worked. Except somewhere in the paperwork I had been registered as a worker instead. The difference? A worker made 30-odd yuan. A cadre made 50, and with bonus, 80. That is not the important part. The important part is that a worker stays a worker forever, and a cadre can be transferred into administration. And from administration, a man can end up running a county. Zhou Hongwei and Chen Changfu were both cadres with children. I did not have to explain any of this. They understood it the way fish understand water. You're 16, said Zhou. Policy says no cadre status before 18. It isn't in my hands. Then it looks like you'll be waiting 2 years, said Guo Lihua, and he actually smiled. Doesn't our company, I said, have a practice called acting in post? The smile stopped. Acting in post. You keep worker registration and you do a cadre's job with a cadre's pay and a cadre's treatment, and when you turn 18, the paperwork simply catches up with reality. It was on the books, it was used constantly, and Guo Lihua had just handed me the opening by saying the word to. Zhou Hongwei looked at Chen Changfu. Chen Changfu looked at me. Is this kid really only 16? 55 yuan, a month plus bonus came out to 80. 16 years old, 6 months of service, 3 of which I had spent not attending. The canteen gave me braised pork with cabbage that week, and the cook kept putting extra in, and Fang Jianjun sat down opposite me with his tray and looked at my bowl. You're turning into a piece of meat yourself, Tang Seng meat. Everybody wants a bite. Because 7 or 8 people had come to see him about me, and not one of them was complaining. They were matchmaking. Ming took out a small red notebook, an actual notebook, and began, over pork and cabbage, to run a dating program. A nurse, 19. Nurses work night shifts, he said, in a tone that implied this was either a benefit or a warning. A girl from the supply and marketing cooperative. High-maintenance princesses, those, but she has connections at the grain station. And then the deputy station master's daughter, Luo Yufeng, who he assured me was the image of Chen Xiaoqing. I had met Luo Yufeng. She's more like Chen Tang. Fang Jianjun frowned. Chen Tang? Who's Chen Tang? Water margin. The red-haired demon. Ming thought about that for a second and then laughed so hard he had to put his chopsticks down. My first cadre's pay came to 82 yuan, and I carried it home in 8 notes and put all 8 on the table in front of my mother. She counted them twice, put 6 away, and handed me 20 back for pocket money, which is a mother's exchange rate and cannot be argued with. My second sister came on the Sunday with her husband because word travels, and my brother-in-law arrived with his hands behind his back and a face arranged for congratulation. I did not say anything. I put a sheet of paper on the table beside the peanuts. Ming picked it up and read it again, and his mouth moved without producing anything, because it was not the advanced worker certificate he had come prepared to be gracious about. It was the appointment order, acting in post, cadre grade. You said 10 years, I said, if I kept my head down and didn't cause trouble. This is. Ming put it down carefully, the way you put down something hot. This is the end of the year and it is not even summer. Then I was early. Eat, the mackerel's getting cold. My father spent the rest of the meal explaining to him how the chess had gone. She was saving toward the 3 turns and 1 sound. Bicycle, Phoenix, watch, Shanghai, sewing machine, Plum Blossom, and the sound, a Red Star radio at 98 Yuan, 250 for the set, which was the complete official specification of a good life in 1985. In 10 years, I said, it'll be color televisions, refrigerators, washing machines, and tape recorders. Don't talk nonsense. I slipped my brother 2 Mao under the table because he was in his first year of middle school and failing at it with real dedication, and because I remembered what it was like to have no money at 14. I should tell you what happened to me the last time since it explains a certain urgency. When the layoffs came in the 90s, my fiancé left within the month. I went to Japan, came back at 40-something with money and no one to spend it on, and eventually married a woman 20 years younger in a transaction we both understood perfectly and neither of us ever called a marriage. So when the company held its New Year assembly for 1985 and announced they were building 2 4-story blocks, 48 apartments, 60 square meters each, I did the arithmetic before the applause finished. I had to get one of those 48, not for me, for them, and not because of the 60 square meters, because those first 2 blocks were poured concrete frame, and every block the company built after them would be prefab slab, and in the 90s, there would be an earthquake in Qinghai, 5.2, and half a slab building would come down. The only reason it didn't kill anybody is that it happened on a weekday and everyone was at work. Try explaining that to a housing committee. While I was working out how to get an apartment, Fang Jianjun handed me a different problem. Jicheng, Yellow River Truck Plant, you're going. The company wanted to buy heavy trucks, the Huanghe JN162, and somebody had to go and learn how to service them. Why me? Because I'm not sending you to learn, said Fang. I'm sending you to watch how they repair them. And frankly, if even you can understand it, then the masters in my workshop will manage. Which is the warmest thing anyone said to me that year. What Fang Jianjun did not know, and what I did, is that the JN162 was built on Austrian Steyr technology. The country had spent $600 million in hard currency for that license, at a time when the country did not have $600 million to spare on anything. The delegation was 5 people, Guo Lihua leading it, a clerk, 2 test drivers, and me, second in rank, which Guo Lihua enjoyed roughly as much as a nail in the shoe. 6 hours in a BJ 212 Jeep, which has the ride quality of a wheelbarrow with ambitions. The head of the plant's repair shop came out to meet us. Wei Bin, blue work coat without a single stain on it, black framed glasses, the general air of a man who marks homework. Ming looked at me the way you look at a chair. Go in and look at whatever you want. So I went in and looked at whatever I wanted, and the first thing I saw was a white Toyota Crown, 7th generation, right-hand drive. There were 2 of those in the entire province. It belonged to the Foreign Trade Administration and existed for the purpose of driving foreign guests from the airport to a hotel, and it was sitting in a repair bay, dead. A mechanic named Chen Jinlong saw me looking and decided to help. You probably don't even know what kind of car this is. 7th generation Toyota Crown, I said. Toyota started out making looms. The Crown is the first passenger car they exported to America, and it nearly finished them because it was designed for Japanese roads and it could not hold 70 miles an hour on an American highway. They went home, spent 10 years fixing it, and came back. Chen Jinlong closed his mouth. The transmission was gone, and nobody in the building had ever opened an automatic gearbox because in 1985, nobody in the country had opened an automatic gearbox. The driver had brought the manual, and the manual was in Japanese, and there was a small crowd standing around it in despair. Why is it in Japanese? Who can read this? I picked it up and read the first page out loud, in Japanese. Chen Jinlong wilted like an eggplant after a frost, which is not my expression. It is the expression of a young mechanic standing next to him, who then frowned and said, "Wait, how come I didn't hear him say Bakayaro? In the tunnel warfare movies, the Japanese always say Bakayaro. Would you, said Chen Jinlong, put curse words in a vehicle manual? I went through the whole thing for them, out loud, translating. 2.8 liters, 6 cylinders, turbocharger, anti-lock braking, cruise control, electric mirrors, climate control. You have to understand that none of those were words in that room. Cruise control in a country where the good road surface ran out after 40 kilometers. I might as well have been reading the specification of a spaceship. The repair section of the manual, incidentally, was useless. It assumed you had the tools and the parts, and we had a hammer and a shortage of everything. Doesn't matter, I said. I know Japanese. Why wouldn't I know how to fix a Japanese car? I had the transmission open in about 20 minutes, which is when Chen Jinlong actually put a hand on his chest. Wait. Don't just take it apart. But I had done 3 years of exactly this, in a workshop in Japan, in a life that had not happened yet. My hands knew it better than my head did. The belt in the variable transmission had torn. That was all. It needed a new belt and imported fluid. Your movements were too fast, said Chen Jinlong unhappily. If you leave now, I probably won't be able to put it back together. Then buy me lunch. I don't have meal tickets for this factory. Then I found the real fault, which was not in the car. The driver was standing at the edge of the group, and I turned to him and asked how he'd been driving it downhill. Ming told me proudly that he coasted in neutral to save fuel, which is what you do with a carburetor truck, and which is a habit every driver of his generation had, and which in an automatic transmission cuts the oil pump and cooks the whole gearbox from the inside. His face went gray. I'm not putting that in a report, I said. Just stop doing it. That man bought me lunch for 3 days. And while the parts were being chased down, I did the thing that in hindsight was the actual event of the trip. I stood in the middle of the shop floor with the transmission laid out on a bench and explained to a crowd of mechanics what each part did and why, which is how Wei Bin, coming out of his office to check on his junior visitor, found me lecturing his own people. Is he here to learn? He said. It's like he's giving a lecture to our staff. The crowd started, went out for a road test, and came back, and Wei Bin's shoulders dropped about 2 centimeters, which for him was throwing a party. Ming walked over. What should I call you, young comrade? Complete reversal, no embarrassment, none required. Ming brewed Da Hong Pao in his office, which is not what you do for visiting truck depot staff, and then he put a book on the desk between us. Japanese, 200+ pages, differentiated conversion of heavy trucks, refrigerated bodies, tankers, chassis for specialized equipment. Can you translate this? And then Wei Bin turned out to be somebody entirely different from what he looked like. Tsinghua, mechanical engineering, class of 1965, an engineer. And his repair shop was not a repair shop, it was the plant's feedback loop. They didn't just fix trucks, they found design faults and sent them back to the design office. Stay a week, he said. I'll put you in our guest house. It's better than the prefectural committees. And our cook is from a family that served in the Confucius mansion. His first-rank tofu is the real thing. Meanwhile, Guo Lihua had not bought a single truck. The JN162 was in shortage. Money was not the constraint. There was a queue, and the queue was measured in years, and he had spent 3 days buying dinners for people who thanked him warmly and offered nothing. His last hope was the test drivers, who might come back and say the truck was no good. They came back glowing. Power steering, which the EQ140 did not have, a hydraulic seat that they described sincerely as a sofa, a sleeper berth behind the seats, and a 10-ton payload against the EQ140 seconds 5. Guo Lihua seized on the one number he had, 26 liters per 100 kilometers. The EQ140 does 20. It carries 10 tons, said a driver. That was the end of that. So he went to the provincial transport department to fight for a planned allocation slip, which requires a footnote. Equipment obtained through the plan carried heavier obligations to the state afterward, so enterprises generally preferred to buy outside the plan. Going in through the plan was what you did when you had failed. That evening, he came back pleased with himself and told me all about his dinner with the provincial leadership at the prefectural committee guest house, and then he arrived at the part he had clearly been rehearsing in the jeep. Of course, real first-rank tofu, you only get from the cooks at the Yellow River Plant guest house. Very hard to arrange. I'll be sure to tell you what it tastes like. I reached into my pocket and put a box of matches on the table in front of him. Yellow River Truck Plant guest house printed on the side. I also happened to have a meal of authentic first-rank tofu. Ming did not sleep. I know he did not sleep because I saw the circles under his eyes at breakfast, and I want to be honest with you, that box of matches gave me more personal satisfaction than the 250 tires. The next morning, Wei Bin telephoned Fang Jianjun and borrowed me for a week, and over tea he told me the thing that rearranged my entire understanding of how the country actually worked. Our capacity is 3,000 vehicles a year. In 5 years we want 10,000. And the plan allocations? Ming made a small gesture with 2 fingers, like flicking away a crumb. If someone really comes with an in-plan slip to collect a truck, whether we give it to him or not is up to us. I put my cup down. Then where does your steel come from? The steel mill, we give them a couple of trucks. Tires, we give the tire plant a couple of trucks. Imported components, we trade. Everyone needs trucks. Nobody needs paper. And nobody stops you? The heavy truck group spent $600 million in foreign exchange on this license, said Wei Bin. They would like some of it back, so no, nobody stops us. I sat there and thought about Guo Lihua, 300 kilometers away, chasing a signature. Ming got it, incidentally. Ming got his planned allocation slip for 1985, presented it, and was told to come back in the middle of 1986. Ming decided that this was the factory's fault and began composing the report on the way home. I finished the translation in a week, and on the last day, Chen Jinlong warned me to stay out of Wei Bin's way. Ming's in a mood. It's the Yanzhou thing. The Yanzhou thing was several hundred trucks sold to the coal group at Yanzhou, all of which had developed the same fault. Fourth gear jumping out on its own, under load, on a hill, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. Nobody could find the cause. The engineers had been at it for weeks, and Wei Bin was not afraid of Yanzhou. Wei Bin was afraid of the answer. Because if the fault was in the design, then every one of the thousands of trucks already out there had it, and there was no such thing as a recall in China in 1985. The two available options were to tell several hundred customers to make do and keep driving, or to stop production. We took too big a step, he told me later, with a cup in his hand and no expression at all. Steyr expected us to absorb this over 5 years. We built the JN162-1. I made a sympathetic noise, and internally, I was delighted because repairing vehicles was the one thing I was actually qualified to do, and because I had a card in my hand that nobody at that plant could have. They tried replacing the gear. It didn't help. Then there was shouting in the corridor. I put my head round the door. Two engineers, Gao and Guo, nose to nose over a gearbox on a trolley. One of them blamed the bushing on the gear, the other blamed the shift fork. Both of them were what that generation called worker, peasant, soldier students, admitted to university between 66 and 78 on the basis of family background rather than an examination, and both of them were sensitive about it, in the way men are sensitive about a thing they cannot fix. They saw me in the doorway. We are discussing a problem with the transmission design. You're a mechanic. Stop causing trouble. It's a copy of a West German ZF transmission, isn't it? Silence. Complete silence. Because there was no possible route by which a truck depot mechanic in 1985 could know that sentence. It was not in any manual available in that building. And once I had said it, everything else I said became worth listening to, which was the entire purpose of saying it. I reached into the parts box on the trolley and took out a small coil of wire, the self-locking spring, and held it up. The spring isn't broken. It's too soft. Here is the mechanism, and it is beautiful in the way that all expensive failures are beautiful once somebody explains them. The Yanzhou Coal Group ran a proper third-level maintenance schedule, and I want to stress that this was entirely correct of them. As part of it, they flushed and cleaned the gearbox. In the process, the self-locking spring got compressed and released over and over. A German spring survives that. Ours was made of domestic steel, which met the domestic standard and did not meet the German one, and after a few maintenance cycles, it lost tension. And a self-locking spring with no tension is a gear that comes out of engagement whenever the truck feels like it. The trucks that jumped out of gear were the ones that had been maintained best. Engineer Guo, who had lost the argument roughly 40 seconds earlier, immediately said, "And how do you propose to prove that?" "That's for you to prove," I said. "Take it to the laboratory. Compare it against the Steyr specification. I'm a mechanic. I don't have a laboratory." The laboratory took 2 days. Ming was actually right, I heard through a door. That mechanic was right. And I want to be honest about this, because the story is better honest. I am not a genius. In my previous life, from 1986 onward, the Yellow River plant shipped a repair manual with every truck, and I spent 3 years in a workshop with that manual, and I read it until I could recite it. The spring was on page something. I did not deduce it. I remembered it. The banquet had 11 people at it, and I was seated in a position that told me something about Wei Bin's real rank in that building. I had better explain a Jilu table. The host drinks 3, the deputy host drinks 3. Then every guest is toasted individually. Then somebody proposes beer to sober up. Then somebody proposes wine to sober up. By then you have put away half a gin, and a stranger is asking whether you are happy. The engineers talked shop, and at some point one of them said the sentence that summed up the whole decade. Making it well is not easy. It comes down to material technology, and in that, our country is still very far behind. And I put down my cup and offered them an idea. You've got dozens of these small faults, things that happen often and are hard to diagnose. Why don't you collect them all, write them up as a repair manual, and put a copy in every truck you ship? Wei Bin slapped his own thigh. What a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Then he pointed at me. You write it. So I wrote the repair manual for the Huanghe JN162, which I had memorized. which they had written in about a year and a half. I gave the Yellow River plant its own book back, and everybody thanked me for it, and I sat in that guest house at night writing out faults I had learned by heart from a document that did not exist yet, and I laughed until I had to put the pen down. 300 kilometers away, in a 2-room apartment, Guo Lihua was pouring liquor for his brother-in-law. Zhongwen ran the personnel department, and he had come over with 2 gin of walnut cakes, which cost 6 mao, which was half a day's wage, which tells you the exchange rate of family obligation in 1985. They drank. They ate peanuts and shredded radish. Guo Lihua mentioned twice that he was in line for one of the 48 apartments. And then, Zhongwen mentioned, idly, that a certain young comrade in the repair shop had now been absent from his post for 20 days, and that the personnel department had never received a travel authorization signed by company leadership. Here were the rules. A workshop director could sign 1 day of personal leave, 3 days of sick leave, 5 days of business travel. Anything beyond that needed leadership. Absence over 10 days meant loss of a month's wages and bonus, and a formal serious warning on the record. Guo Lihua smiled the way a man smiles when a door opens by itself. This Hu Guangming is the reason your nephew lost his shot at permanent status. Ming put down his cup. You know what needs to be done. The notice went up on the board while I was still in Jicheng. 20 days absent without leave. Wages and bonus withheld. Formal serious warning. The canteen enjoyed it enormously. Maybe he was kidnapped by human traffickers. I think he got arrested. In 83 they could detain 100 people in a day. Fang Jianjun went to personnel and got a wall of politeness. I'm just enforcing the company's rules, Director Fang. Ming asked whether the authorization could be filed retroactively. Ming was told it could be filed from today. Today being 20 days too late, and Fang Jianjun walked back across the yard understanding that something had broken. There was an unwritten rule about this and everybody used it. When a man was sent away on business, you extended it a couple of days so he could see Tiananmen or buy something for his wife. Nobody ever wrote that down. Nobody had ever enforced against it. Somebody had just enforced against it, which meant somebody had decided to spend the rule. Meanwhile, Wei Bin was reading my manual with genuine pleasure. Everything in here is a fault that occurs frequently and is not easy to diagnose. This is exactly right. Engineer Wei. Can I ask you for something? Ask. Our purchasing department came here to buy heavy trucks and couldn't get a single one. I'd rather not go home empty-handed. Ming stood up, went out, and was gone for 10 minutes. Ming came back with a vehicle collection slip. 15J, N162 heavy trucks, in stock, collect at your convenience. I originally wanted to give you 20, he said apologetically, but the plant doesn't have that much left. The train ticket was also his doing, 1 phone call because the railway would also quite like some trucks. Chen Bo met me at the depot gate looking grim. You've been disciplined, a month's salary docked. Didn't you know? I do now. Personnel did it. Zhong Wen, Ming's Guo Lihua's brother-in-law. Where is everybody? General leadership meeting. Been going an hour. I stood there for a second and felt the whole thing arrange itself the way it does maybe twice in a life. That's perfect, I said. I'll go and let the leaders hear my side of it. Inside, Chen Chengfu was in full flow, and I got to stand outside the door and listen to the end of it, which was about labor discipline, and about how a single black sheep damages the flock, and about how in his view the punishment should be strengthened rather than reduced, right here before the new year, so that everyone understood. I knocked and went in. All the leaders are here, I said. Excellent. What are you meddling in? Said Guo Lihua. I was told I'd been absent from my post. I've come to report. Section Chief Guo and I went to Jicheng together. We each had our own assignment. I don't know whether the others completed theirs. I looked at him while I said the last part. Ming looked at the table. Ming was not going to raise the subject of trucks in that room, and we both knew it. Chen Changfu took over gently, in the tone of a man who is being reasonable at you. Any trip beyond 5 days requires leadership approval, and I'll be frank, Chin Ho. I would not have approved such a business trip anyway. Understood. Then Guo Lihua, who could not leave it, said, and it seems you ate very well while you were being undisciplined. Section Chief Guo, I said, you sent staff on a work assignment. Did you expect them to buy their own meals? Is this like the old society where landlords made people work without feeding them? I don't think Section Chief Guo should be carrying around feudal exploitative ideas like that. The specialist in political labels received a political label, and I watched him actually panic. My family has been poor peasants for generations, so poor that several generations shared one pair of trousers. I took the slip out of my pocket and put it on the table. Zhou Hongwei got his glasses on. Very good, he said. Very good. Chen Chengfu read it 3 times and said absolutely nothing, because 90 seconds earlier he had been using my name as an example of indiscipline. Guo Lihua, who could not see it from where he sat, was still talking. I heard him say, half to himself, what is it this time? 500 tires instead of 250. Then he leaned over and saw it. This is A vehicle collection slip for Yellow River 162 heavy trucks. And then he stopped entirely, like a machine that has been switched off at the wall, when Guoliang, who ran the freight department, was on his feet. 15 10-tonners. That's the capacity of 40 old Jifeng. Chinho, if Guo Lihua doesn't buy you dinner, I will. And then Zhou Hongwei, mildly, looking at the slip. It says in stock, collect at your convenience. Which was the part that finished him. Because Guo Lihua had reported to this room that there were no trucks available anywhere at any price. That was no longer twisting the knife. That was flogging the corpse. I picked the slip back up, folded it, put it in my pocket, and said thank you for your time, and walked out without naming a price. Behind me I heard Zhou Hongwei say to the room, the faster he runs, the higher the price he'll ask. It took half an hour. Chen Changfu poured the tea himself this time, and apologized, and explained that the personnel department had unfortunately been overzealous and that this would be corrected. Ming did it in a small room with one witness, which is how a man apologizes without spending any prestige. Then the two old foxes complimented each other for a while, and I sat and drank tea and let them. So, said Zhou Hongwei eventually, what do you want? There are 48 apartments. Do you think it's possible to allocate one to me? Chen Changfu passed the ball to Zhou. Zhou passed it back. I have watched political dramas with less footwork. The problem was obvious, and neither of them wanted to say it, a 16-year-old with under a year of service in front of men with 30, so I took it off the table for them. You can also allocate the apartment to my father, Hou Guozhang. Both of them stopped. Because there is no argument against my father's seniority. There is no argument at all. Zhou Hongwei sat back and let out a long breath. This Hou Guangming. Ming really came prepared. My mother killed a chicken. Not a market chicken, a village chicken, obtained from a relative and carried home on a bus, stewed with dried mushrooms, and my father opened the good bottle without being asked. I heard you caused trouble again, my mother said, over the pot. And the company is going to take your money. They're not taking anything. They're giving us an apartment. My brother stopped with a chicken bone in his mouth. Our family is going to live in a building? Which brings me to the following morning, when Fang Jianjun came at me with the red notebook again, a veterinarian from the Animal Husbandry Bureau, a dance instructor, and all three daughters of a driver from the Grain Bureau, simultaneously, which I did not consider a serious proposal. How do you already know about the apartment? Chen Bo told me. His sister told him. And who told his sister? Fang Jianjun looked at me with enormous sympathy. Your little brother. Ming announced it at school. This family-betraying wretch. The 15 Yellow River trucks arrived and were parked in the most visible row of the lot, and for 2 days the drivers climbed all over them like children. Springs under the seat, a sleeper berth with a foam mattress, power steering so you could turn the wheel with one hand while eating a bun with the other, and in among the admiration, growing all week, another sound. Hu Guangming hasn't worked a full year. How does he qualify for housing? I've been here 11 years and I've got 2 tile-roofed rooms. Forget you. There are masters with 30 years who've never been allocated an apartment. There is an old line about this. One does not worry about scarcity. One worries about inequality. Which sounds noble until you watch it operate, and then you notice it does not mean everyone should have something. It means that if you have something and I do not, there will always be somebody willing to take it off you so that we can be equally without. At the offices of the Qinghe Daily, a young reporter named Jin Qiyu was opening reader letters, which was the job they gave you before they let you have a job. I had never met him, and he was about to become my problem. One of them was anonymous. A 16-year-old employee at the transport company, less than a year of service, had been allocated one of the new apartments. Jin Qiyu wanted very badly to be an uncrowned king, so he did not hand it to his editor. Ming went and stood outside the transport company gate at shift change and asked people, and every single person he asked confirmed it with feeling. His editor read his notes and put them down. It's hearsay. Nobody has actually seen the allocation list. They posted on the 1st of February. Then go on the 1st of February. There was a crowd at the notice board before the list went up, mostly men in their 50s. Zhou Hongwei watched them from his window upstairs and, I found out later, was thinking about 1949 and the dividing of land and houses and livestock in the villages and the particular quality of that arithmetic. If your mule had 2 jin more meat on it than my mule, we were going to be here all afternoon. Jin Qiu introduced himself as a reporter, and the crowd opened up around him like a flower. Comrade reporter, you have to stand up for us. The loudest was a man called Zhang Wei, 30 years of service, joined in 55, 6 people in 2 rooms. What is it you want? The reporter asked, pen out. We want Hou Guangming to give up that apartment. And then I arrived because of course I did. Jin Qiu was good, I will give him that. Ming did not accuse me of anything. Ming set a very nice trap. Comrade Hao, these are older workers with decades of service. In our tradition, isn't it right for the young to yield to their elders? Absolutely, I said, and I said it loudly, and I said it with enthusiasm. I completely agree. Housing should be prioritized for old comrades. Whoever has the deepest seniority should be the one who gets the apartment. Ming blinked. So you'll yield? I would love to yield the pear like Kong Rong. Unfortunately, I don't have a pear in my hand. How can a man yield something he isn't holding? And that was the first moment Jin Qiu felt the ball go into his own net, and he did not yet know why. The list went up. 48 names. The crowd read them out loud, one at a time, the way crowds do, and Ho Guangming was not among them, and the whole thing sagged like a tent with the pole taken out. 30 men had come to demand justice, and there was nothing to demand it about. Then somebody found it. Ho Guozhong, accounting, early retirement. That's his father. And they were off again, louder, because now it was a trick, a feint, a swindle. Jin Qiu turned back to me with real satisfaction and asked his question again. So I stepped up onto the low wall so they could all see me. The reporter is right, I said. Apartments should go to the old comrades. That is exactly why this one was allocated to my father. Zhang Wei started immediately. In 1955, when I joined, Accountant Hao was just a... And he stopped. Ming stopped because he had got as far as remembering that in 1955, when he arrived with nothing, the man who issued him his bedding and his enamel basin and his first month of meal tickets was Hao Guozhong. I gave them the rest at full volume. In 1952, the Handong government founded the Qinghe Transport Brigade, 2 horses, 3 mules, 7 carts, 13 men. My father was one of the 13. There are 3 of those 13 left in this company, Secretary Zhou, Chairman Ho of the Union, and my father, 33 years. Nobody moved. If anyone is unconvinced, step forward now. Let's line up by seniority. Nobody stepped forward. Zhang Wei was looking at his shoes. Jin Qiu stood there with his notebook open and absolutely nothing to write in it. Ming had come for a story about privilege. What he had was a human interest piece about a founding member of an enterprise finally getting a home after 33 years, which is a fine article and a career-ending waste of a morning. When it comes to comparing fathers, I'm afraid you cannot beat me. I should tell you why my father, one of the 13, spent 33 years as an ordinary accountant. The family had been comfortable before liberation. Ming had been to middle school. My mother had been educated at a church girls' school. In the 50s, that was a bad set of facts, and in the years after that, it was a dangerous one, and my father's entire survival strategy for 3 decades was to be quiet, then quieter, and then quieter than that. It worked. Ming was never criticized. Ming was never struggled against. And he was also never promoted, never listed, never mentioned. And by the time the country stopped caring about any of it, he had become so thoroughly invisible that the enterprise he helped found had simply forgotten he was there. That was the man who did not want to move out of the family compound because his chess partners lived there. We moved in the spring. The new year was on the 20th of February that year, the latest it had fallen in a century. Moving in 1985 meant whitewashing the walls yourself, having the cement floor swept, and carrying your furniture up the stairs. If you didn't have furniture, you made it, or you hired a carpenter for a week and fed him. Everything we owned went up in one handcart. The only electrical appliance in it was the radio. 2 months later, the freight department posted a notice. They were recruiting dispatchers, 70 or 80 applicants for 1 or 2 positions, decided by written examination, and I put my name down before lunch. Let me explain why, because it is not the obvious reason. I should explain what I was actually after. A dispatcher in a transport company is not a clerk. Every piece of the operation runs through the dispatch office. Which truck, which route, which cargo, which yard, which driver. It is where the entire business becomes visible at once. That is why practically every senior person in that company had been a dispatcher, and it is exactly why Fang Jianjun had not, which is why Fang Jianjun was going to retire as a workshop director. No matter how well he repaired a truck, the workshop was his ceiling. The bonus was 35 yuan, which was the ceiling the state had set, so the money was not the point either. The point was that I did not want a career at that company. The company was going to be gone in 12 years. What I wanted was the information. Because in 1985, there was no mechanism in the entire country for connecting a person who had goods with a person who needed them. None. No advertising to speak of. No directories. No telephones in most offices. No way for a factory in one county to learn that a factory in the next county was sitting on exactly the raw material it was short of. Those with goods could not sell them. Those who lacked goods could not buy them. And every single truck in that region drove past both of them, and the dispatch office knew where every truck went. I studied for it like a maniac. Not the theory, the map. Every road in Handong, the length, the surface, the grade, the average time, the towns, the places you could get food at 2 in the morning, and importantly, the stretches where the road bandits worked. A good dispatcher does not send a truck out and back. Ming builds a loop, so the truck is never empty. Fang Jianjun came round with the notebook, heard what I was studying for, and went quiet in a way I did not expect. That is the face of a man watching his best subordinate prepare to leave. It's fine, he said eventually. This workshop's going to be split off as its own repair plant one day. I'll be the director of it. Ming was right, incidentally. It happened. And when the transport company went down in the 90s and shed people by the hundred, the repair plant survived because a repair plant has customers and a transport company has a fleet. Meanwhile, Wen Guoliang, who ran the freight department and had promised to buy me dinner, was doing something to the examination paper. Ming crossed out the easy questions. Then he wrote one of his own. In August, the company will purchase 60 trucks. They must be distributed between the Dongguan yard and the Nanshan yard. How would you distribute them, and why? Ming showed it to Zhang Tao, the dispatch team leader, who read it and smiled the smile of a professional. It's a trick. Nanshan is the smaller yard, so the obvious answer is put more at Dongguan. But Nanshan is where the factories are, so the cargo is there. Correct answer. Weight them toward Nanshan. You answered incorrectly, said Wen Guoliang. All 60 trucks go to Dongguan. Why? August is flood season. Every year we're conscripted for flood defense duty, and every year the vehicles have to move at short notice. And Nanshan is on the far side of the railway. The only way in or out is the culvert under the tracks, and in heavy rain the culvert goes underwater. Zhang Tao sat down. This question has a double bottom. Even I fell into it, and I run the dispatch team. I was at home revising, so for the next few minutes I have to hand the story over to other people. Zhang Tao cut the exam papers onto a wax stencil and ran them off on the mimeograph, that machine with the roller and the ink that smells like a headache, and threw the used stencil into the waste paper basket. The man who ran the print room fished it out, flattened it, and made a copy. By the end of the day, the paper was on Guo Lihua's kitchen table. Guo Hao came home singing the theme from the Huo Yuanjia serial, which had been on the New Year Gala and which every young man in the country was murdering that spring, including, through a wall, at me. Ming found his father hunched over the exam. Where did you get that? If I hadn't got these questions, said Guo Lihua without looking up, then with your limited abilities you could not hope to pass the dispatcher examination in your lifetime. Which is, in fairness, an accurate assessment. Memorize them, every answer, and keep your mouth shut. Then he came to the last question, worked out that it was a trick about the size of the yards, wrote the clever answer, and sat back extremely pleased with himself. This little trap, he thought, cannot fool me. 80-something of us in the hall. Guo Hao stood at the front with his hands behind his back. Ming looked around at the rest of us with the expression of a man attending his own coronation. Then I heard him say to a friend, not quietly, "They're all here to keep the crown prince company." Then the papers came round, and he sat down and started writing immediately, which was in itself a confession, but nobody was watching him except me. I read the paper and thought, with mild indignation, that I remembered these exams being easier 2 years from now. Then I got to the last question, and I remembered a summer 4 years later. Rain for 3 days. Wen Guoliang moving every vehicle out of Nanshan before it started, on a hunch, and taking a certain amount of ridicule for it. Then the embankment gave way upriver, and the city called for every truck in the district, and not one vehicle from the Nanshan yard could get out because the culvert under the railway was 4 feet deep in water and stayed that way for 2 days. I wrote all of it. Zhang Tao marked the papers that evening. Guo Hao, 90 out of 100. And then he came to mine and said out loud, to an empty office, "Ming got the last question right." This is a question that I got wrong. Wen Guoliang, as I heard it afterward, went through Guo Hao's paper twice, then put it down and said flatly, "The test leaked." "How do you know?" Ming turned the page round and pointed at one line, "Turn onto Hongbing Road." "That road," he said, "has been called Yaxing Road again since '78. It was renamed Hongbing during the campaign against the Four Olds. Nobody under 35 calls it Hongbing Road." This answer was written by a man of my generation. And then, because he was thorough, he added, "Guo Lihua was a dispatcher in exactly those years." And the other one, Hu Guangming? Even if he'd had the questions in advance, someone would have had to give him the correct answers. You are the dispatch captain, and you got the last question wrong. Who was going to hand him that? Ming tapped the paper twice. 250 tires, then 15 Yellow River heavy trucks. This kid is extraordinary. The freight department needs people like this. They posted the scores on the board, and only the top place would be taken. I stood at the back, where I could see faces. The crowd read them aloud, from the bottom. 20, 10, 30, 3 zeros, which took a moment to get past. The first passing mark was a 60. Guo Hao, 90 points. The crowd made a genuine noise. Guo Hao's chest came out, and he stood there in the sunshine being envied, which as far as I could tell was the primary thing he wanted from life. Ho Guangming, 100 points. And then a silence of several full seconds, which is a very long silence in a crowd, before everybody moved toward the board at once. Guo Hao did not move at all. I watched him not moving. I had the questions in advance, and I scored 90. How did he score 100? Ming cheated, he shouted, at the board, at the crowd, at nobody. Ming definitely cheated. Everyone else scored 20 or 30, I said, 60 at the very best. If I copied off them, how exactly did I copy my way to 100? Is that the joke you're going with? The crowd laughed at him, which is the only currency he had, and I watched him spend the last of it. Ho Guangming, you just wait. And he ran. Ming went straight to his father, which was the single stupidest available option. Dad, this is your fault. The answers you gave me were wrong. Be quiet. Guo Lihua was looking at the door. These walls hear things. Ming got 100. And that landed on Guo Lihua like 1,000 arrows because he had written those answers himself at his own kitchen table, and he had been certain they were worth 100. They went to demand an explanation from Wen Guoliang, and when they arrived I was already sitting in his office with a cup of tea, and I would like to state that the only thing missing was melon seeds. Wen Guoliang put my paper on the desk and read the last answer out to them. August, flood season. The railway culvert at Nanshan floods and the yard is cut off. Ming looked up. How did I not think of that? Guo Lihua, conceding, could not stop himself from adding, of course, one still has to wonder whether he copied. Selecting a dispatcher, said Wen Guoliang, is a serious matter. If we find anybody cheating, that person will not be permitted to participate in any future selection process. Ming said it looking directly at Guo Hao, and then, pleasantly, as they were leaving, Little Hao, do you happen to know where Hongbing Lane West Road is? No idea. Director Guo, said Wen Guoliang. That is a name only people of our age would know. Guo Lihua walked out into the yard, and I heard him say it to himself on the steps. I tried to steal a chicken and lost the bait. On my last day, the whole workshop came over and stood around me, and Fang Jianjun gave me the send-off he was capable of. Work hard over there, don't embarrass our repair shop. And he meant it, and he was sorry to lose me, and I had a lump in my throat about it right up until he took the red notebook out of his pocket, at which point the moment passed. At home, there were 2 yuan of braised pork head meat and a bottle of Qinghe Tech, and my father poured me a cup without being asked, which at 17 was a coronation. Double celebration as it happened, because my brother-in-law had just been transferred into the street committee office, which was the beginning of an actual political career. Deputy section level. Ming was extremely pleased. I knew he would never get past director of a street committee, but I had the good sense to keep it to myself and pour him another one. The story went around the company within the week. 17 years old. Acting cadre, an apartment, and now the most promising desk in the building. There were men who had put in 30 years working toward one of those 3 things. Zhang Tao, who ran the dispatch team and who I had assumed would resent me, took the opposite approach entirely and adopted me. Qinho, Tianjin, get your things. What's in Tianjin? I'll buy you the most authentic Jianbing guasi in the world, and gubali baozi. 32 of us were going. I did the arithmetic in about 4 seconds. We're going to collect vehicles. Zhang Tao stared at me. How could you possibly know that? Because 32 men, and no cargo, and a train, means 30-something drivers going to fetch 30-something things that need driving. The port at Tianjin had cleared a batch through customs. The Qinghe Foreign Trade Bureau had a quota for 30 cars, and the Foreign Trade Bureau, like every other bureau, had almost no drivers, whereas the transport company had 200. So we would fetch their cars, and they would give us 2 of them for the trouble. The cars were Polish, Polonaise. The Chinese nickname translates roughly as Polla milk, which nobody could explain to me then, and I have never bothered to look up since. A reworked Fiat 125 with 4 round headlights, and in Beijing or Shanghai they were being quietly dumped into taxi fleets, and in Qinghe they were going to look like spaceships. 10 hours on a hard seat, playing cards with the drivers, and then Tianjin in the evening. Trolley buses with their 2 arms up on the wires. The first coin-operated telephone booths I had seen in this life. A neon advertisement for Phoenix bicycles glowing on the front of the Kuanyu Bazaar, and in the Central Park, painted boards promoting late marriage. I bought a bag of Manhwa for my brother, who is a bottomless pit, and went to bed at 9 because inside this 17-year-old there was a middle-aged man who wanted 8 hours. Zhang Tao was in the next room eating dry rations with pickles, which is what a man does when he is too worried to go out. The deputy director of the Foreign Trade Bureau hasn't signed the release. Without his signature, they won't hand over the cars. So catch him in the morning. Ming's never in his office. I gave him the bag of Manhwa and said I'd come with him. We were at the Foreign Trade Bureau at dawn. Du Mingliang was not there. We were there at 8, not there. At 9, the office director, a man called Guo, took pity on us and explained. There was a Japanese guest, an automotive engineer, in town to inspect the Tianjin auto plant, and Du Mingliang was chained to him from morning until night. So where's the problem? The translator, said Director Guo, and made a face like a man describing a leak. We borrowed a lecturer from Tianjin University. His Japanese is fine. His automotive Japanese is non-existent. Every time the guest says a technical term, the whole thing stops dead. The inspection has been stalled for 2 days. Director Du is talking about driving to the capital to borrow a proper translator, and that's 150 kilometers each way, so we lose another day. I can find you a Japanese translator with professional automotive vocabulary. Zhang Tao pulled my sleeve so hard he nearly took the shoulder off my jacket. Don't talk nonsense. You cannot deceive the leaders of the Foreign Trade Bureau. I pointed at my own chest. The translator you want is standing in front of you. Director Guo looked at me for a second, then went to a cabinet and came back with a letter in Japanese and put it in my hands, which was the correct instinct. I read it out loud and then translated it. An hour later, Du Mingliang came through the door at speed, crossed the room, and shook Zhang Tao warmly by the hand. This must be the translator. That's my dispatcher, said Zhang Tao. Then who? Everybody looked at me. How is it just a student, said Du Mingliang. This is ridiculous. Underestimated again. It happens so consistently that I have stopped taking it personally and started taking it as a tactical advantage. Ming demanded a test, which was reasonable, and they brought in the lecturer from Tianjin University, Teacher Fang, who turned out to be a genuinely decent man. Don't be nervous, student, he said kindly, and asked me something in Japanese. I answered in Japanese. Then I asked him something back. Teacher Fang listened to himself struggle for about 10 seconds and then did the thing that made me like him permanently. Ming turned to Du Mingliang and said, in terms of spoken language, this student is much better than I am. Which was true. Ming had learned Japanese from books, in a country nobody could leave. I had learned it by working under cars with men who swore in it. Then Du Mingliang started firing vocabulary. Stopper. Power steering. Filter. I gave him the terms and then explained what each part actually did because a translator who knows the word and not the object will get you killed in a technical meeting. Du Mingliang leaned toward Director Guo and said out of the corner of his mouth, "What's that young comrade's name again?" And then he turned around with the face of a smiling Buddha. "Teacher Hu, you've come at exactly the right time. 10 minutes earlier, I had been just a student. I have never seen a promotion happen faster." Zhang Tao bought the gubuli dumplings, 1 yuan a bag, from an actual state-run shop with a queue outside it, and they were the real thing, skin like paper, 18 folds, filling that ran down your wrist. And before I agreed to anything, I did what I should have done in Jicheng. Director Du, I'd like an official letter, with the bureau's stamp, explaining to my company's personnel department exactly where I am and on whose instructions. I was not getting caught by that particular trick twice. Zhang Tao took the cars home. Before he went, he pushed a fold of notes into my hand and said, "Better to be rich on the road than poor at home," and then took the sack of Manhwa to deliver to my parents. And definitely don't give it directly to your younger brother. Ming's very greedy. Ming had met my brother once. Du Mingliang, meanwhile, wanted to know my height and shoe size because a translator standing next to a foreign guest must be in a suit and leather shoes. They were not new. They were pressed. And I had to give them back afterward. His secretary Qin Feng tied the tie for me, standing very close, with tremendous concentration. Isn't tying a tie the same as tying a red scarf? This is how our bureau chief does it. It was, in fact, exactly the same as tying a red scarf, and I looked like a young pioneer who had gone into finance. The guest was Tanaka Takeshi, engineer, of a company whose name in Chinese was Tianfeng, which you would know as Toyota. Ming was in Tianjin to inspect the auto plant, and behind that was a bigger picture, which I had the unfair advantage of already knowing. Shanghai had gone with Volkswagen, and now every Japanese manufacturer in existence wanted a door into China. Toyota's real target had been the First Automobile Works, and the First Automobile Works had looked down its nose at them because the settled opinion of that decade was that European and American cars were superior to Japanese ones. If you ignore me today, tomorrow you will not be able to afford me. History does love a straight line. I bowed when I met him. Properly, from the waist, at the correct angle. Tanaka Takeshi nearly dropped his briefcase because in that entire trip not one Chinese person had bowed to him, and because a 17-year-old in a borrowed suit doing it correctly was not on his list of things that might happen in Tianjin. Then I spoke, and he made a sound. I want to be fair to Teacher Fang here. Ming was a good man doing an impossible job, but his Japanese carried a heavy Tianjin accent, so to Tanaka's ear the man sounded like a variety show. And whenever a technical term arrived, Teacher Fang's face went completely blank, in the manner of a certain yellow duck-shaped creature. You could watch all 3 questions cross it. Where am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? They put us in the Astor Hotel, which had housed American presidents, and I ate steak and drank coffee like a foreign guest, and Tanaka Takeshi drank Chinese liquor every evening with the enthusiasm of a man on an expense account in a country where it costs nothing. And on the 3rd evening, watching him do it, I thought, it is 1985. The 5th generation Corolla has been on the market for 2 years. Perhaps I can take this opportunity to rip off Toyota. I got to breakfast before he did and had a coffee waiting because a hungover man will agree to almost anything before the second cup. I also brought a briefcase. Ming was in an expansive mood. Ming offered me a job sincerely in the branch office they intended to open. Then I started talking about the Corolla, first generation 1966, second 1970, first with the 5-speed, third 1974, which became the best-selling car in the world. Fourth, 1979, 10 million units. Fifth, 1983, twin cam. Tanaka put his cup down and apologized to me. Forgive me, when you started I thought you were bragging. The 5th generation Corolla is a good car, I said, but the accelerator pedal doesn't seem to be quite perfect. The temperature of the table dropped about 10 degrees. There are reports in the American market, I said. A driver touches the pedal and the engine revs far more than expected. The car lunges. That, said Tanaka Takeshi, was improper operation by individual users. Really? I thought it was because there's a gap in the pin component of the pedal assembly and it sticks. Ming stopped breathing for a moment. I watched him do it. Then he retreated behind his coffee cup and said something about the supplier, Denso, and how these matters are complex. So I opened the briefcase and took out an article. Typed. In Japanese. With diagrams. I've written this up, I said pleasantly. I'm not sure where to submit it. There's the British magazine Car. There's the American one, Car and Driver. There's the German Automotor Unsport. Or I could send it to a Japanese publication, which would at least save me the trouble of translating it into English. Tanaka Takeshi stood up and shouted one word across the restaurant of the Astor Hotel. Yamete. Let me establish that I was not inventing any of this. Toyota had trouble with accelerator pedals for a very long time. Corolla, Camry, Land Cruiser, and later Lexus. In the 80s, to save cost, they went to a new pin design, and the new pin could stick, and the company spent years declining to discuss it. I knew because in the 90s, I replaced those pedals with my own hands on old Corollas in a workshop in Osaka, over and over, until I could do it without thinking. Also, since I know somebody is going to ask, the two-door version of that 5th generation is the AE86, yes, that one, tofu delivery, I'm aware. Tanaka Takeshi sat back down and offered me $1,000 for the article. No. 2,000. No. This greedy fellow. Ming said it in Japanese to the tablecloth and then in a much politer register. Mr. Hu, may I ask exactly how much money you want? I held up both hands, all 10 fingers. $100,000. $100,000 was 10 years of Tanaka Takeshi's salary, and he made a noise like a kettle, so I made a concession, and I would like you to watch this concession closely. I can accept Japanese yen instead, 25 million. Which at the exchange rate that summer was the same money, and which he received as a gesture of goodwill. Then I gave him the thing he actually needed, which was not a price. It was an argument he could use upstairs. Mr. Tanaka, if you don't report this, and it costs your company money later, then the responsibility is yours. If you report it, and your superior refuses to act, then the responsibility is your superior's. Ming was on the telephone within the hour, on the Foreign Trade Bureau's international line, because foreign trade bureaus were the only offices in the country that could place a call to Japan without applying for permission first. I was not in the room. I got the reconstruction later, and I treasure it. His superior in Japan, a man called Suzuki Kenji, said, "Why doesn't he simply rob a bank? For $100,000, I might as well hire a killer." That might be difficult, said Tanaka. This is China. I imagine even the Yakuza would find it hard here. 5 minutes of silence on an international line, which at those rates is its own kind of luxury. We'll give him the money. And then, immediately, this Chinese man's behavior constitutes extortion. Once he takes the money, he will be caught with it in his hands. Contact the police. Notify our embassy. I want that greedy fellow in prison. 2 days later, a courier from the Fuji Bank arrived with 3 bank drafts, 10 million yen, 10 million yen, 5 million yen. Tanaka Takeshi laid them out on the table and looked at them with something close to affection. That is enough to buy a nice apartment in Minato Ward. Ming was thinking. In his eyes, these 3 drafts are Ho Guangming's death warrant. I came in, sat down, picked up each draft, checked it, and slid all 3 back across the table to him. Ming nearly came out of his chair. Is there a problem? 25 million in cash cannot be brought through customs, mister. How? This is the only... Shouldn't we sign a contract first? And I took out of my briefcase a document titled Agreement on the Transfer of Rights to a Literary Work, and, underneath it, a manuscript of about 100 pages. Corolla Maintenance Manual. Tanaka Takeshi read the title page twice. Our Tianfeng company has world-class engineers. Why on earth would we buy your maintenance manual? The price is the same, 25 million. There's no additional charge. I am not authorized to purchase a maintenance manual. Then I'm afraid I have to terminate the transaction, I said, and reached over and picked up the contract. Ming put his hand flat on the table. Here is the reasoning, and it is the single most useful thing I brought back from my first life, in which I did 100 million yuan of business and was cheated in every way a person can be cheated. If I sell you one article about a defect in your product and you pay me $100,000 for it, that is a settlement. In most countries, there is a word for that, and the word is blackmail, and the moment the money touches my hand, I am holding the evidence. If I sell you a book, and the book happens to contain a chapter about the petal, that is an author receiving a fee for a manuscript. It is a normal commercial transaction between a writer and a publisher. It is legal in Japan, it is legal in China, and it is legal in every jurisdiction that Suzuki Kenji could conceivably reach me in. Like a photographer who publishes a book on photographic technique and inadvertently includes, as illustrations, the pictures of a certain celebrity in a certain hotel corridor, Tanaka Takeshi went very quiet, and I watched him work out that his superior's plan had just died on the table, because there is no police force on earth that will arrest a man for selling a repair manual. Ming was still hesitating, so I gave him the last one. Mr. Tanaka, a subordinate's achievements are his superior's achievements. A superior's mistakes are his subordinate's mistakes. You know this better than I do. Ming signed. 25 million yen. That was the first money I ever had. And because I was in a good mood, I gave him something for free. The Tianjin plant is not going to form a joint venture with you. This inspection is a waste of your time. And the Foreign Trade Bureau has no authority over that plant whatsoever, so nothing they promise you means anything. Tanaka Takeshi bowed and asked me formally to explain. Daihatsu, the charade. Ming knew instantly what I meant, and I watched him not want to believe it. The Tianjin plant was going to build the Daihatsu charade under license, which in China would become the Xiaoli, which would become the taxi of an entire generation, in a red so specific that I can still see it. Ask yourself why Daihatsu is willing to sell it, I said. It's being discontinued. If it were a current model in production, they would never let it go. Tianjin gets complete knockdown kits and then builds it themselves. Once you can build a car yourself, what do you need a joint venture partner for? At the friendship store, where you could only pay in foreign exchange certificates, Tanaka bought a piece of calligraphy. This one has a lot of characters, he explained, and I do not understand it, so it must be very well written. It was Susha, the one about Red Cliff. Japanese businessmen of that generation would buy anything connected to the Three Kingdoms. Ming gave me 100 yuan in foreign exchange certificates as a parting gift, which on the black market was 330 yuan, which was 10 months of a worker's wages. Du Mingliang paid me 50 yuan for the translation and, having noticed the certificates, immediately proposed a trade. Ming could obtain a television at factory price from State Factory 712, 14-inch, black and white. Exactly 100 certificates. A black and white set in a shop was 500 yuan, and a color set was 1,000, and neither was available without a coupon and a friend. It was a good deal for both of us, which is the only kind that holds. So I went home on the train with a television in a cardboard box, and 3 bank drafts for 25 million yen sewn into the lining of my jacket. Wealth should not be flaunted, and a television is extremely conspicuous. I spent 10 hours guarding a jacket while everybody in the carriage stared at a box. At the compound gate, Guohao was holding court with a second-hand Sanyo tape player, playing a patriotic ballad at maximum volume to a crowd of about 15. Then the crowd saw the box. I have never seen 15 people relocate so fast. Ming was left standing under a streetlight, alone, with his tape player, singing about his Chinese heart to nobody. 25 million yen was 100,000 US dollars, and on the black market 100,000 US dollars was about a million yuan. In 1985, a man with 1 million yuan was in the top tier of wealthy people in the entire country. I did not spend 1 fen of it. 2 reasons. The first is that in 1985, nobody knew where the policy on private enterprise was going, and walking into industry with 1 million yuan and a 17-year-old face was a way to become an example rather than a businessman. The second reason is that the Plaza Accord was going to be signed in September, and after it, the yen was going to gain about 20% against the dollar inside 3 months. Sit still for 3 months and make 20%. That is a better return than any business I could have started, and it required me to do absolutely nothing, which happens to be a thing I am excellent at. Which is also, incidentally, why I asked Tanaka Takeshi for yen instead of dollars, and why he went home believing he had saved his company the conversion fee. At work, when Guoliang finally asked about the Japanese, I had the answer ready. My father had studied it in school under the occupation, when Japanese was compulsory across North China, and had taught me at home. Wen Guoliang nodded and did not ask a single follow-up question, and I understood why. Ming had heard that old Hu Guozhong's family background was not proletarian, and he was too decent a man to pick at a scar. That autumn, the wage reform came through nationally. They abolished the 8-grade scale and abolished the 35 yuan ceiling on bonuses and brought in floating pay, which meant that from that month onward, the more cargo a driver hauled, the more he earned. No ceiling. The golden age of state-owned road freight started that week, and almost nobody in the building understood what had just happened to them. Dispatchers came in 2 kinds. Field dispatchers went out and found the cargo. Planning dispatchers sat in the office and decided where every truck in the fleet went. New men always started in the field. Wen Guoliang put me straight into planning. Let me give you the economics, because they are extraordinary. I had these numbers in front of me every single day. Diesel was 10 fen a liter. The freight tariff was set by the state at 16.5 fen per ton kilometer. An old Jifeng with a trailer carried 4 tons plus 4.5, and on a decent road, it covered 400 kilometers a day, which came to 561 yuan of revenue in one day, and 8 to 10,000 yuan a month from one truck. We had 200 trucks. 2 million yuan of gross profit a month, which was more outrageous than the tobacco business, except that 55% went straight out in tax and most of the rest belonged to the state. Nobody in that building thought of themselves as running a money printing machine. They thought of themselves as fulfilling a plan. The canteen was doing pork stir fried with garlic sprouts, and the cook gave me an extra half ladle. Zengling County had a bumper harvest, he said. Weather's turned warm. They rot fast. I went back to my desk and pulled the cargo applications and went through them twice. Zengling County. Not one. I circled the 29th of May on my calendar. On the 29th of May, a field dispatcher named Hao Xiang spent an hour on the telephone promising a customer at the cable plant 5 trucks, hung up, called the planning desk to book them, and was told that the trucks had already gone to Zengling. Zengling? Hao Guangming? What right does he have to dispatch the trucks I wanted? Fang Yuan had booked 8. Kang Sheng had booked 7. 20 trucks. A tenth of the entire fleet, gone to a county nobody had requested anything from. The 3 of them went to Jiangtao together, and I want to be honest about the real grievance, which was not the trucks. It was that a 17-year-old had gone straight to the planning desk over the heads of every field dispatcher in the department, and the tree that stands above the forest is the first one the wind breaks. Here is why I sent the trucks. Zengling was the poorest agricultural county in the region. A few years earlier, the agricultural technicians had persuaded the farmers to plant garlic, and in 1984 the sprouts went to Beijing and Shanghai at 5 mao a jin, which was half the price of pork. Men built houses on that. Men got married on that. So in 1985 the planted area went up by a factor of 100. The price collapsed to 1 mao, which was still better than grain, so it was still worth harvesting. Except there was no refrigeration in that country. None. Not in a truck, not in a warehouse, not anywhere between the field and the buyer. And garlic sprouts in warm weather rot in days. The 29th of May was the 10th day of the lunar month, which was market day, which meant that on that one morning, every household in the county would bring its crop into town at once and discover that the market consisted entirely of sellers. Everyone was a seller. There were no buyers. Zengling is also the kind of county where family planning officials got beaten up on a fairly regular basis, and by mid-morning several thousand farmers were walking into the county seat to demand trucks. The county's application had reached our company on the 28th through the normal queue that is 10 to 15 days. 10 to 15 days later there would be nothing to collect but smell, and for a household 700 or 800 jin of sprouts was 70 or 80 yuan, which was a year. At noon, the regional commissioner, Chen Hongjun, personally telephoned Secretary Zhou. Wen Guoliang came out of that meeting the color of paper. It was midday. Every truck in the fleet was 100 kilometers away. Nothing could be back before 4 in the afternoon. Even if there's one truck, Zhou had told him, send it to Zengling. Upstairs in the dispatch office, at that exact moment, Hu Xiang was standing over my desk. Did you take a bribe from the cargo owner? Which is not an insult. That is a charge, and a man removed from the freight department for it does not come back. You need to catch a thief with the goods on him, I said. Zhang Tao, who had bought me dumplings in Tianjin, said, Little Hao, you were in the wrong this time. Fang Yuan suggested I be sent out to the field for a while to learn how things worked, which is the polite way to say demoted. And then Wen Guoliang came through the door at a run. Why are you all standing here staring at Ho Guangming instead of finding me trucks? Ming can't conjure them out of thin air. I put my hand up. Section Chief, I actually can conjure up some trucks, 25 of them. I want to describe the next 4 seconds properly because they were among the finest of my life. Ho Sheng's mouth was still open from the bribery accusation. Zhang Tao had just finished telling me I was in the wrong. And every man in that room worked out simultaneously that the thing I was being accused of was in fact the completed execution of a political assignment from the regional commissioner, the failure of which would have cost jobs from Secretary Zhou downward and would certainly have cost Zhang Tao his. 20 of them are already in Zengling, I said. I think the drivers are probably having lunch by now. Hu Xiang left the room and I did not see him for 2 days. In Zengling, the county committee had been telephoning everybody they could think of for 4 hours and getting nowhere, and in the square outside there were several thousand people with baskets and it was hot. I was counting on these garlic sprouts to pay my kids' school fees. Then somebody heard engines. A column of old Jifang trucks came around the corner of the county road, and a man leaned out of the window of the lead truck with a loud hailer. "Folks, we're from the transport company. We've come to move your garlic sprouts." I have been told by 3 separate people that the noise the crowd made could be heard from the far end of town. Wen Guoliang sat me down afterward and asked me how. I gave him logic because logic was available and the truth was not. The cook mentioned a bumper harvest in Zengling. No applications had come in from Zengling, which for a county with a bumper harvest is impossible unless something is wrong. The crop is perishable and there is no cold chain. Market day is the 10th of the lunar month. The next one is 5 days later, and in 5 days there is no crop left. Wen Guoliang listened to the whole thing without moving. I never imagined you could think it through that thoroughly. Then he turned to the room and said, loudly enough for everyone, "Old Zhang, it looks like you've got a successor. We ran garlic sprouts to Beijing, Tianjin, and Shanghai for 3 days. Commissioner Chen publicly praised the transport company, which made Secretary Zhou glow, because a man 2 years from retirement wants to be remembered for something." Then, Wen Guoliang walked me upstairs to collect. "For 250 tires, said Zhou Hongwei, you asked for cadre status. For 15 heavy trucks you asked for an apartment. What do you want this time?" "Nothing." Ming did not believe me for a second, and honestly, I could see his problem. But I had the apartment, I had the job, and I had 1,000,000 yuan sewn into a jacket, and there was genuinely nothing in that building I needed, which is why, for the first time, the leadership had to make me an offer instead of the other way round. "How about I assign you a vehicle?" I assumed he was making fun of me. Assigned vehicles went to the top 2 men in the company. "There's no 212, said Zhou Hongwei, "but there is a 250. Do you want it? A Xingfu 250, which is a motorcycle, a domestic copy of a Czech Jawa, and in 1985 it was the most glamorous object a young man could sit on. I took the chit down to the yard and collected a machine that had passed through approximately 18 previous owners, most of whom appeared to have been angry with it, at which point I remembered that I did not have a license. I want to explain how licenses worked in 1985 because it is genuinely delightful. Depending on where you were, a driving license could be issued by the Transport Administration, or the Public Security Bureau, or the military, and if you worked for the transport company, they simply stamped one, glued your photograph to it, and handed it over, on the reasonable assumption that a man who works with trucks knows what a clutch is. The motorcycle would not start on the kick, so I had to push it to the workshop, arriving as a man who has been assigned a vehicle and is walking. Meanwhile, in the purchasing department, a clerk delivered the staff distribution to Guo Lihua. It was a bundle of garlic sprouts. The farmers of Zengling had sent several truckloads to the company as a gift. The company had distributed them to every department. And the note that went round said, in so many words, that if Ho Guangming had not sent the vehicles in time, the farmer brothers would not have sent us these. Guo Lihua sat at his desk and looked at the bundle for a long time. Then he tried to get rid of it on the way home, and I would pay money for footage of this. Ming went to put it in the bin by the gate, and a colleague called out to him from 10 meters away, and he had to stand there holding it and having a conversation about the weather. Ming dropped it in an alley, and a public-spirited citizen came running after him shouting, "Comrade, comrade, you dropped something," and he had to say thank you. Ming then tried to post it into a flower bed of 1-meter cypresses, at which point a schoolboy stood up out of the flower bed, pulling his trousers up and looked at him with an expression of profound moral judgment. Ming carried the garlic sprouts all the way home. On the same evening, outside the Dongfang Hong cinema, Guo Hao was working on 2 girls in a floral shirt and toed glasses, and I went past on the motorcycle, which was now running, in a manner of speaking. "So young and he already has a motorcycle," said one of the girls, turning to watch. "Ming must be the son of a high-ranking official. I did not even see them, I heard about it later. That is the best kind." Guo Hao got home in a foul temper and found garlic sprouts on the table and said brightly that he liked garlic sprouts. His father beat him with them. "Nobody in this house is permitted to eat these garlic sprouts." My pay that month was 128 yuan. I collected it from the accounting office. That is the room I had been thrown out of 2 years earlier over 100 yuan error. The woman at the window counted it out and said, with no malice at all, "Your wages are higher than mine now." That was the third month the bonus had gone up because the wage reform was working, and at the departmental meeting Wen Guoliang tried to explain the new formula to the fleet leaders. Ming had a blackboard. Ming had base figures and coefficients and a worked example. 8 fleet leaders watched him with the expressions of sheep watching a lecture on astronomy. Ming drank 3 cups of tea and finally gave up and said, in short, "The more cargo you haul, the bigger your bonus." "Ah," said the fleet leaders, brightening. "Now that the section chief puts it that way, we understand." I was the only person in the room who had followed the formula, which is not a boast. It is the reason I got what came next. 80% of anything above plan went to the company, and the rest stayed in the department, which meant that for the first time in the history of that building, the department had a reason to want more. "I have an idea," I said. "If we do it properly, bonuses in this department could go over 100 yuan." Here was the idea. The tariff was fixed by the state. We could not raise the price. We could not buy more trucks. The fleet was already running at capacity. There was exactly one direction left to go, and it was sideways. Stop selling transport, start selling goods. Buy a truckload of cement from the cement works. Haul it to the cotton mill construction site. Sell it. Collect the freight and the margin. Wen Guoliang looked like I had suggested we rob a bank. Doesn't that seem like profiteering? The supply and marketing cooperatives do exactly this every day. They're state-owned. We're state-owned. Where's the line? For the record, state transport companies did eventually work this out at the end of the 80s when private truckers started taking their business, and their only real advantage over a private trucker was information. They knew who produced what and who needed what, and a man with one truck could never assemble that picture. We already had the picture. We had been sitting on it for 30 years and using it to fill in forms. I wrote it up as a formal proposal. The answer came back, "We will discuss this," and then nothing. The opposition, when I traced it, was not who I expected. It was not Chen Changfu. Chen Changfu was for it, enthusiastically, at every meeting. It was Secretary Zhou, 2 years from retirement, a man who sought not merit but the absence of mistakes. The policy did not explicitly permit it, therefore it was not permitted, and no argument I could make would move a man whose entire remaining career was a countdown, and Chen Changfu's enthusiasm was not enthusiasm. It was a wager he could not lose. If it worked, the general manager had backed a winner. If it went wrong politically, the person who carries that is the first in command, and Secretary Zhou would leave 2 years early, and there was a chair standing empty at the end of that sentence. Zhou Hongwei could see it too, which is exactly why the more warmly Chen Changfu supported my proposal, the harder Zhou dug in against it. Being the first man to eat a crab is a fine thing to be remembered for. It is less fine while you are still holding the crab, and the crab still has a claw. So I stopped pushing upward and made it small instead. 1 pilot, 1 department, 1 product, coal. Because demand was bottomless, because it does not rot, and because in the absolute worst case, we could press it into briquettes and burn it ourselves. Buy from the Yanzhou Coal Group, which was enormous, and sell to the Dongdao Port Authority, which burned coal by the shipload and could not use the local Qinghe stuff because it was high sulfur and stank. And in Wen Guoliang's notebook there was a name from his army days, Luo Yongxin, head of safety at Yanzhou. The banquet at the Yanzhou guest house went well right up until we set a number, 5,000 tons a month. 60,000 a year out of an operation that produced 5 or 6 million. Luo Yongxin put his cup down and started arranging his face. 2 years ago I'd have signed this myself. Now it has to go to the top. Why? And out it came, the way things come out at the 4th round of toasts. Every ton of above plan capacity Yanzhou had was already committed, all of it, to the Wujiang Foreign Trade Department, in exchange for foreign currency. I sat there with a cup in my hand and let him get all the way to the end of it. 2 years earlier, Yanzhou had bought imported mining machinery, 100 machines, and the machines had begun failing constantly. The manufacturer's position was that the fault lay with the mine. Their recommendation was that Yanzhou rebuild its shafts to Argentine standards, and in 1985, Argentina had $3,000 of GDP per head against our 300, so that recommendation was roughly as useful as being told to relocate to the moon. Or alternatively, Yanzhou could purchase the upgrade package, $30,000 per machine, times 100 machines, $3 million. Which Yanzhou did not have, because nobody had dollars, so they had signed away 3 million tons of coal capacity to a foreign trade department in exchange for somebody else's foreign currency. The Wujiang Foreign Trade Department, said Wen Guoliang, is quite ruthless. Up to that point in the evening, Luo Yongxin had treated me as a background character, which was reasonable, since I was an 18-year-old at the end of the table. The manufacturer, I said, that would be the Sakurada Corporation. Ming turned his head. Because there is no reason on this earth for a boy from a truck depot to know the name of a Japanese mining equipment manufacturer, and because the name of the supplier had not been mentioned once. How do you know that? Let me guess at your faults. Clogged suction filters. Yes. Wear on the hydraulic cylinder components. Yes. And their engineers told you the root cause is coal dust entering the clearance between the piston rod and the guide bushing. Luo Yongxin came halfway out of his chair. May I ask how to address this, comrade? No. This teacher. Ming's the treasurer of our department, said Wen Guoliang, who had the sense not to specify further, and who let Luo Yongxin go on believing for the rest of the evening that I was a university graduate. Then the real insult came out. Sakurada would not disclose what the upgrade actually involved. Trade secret. Their engineers would come with their own tools, and Yanju would house them and pay their expenses, and while the work was performed, no Chinese personnel would be permitted to watch. Wen Guoliang was genuinely offended by this. I was not, particularly. I had seen the same thing happen in the 2000s, when foreign technicians serviced tunnel boring machines behind a cordon, and the Chinese engineers stood outside it drinking tea. Director Luo, I said, you've been scammed by Sakurada. Two things were wrong, and neither of them was the coal dust. The first was the seal boot on the piston rod. Bare rubber does not survive that environment. It wants an outer layer of nylon fabric with no pinholes and a steel ring inside it for rigidity, and no rubber workshop in a county town is going to produce that. It needs a serious petrochemical plant. Which means, I said, we're going to Shengli. The second was better. The suction filters were not clogging because of dust. They were clogging because Sakurada had skipped a step. The inside of the hydraulic tank was coated with hammer finish paint. Fine, standard, everyone does it. Except that before you spray it, you phosphate the metal, and Sakurada had not phosphated the metal because phosphating costs money and the customer cannot see it. In a mine, with heat and vibration and moisture, that paint lifts off in flakes. The flakes go into the oil goes into the filter. Their $30,000 upgrade was, I would have bet money, a man with a spray gun doing the job properly the second time and charging you for it. I stopped there and ate a peanut. Oh, teacher, how? Said Luo Yongxin. Just tell me, you're killing me with suspense. Take me down to the equipment and I'll show you, I said, and looked at Wen Guoliang. And Wen Guoliang understood that the moment to mention 5,000 tons a month had arrived. I should say where this came from, because it is one of the few things in my life I paid for properly. At the turn of the century, I dealt in used Japanese construction and mining equipment, which after the Asian financial crisis was practically free if you knew who to call. I sold a Shangxi coal boss a batch of Sakurada machinery out of a bankrupt Indonesian mine, and it fell apart on him, and I could have argued about it for 2 years and won. I paid him back instead, all of it. It cost me everything I had made that year, and then, because I was angry, I spent 6 months finding out why the machines had failed, so I did not deduce the phosphating. I bought that knowledge for about 400,000 yuan, and I have to say the resale value has been excellent. While we were eating peanuts, Yanju's director, Guo Jinkai, was upstairs with an imported calculator working the same $3 million. At the official rate, 9 million yuan. On the black market, 30. Ming had the money. Ming did not have the currency, which was a completely different substance. And if he applied upward for an allocation, he would get a third of it at best, by which time the machines would be scrap. Then his telephone rang, and the technical department told him that the problem had been diagnosed by a visiting engineer from some transport outfit in Qinghai. What do they want? 5,000 tons a month. 5,000 tons? That's all? Give it to him. And he laughed, apparently for some time, and said something about how many trucks a place like that could possibly own. Diagnosis is the hard part. Any junior doctor can carry out the treatment once somebody has told him what the disease is. The engineers opened a hydraulic tank that afternoon. There was no phosphate layer. What happened to the Japanese negotiators is my favorite part of the whole affair, and I was not even present for it. Inoue Hiroshi and his subordinate Yoshida Shinji held their price at 30,000 a machine and continued to insist that no Chinese personnel could observe the work. Halfway through the next session, Guo Jinkai stood up and said he had something urgent and left. And for the first time in 2 years, he referred to the man not as Mr. Inoue, but as him. The interpreter noticed. Interpreters always notice. Inoue explained to Yoshida Shinji that this was a negotiating tactic. You must have heard of China's art of war. It contains many schemes and tricks. They waited a week. During that week, Yanju phosphated its tanks, fitted the nylon and steel seal boots that had been ordered from Shengli, and put the machines back into the shafts, where they worked. At the end of the week, Inoue decided to retreat in order to advance, and went to Guo Jinkai's office to announce, with regret, that he would be departing. Ming was fully expecting to be asked to stay. Very well, said Guo Jinkai. I'll dispatch a car immediately to take the two of you to Shanghai. There was a pause. My luggage, said Inoue Hiroshi, has not even been packed. They drove all day. Inoue spent the journey holding his position, in the manner of a certain park attendant in Hiroshima who painted a sea lion black and white, advertised a panda, and when confronted with a photograph of what was very obviously a sea lion, continued to say, that is a panda. In the evening, the car pulled up outside the Jinan Hotel for foreign guests in Shanghai, and the driver got out and opened the door. Inwei turned around in his seat. "Can you take us back?" The driver spoke 3 sentences of English, and he deployed all of them. "Hello, okay, thank you." Then he got in, started the engine, and produced a 4th. "Goodbye. 5,000 tons a month. I had my coal. The economics of coal in 1986 require a footnote from me because they are insane. It cost 29 yuan to produce a ton. The mine was obliged to sell to the state at 26 yuan 5 mao at a loss because the state was subsidizing the power stations. Market coal was 34. We bought at one price, hauled it from Yanzhou to the Dongdao Port Authority, and sold at another, and the spread was 6 yuan a ton. 30,000 yuan a month on top of the freight, which we were also charging. At the quarterly meeting, Wen Guoliang stood up and reported additional profit of 90,000 yuan. I sat at the back and watched the room instead of him. The room made a noise. Not because 90,000 is a lot of money to a company grossing 2 million a month, because it was 90,000 yuan that existed nowhere in the state plan, and money that is not in the plan stays with the enterprise. Men started doing arithmetic on scraps of paper before he sat down. 80% to the company, 18,000 to the department, 300 people, 60 yuan a head for the quarter, 240 a year, which was half a year's wages. And Secretary Zhou, who had blocked the proposal for 4 months, sat there and watched the division of the spoils begin, and understood that there was no way to take it back. You cannot unpromise 60 yuan to 300 people. By the next morning, the entire company was talking about it. Who came up with such a good idea? This guy is a genius. Who else could it be? Hu Guangming, of course. I was going to the bank every other day to ask about the yen, and by September, the gatekeeper recognized me by the sound of the motorcycle. 100 yen buys 1.6 now, he said. It was 1.5. Then he squinted and started multiplying in his head, out loud, the way people did before calculators, and I said I had about 2,500 yen from a relative, and he said that was very nice, and I went home. The Plaza Accord was signed that month. Within 3 months, the yen was up 20%. My 25 million was now 400,000 yuan at the official rate and 1.2 million on the market. I had done nothing whatsoever for 3 months and made 200,000 yuan, and it was going to run another 50% over the next 3 years, but that is a later problem. The document that told me what to do next came down from the prefectural committee that autumn, and it was about the 3rd sector. Every state enterprise of any size ran a small city inside itself. A bathhouse, a kindergarten, a school, a clinic, a cooperative shop, a briquette works, a garment factory. These were the 3rd sector, and the reform put them on their own balance sheets and made them pay their own tax, which sounds fair until you look at the number. 55% profit tax, applied identically to a freight department turning over 2 million a month and to a bathhouse, which produces steam. I knew exactly what was going to happen because I had watched it happen. Almost every one of those units would fail, and their staff would be the first people laid off years before anyone touched the core business. Out of everything that company owned, 4 things would still be standing at the end: the repair plant, the kiosk at the bus station, the school, and the clinic, which meant that in 1986, when the contracting policy became clear, there was going to be a collection of drowning businesses and nobody willing to swim out to them. I had breakfast with my mother complaining about prices. They were building 6 more apartment blocks. The logistics chief's son was marrying the dance instructor, which meant Feng Jianjun's notebook had finally produced a result, and I would never hear the end of it. And coal briquettes had gone from 2.5 fen to 3.5. I put my bowl down. Our own briquette works had raised its price to the market rate, 28 yuan a ton, which meant the 3rd sector had started saving itself, and the ones that did not move in the next few months were going to die in the next few months. So I went and got my cadre status made real. I was 18 now, and the policy could no longer be used against me. Wen Guoliang pushed it through in a week. Partly because sell-through transport was bringing the company 100,000 a month and refusing me anything had become socially impossible, and partly because every leader in that building had a child of his own waiting to inherit a post. I rode in to sign the paperwork, and there were 200 people standing outside the office building. "Garment factory," said the gatekeeper. "They haven't been paid in 3 months. I sat on the motorcycle and smiled at a crowd of desperate people, which I am not proud of, but there it is. My opportunity had arrived. Let me tell you about the garment factory. 400 workers, which was more than the freight department had. It made everything the company wore: gray tunics for the cadres, blue coveralls for the workers, uniforms for the bus station cashiers, winter coats, school uniforms for the company school, gowns for the company clinic. Under the plan, it had been a wonderful business. In a market, it was a corpse. The director was 53 and counting down to 55 and grandchildren. There were no orders. There had been no wages for 3 months. For people who had grown up under the iron rice bowl, 3 months without pay was not hardship, it was the sky coming down. Some of them were going to arrive at the office with a kitchen knife, one of them was going to use the tree in the yard, and the company could not simply close it because 400 people cannot be put anywhere, and 20,000 yuan a month in basic wages is cheaper than 400 people with nothing to do. I went upstairs to Secretary Joe. I want to contract the garment factory. Ming looked at me for a moment. Wait, slow down. I'm old and my reactions aren't what they were. I'll guarantee wages every month, and I'll pay the company 20,000 a year. At the same hour, in a different office, Chen Changfu was listening to his nephew. Gao Jiang ran the general affairs office of the company clinic and he wanted the garment factory, and he was refreshingly honest with his uncle about why. Ming did not want to save it. Ming wanted the rank. Even if the garment factory really fails, he said, when they transfer me sideways afterward, I'll still be at a higher grade than I am now, which is the whole disease, stated out loud by a man who did not know he was diagnosing it. At the leadership meeting, Chen Changfu proposed his nephew as factory director, and nobody objected because you do not fight over a seat on a sinking boat. And then careful, cautious, 2 years from retirement, Secretary Joe said the word contract and put my proposal on the table. If we hand it to an individual, said Chen Changfu, does it become a private enterprise? We contract farmland to households in the villages, said Zhou. The land remains state-owned. Besides, Hao Guangming is our own cadre. Then why contract at all? Appoint a director. Will your director guarantee 20,000 a year in remittance? And Chen Changfu had nothing, so he made the move that beat me. Let the garment factory employees choose the contractor themselves. Everybody in the room folded immediately, because it is unanswerable. If the workers choose, then no leader has chosen, and if it goes wrong afterward, nobody in that room signed anything. Zhou Hongwei was furious in the way a man is furious when he cannot say why. There is not a company on this earth that selects its chief executive by a show of hands among the workforce, and there was not one word he could say against it out loud, which is how I learned who I was running against. Gao Chang, who in my first life got the job and in 2 years took a factory with 400 workers and sold its sewing machines for scrap metal and was then promoted into the purchasing department. When an enterprise fails, the leading cadres get transferred and go on being leaders somewhere else. The workers get laid off. Fine, I thought. So this is a contest about who can bluff better. Chen Changfu briefed his nephew that evening, and the briefing was, I have to admit, professional. Don't worry about a plan, draw them a pie. But how do I actually give the garment factory employees a promise first? Once you're selected, whether you can deliver on it doesn't matter. Second, wait. Guo Lihua in purchasing would issue the garment factory a stack of orders in advance by pulling next year's procurement forward into this year. And third, find people inside the factory. Older, long service, respected, give them something, and make sure they shout at the right moment. Most ordinary employees, said Chen Changfu, have no mind of their own. Uncle, said Gao Qiang, how did you learn all this? Whose idea was it that you go for factory director in the first place? My mom taught me. Wen Guoliang let me go with visible reluctance. I'm losing a talent here. Before you disappear, take this over to purchasing. It was a table of the driver's heights and sizes, for 2 greatcoats each. I stood in the corridor holding it. A greatcoat lasts a driver 5 years. Nobody has ever needed 2 at once. And purchasing was Guo Lihua, and Guo Lihua was Chen Changfu's man, and Gao Qiang was Chen Changfu's nephew. So they were going to arrive at the vote holding a fistful of orders they had manufactured out of next year's budget. Talking well was not going to be enough. I was going to have to play the big card. The bank came through a woman I knew who ran the counter hall, whose husband hauled freight and whose freight I dispatched, and who therefore arranged me 20 minutes with the branch manager, a man called Zheng. 500,000, working capital. For the transport company garment factory. The face he made was the face of a man who has been asked to lend 500,000 yen to a dying clothing works run by an 18-year-old. So I put a bank draft from the Fuji Bank on his desk. 10 million yen. Manager Zheng counted the zeros with the tip of his pen. 7 zeros, 10 million. Then he sat back and asked the only intelligent question available, which was where an 18-year-old had obtained 10 million yen. And I put the second document on the desk, the agreement on the transfer of rights to a literary work, stamped, signed by Tanaka Takeshi of Tianfeng Automobile. I wrote a book on automobile repair technique and sold it to a Japanese company. Ming read it twice and then worked the abacus for a while, and I watched a specific hope arrive on his face, and I want to record it because it is a wonderful piece of the period. Ming was hoping I would default, because if I defaulted, the bank would take the foreign currency, and foreign currency on the branch's books was the single most beautiful political achievement available to a county-level bank manager in 1986. By the way, since I have seen this written down wrongly, there is a genre of story in which 80s banks hand out enormous interest-free loans to anybody with an idea. This is a fantasy invented by people who have never met a bank. Banks eat interest. That is the entire animal. 7.92% over 6 months. Borrow 500,000, repay 519,800. Nearly 20,000 yuan for the privilege, which is exactly why I pledged 1 draft out of 3, and not all of them. They held the election on the parade ground. I got there 2 hours early with a box. Every state enterprise had one. You did the radio exercises on it in the morning, and on summer evenings, somebody hung a bedsheet at one end and showed tunnel warfare for the 400th time. I will say this for them. The rules were fair. Both candidates speak. Secret ballot. Count in public. Gao Qiang went first, and it was pure pie in the sky, delivered with real warmth. Restructuring. Modernization. A bright tomorrow. Ming had the manner of a man sitting on a heap of cow dung describing a palace. Then a voice from the crowd, right on cue. Don't boast. Show us something real. And Gao Qiang produced the orders. 1,200 sets of bus station uniforms, 500 greatcoats for the freight department, work gloves for the briquette works, and 2,000 medical gowns for the company clinic, which employed fewer than 200 people, a detail that nobody in that crowd stopped to examine. Then he promised 3 more hospitals in the city. His people started the applause and got the chant going. I'm voting for Gao Qiang. Chen Changfu let out a long breath. It seems Gao Qiang has the popular support. Don't conclude so quickly, said Zhou Hongwei. Ho Guangming hasn't gone up yet. I got up on the platform. Section Chief Gao spoke in great detail and at considerable length, I said, which greatly inspired me, so I have decided not to talk nonsense and to keep it short. I let that sit for 1 second. If you elect me today, we pay wages tomorrow. The plants went straight in. You're not even 20. What are you going to pay us with? Big words are cheap. So I came down off the platform, walked over to the iron box I had been sitting on for the entire meeting, and turned to the other candidate. Section Chief Gao. Could you give me a hand and help me move this box up? Ming could hardly say no in front of 400 people. It weighed 60 jin. Ming got one end of it up onto the platform, and because he was on that side, he was the first person in the entire company other than me to see inside when the lid came open. I took out the first bundle and put it on the table. 10,000 yuan. Ming became a 10,000 yuan household while holding the corner of a box. Second bundle. Third. I built them into a wall, 4 across, 5 deep, and it took a while, and nobody said anything at all while I did it. 20 bundles, 200,000 yuan. Not only will I pay this month's wages, I said, I will also make up the wages the company owes you from last month and the month before that. The applause started without anybody leading it, which is the only kind that counts. Chen Changfu's smile stayed exactly where it was and stopped meaning anything. Attacking with capital. Completely without martial ethics. Gao Qiang stood beside the table looking at 200,000 yuan, at the smiling peasant sister and the broad-shouldered worker brother and the sincere soldier uncle and the good-natured minority grandfather printed on all those notes, and I am fairly sure he was close to tears. 400 people, times 50 yuan a month, times 3 months, is 60,000 yuan, gone in one afternoon, out of borrowed money, with no route back. That is what the box was for, not to buy them. To make it impossible for me to retreat, publicly, in front of the people I was asking to trust me. Auntie Wen, whose daughter had been promised a job, worked her row diligently. Vote Gao Qiang. Ming'll pay us next month. Getting this month's wages in my hand, said the woman next to her, is better than being told about next month, and Ho Guangming said he'd make up 3 months. Down the row it went. My son hasn't eaten meat in a month. I have to buy shoes for my second girl. I've got a blind date the day after tomorrow. How am I supposed to sit there if they find out we haven't been paid since spring? They counted the ballots out loud in front of everybody. Ho Guangming, Ho Guangming. Hao Guangming, Hao Guangming. And when the counter finally said Gao Qiang, the crowd actually objected. Can't you count? One of those names has 2 characters and the other has 3. Over 200 votes. It was not close. Chen Changfu pointed at the box. Isn't this vote buying? Guo Lihua agreed that it certainly looked like vote buying. Excellent, I said. Shall I go and tell the garment factory employees right now that Director Guo considers this bribery, so the 3 months of back wages won't be paid after all? Don't! I didn't say that! Ming said it fast, because 400 people who have just been shown their own back pay and then had it taken away do not write letters of complaint. Also, I said, doesn't bribery normally involve actually giving somebody a benefit? Not 1 fen of that 200,000 has been distributed. So far, all I've done is put a box on a table. Zhou Hongwei closed it. Qin Ho. From today, you're factory director Tang. The contract they gave me was outrageous, and I signed it anyway. There was no regulatory framework for this in 1986. The rules would not be published until 88. So the document said that the contractor bore all costs including sick pay, remitted 20,000 yuan a year to the company, and that the company could terminate at any time. No term, no end date. They could take the factory back whenever they liked. The single concession I got, and I fought for it, was 1 week of notice. Everyone in the building assumed I was doing it for my resume. A young cadre takes on a hard job, turns it around or doesn't, and either way, he has led 400 people at 19, and that goes on the file forever. Nobody guessed I was doing it for money. Gao Qiang took Guo Lihua to dinner to thank him for trying. I did not have to buy this account off anybody. Half the restaurant heard it. The Qinghe restaurant was state-owned, which meant you paid at the counter before you ate, and the waitress threw the menu at you. 4 dishes came to 5 yuan 65, and I am told Gao Qiang physically winced at the sweet and sour fish at 150 and the spicy chicken at 260. How did it feel? Said Guo Lihua, standing next to it. Panicked. I have never seen that much money. Ming drank. Although, say what you like. I am now a man who has personally moved 200,000 yuan. Guo Lihua was doing arithmetic. 200 yuan a month is 2,400 a year. 24,000 in 10 years. For 200,000, that boy would have to save for 80 years without eating or drinking. They worked through the possibilities. Selling company vehicles, impossible. Everyone is on a register. Speculating, but the speculators they knew became 10,000 yuan households in 2 years, not 200,000 ones. We're not the police, said Gao Qiang gloomily. Guo Lihua put his cup down so hard the table jumped. We can't find out, but the police can. Isn't there a crime called property of unexplained origin? That's the one. Let's find somebody to report him. 2 visitors arrived at our apartment that evening, in a sequence I could not have arranged if I had tried. The first was Wen Jianhui, an accountant, half a student of my father's, who had not been to see us in years and who arrived with 2 tins of preserved fruit. Ming needed 2,000 yuan. His son's fiancée had specified an imported color television, a washing machine, and a refrigerator as the bride price, which in 1986 was the equivalent of specifying a German car and not the small one. A color set was 1,000, a refrigerator started at 600, a washing machine was 200 to 400, and those were the domestic ones. Ming had heard about the 200,000 from somebody who had been at the meeting. Ming was still working his way toward the subject when a police motorcycle with a sidecar came through the gate of the compound with 2 men in green caps on it. The entire yard followed them up the stairs. I opened the door, and I want to be accurate about my own face, which was the face of a man whose parcel has finally arrived. Come in, and I left the door standing wide open so that everyone on the landing could hear every word. Xiaoming, make tea for the 2 comrades. Officer Zheng Kai was polite and direct. There had been a report. 200,000 yuan. Where did it come from? The bank. I went into the bedroom and came back with the loan documents, red stamps and all, and put them in his hands. Ming was already half out of his chair when he stopped and looked at the figure again. This says 500,000, not 200. I borrowed 500,000. I've drawn 200 so far to pay the wages. Ming stood up and shook my hand for slightly too long. Comrade Hu is truly a good person, putting the workers' wages first. Here's the thing. I had been waiting for that visit since the day I put the box on the platform. 200,000 yuan appearing in the hands of a 19-year-old in 1986 is not something that goes unreported. It was going to be looked into. The only question was whether I would be standing there with an answer. And a bank loan is a beautiful answer because it solves a second problem at the same time. I now had 500,000 yuan, and every single person who heard about it also heard the word, oh. I was not a rich man. I was a man with a debt who wakes up every morning and calculates the interest before he calculates anything else. It worked immediately. Wen Jianhui, who had come to borrow 2,000 yuan for a bride price, heard the word loan, remembered that he had left a kettle on, and left. I heard him on the stairs. I thought Hu Guozhong had got rich. Ming's poorer than I am. 500,000 to the bank, and I gave him 2 tins of fruit. My father, playing the fool with real craftsmanship, spread his hands at the room and said, I don't know either. I didn't dare ask. For about a week, the entire company thought I had lost my mind because in 1986, borrowing money was eating tomorrow's grain today, and the interest was frightening. Guo Lihua ran the numbers to Chen Changfu with real joy. 40,000 a year in interest alone. Ming's dug his own grave. All we have to do is cut off the garment factory's orders and he's finished by summer. And Chen Chengfu told him he was an idiot, which was the correct assessment, and then taught him something nastier. The orders that should go to the garment factory must still go to the garment factory. It's how they go that we can study. If a garment costs 5 yuan to make, we economize. We pay the garment factory 3. Cut the orders and 400 people can see they are being strangled. Cut the price and it is simply thrift. If he refuses the work, he has refused the work. If he takes it, he sews at a loss and dies faster and more quietly. I took over the factory on a Monday. The first thing I did was hand the accountant a striped nylon holdall containing 100,000 yuan and tell him to pay 3 months of wages that day and reimburse the outstanding medical claims the next. The second thing I did was ask him for a receipt, so it went onto the books as an injection of capital and not as a gift. His name was Guo Xiaoping. Ming had been my father's apprentice, which made us something like schoolmates by proxy, and he was the first person I deliberately pulled onto my side. An enterprise is people and money. I could not touch the people, because every one of them was a state employee with a personnel file, but the cash box was mine on day one. The rest of the management was a museum. Deputy Director Gao Yuan, a war veteran from a village, deaf in one ear, who addressed everybody at parade ground volume and had no idea how to run anything, but who would carry out an instruction to the last centimeter and never once ask why. 4 workshop heads, all promoted by length of service, a dozen office staff, not one of whom held cadre status. Which is a disaster if you want a management team, and absolutely ideal if what you actually want is to be left alone. On my third day, I unrolled a poster on the meeting table. A Hong Kong singer in a black leather jacket. I plan to produce this. Leather coats are good, said Gao Jiwan with enormous enthusiasm. Our regiment commander captured one off an American in Korea, wore it 12 years, and it never broke. How much does one cost? Said Guo Xiaoping. In the friendship store in the capital, 400 yuan, which is a washing machine. So we won't use leather, I said. We'll use synthetic. It's a tenth of the price. There was a general groan, and it was justified. The first generation of PVC leather stank, went stiff in the cold, and did not breathe at all, and if you wore a pair of the shoes for a day and took them off at night, your feet came out looking pickled. Not PVC, polyurethane. Second generation. It's soft, it breathes, you can wash it, and at 2 meters, you cannot tell the difference. Because the leather jacket in the 80s was not a Chinese fashion, it was a world fashion. The Terminator wore one. Michael Jackson wore one on the cover of Bad. Every rock musician in this country was about to wear one, and the fashion would run to the end of the 90s, and the real thing cost half a year of a worker's wages. The next morning, the 4 workshops brought me their samples, and I want to describe them because they are among the funniest objects I have ever been handed. Workshop 1 had produced a blue work coverall, in leather, with 4 patch pockets. Workshop 2 had produced a Zhongshan tunic with a stand collar and shoulder pads. Workshop 3 had produced a railway station attendant's uniform jacket with a row of large round buttons down the front. Workshop 4 had produced something I still cannot describe. Relying on these people, I thought, 25 million yen is not going to be enough to waste. So I took a piece of tailor's chalk and did it myself. Shorter. It stops at the waist, not halfway down your backside. The collar folds like this. Zip, not buttons. Using the big round buttons off a military greatcoat on a leather jacket, I said. I genuinely cannot believe that occurred to you. By that evening we had a jacket. The polyurethane came out of a dispatch note I had read 8 months earlier and never quite let go of. A long-distance truck from the south had overnighted in our yard. Cargo, polyurethane resin slurry, consignee, the Qinghe Synthetic Leather Works. So I took the director of the Synthetic Leather Works out to dinner, stir-fried filet, squid, a bottle of gujinggong. And Director Qian, 3 cups in, told me his whole tragedy without being asked. They had bought the dry process technology. They could not make the slurry, so they trucked it 2,000 kilometers from the south at 300 yuan a ton in freight alone, which meant that their finished leather cost more than imported leather, which meant they had shut the line down. If I found you polyurethane slurry inside this province, I said, your costs would drop significantly, wouldn't they? Younger brother Chen, we are not joking here. Within 500 kilometers. If you find me a supplier within 500 kilometers, said Director Qian, this factory will owe you for the rest of my life. It took 1 telephone call the following morning. The Dengzhou Synthetic Leather Complex. 400 kilometers away, they had bought polyurethane technology from Kurirai of Japan. They were a key project of the 6th 5-year plan. In about 8 years, they would be the largest polyurethane base in the country and would eventually outproduce BASF on MDI. They had the slurry. They had been sitting on the slurry. And this is the thing I want you to understand about that decade, because it is the whole engine of everything I did. I have goods and I cannot sell them. You are short of goods and you cannot buy them. And we are 400 kilometers apart. There was no directory, no trade press worth the name, no telephone in most workshops. Enterprises that had grown up inside the plan had lost the ability to look for either raw materials or customers. The way livestock fed at the same hour every day stopped being able to forage. Director Qian did not even say thank you on the telephone. Ming said, "Where are you? I'm coming to find you right now." I did not make a single yuan out of that introduction. I made something better, which was a factory that owed me a favor and a first batch of synthetic leather ahead of the queue. A jacket cost 40 Yuan to make, which sounds like nothing until you learn that a cotton shirt cost 5 or 6. I put the last 400,000 of the loan into materials. Gao Yuan ran the workshops on army principles, which was inefficient and worked, and which I did not touch, because a factory run inefficiently by a man everybody obeys beats a factory run beautifully by a man nobody listens to. And by the end of the month, I had 4,000 jackets in the warehouse, 160,000 Yuan of my money inside them, and exactly 0 sold. The garment factory did not have a single salesman. It had never needed one. The plan told you what to make, and the plan told you where to send it, and a salesman was as necessary as a weather forecast in a cave. Time to find a sales channel. I loaded a sack with jackets, put one on, and rode down to the informal market that ran along the wall by the bus station. And I did not look for customers. I looked for outsiders. At the flared trouser stall, I listened to the trader for 10 seconds. Local accent. No. Next. At the jeans stall, I heard something southern. Wenzhou? Ruian. Finally, I picked over his jeans for a while like a customer, and then, on the way out, asked him casually what he thought my jacket had cost. Ming took the sleeve between 2 fingers and rubbed. 600 at least. Hong Kong Island goods are expensive. 70. Ming looked up. I let him hold it and turn it inside out and smell it, which is what a leatherman does, and I watched his professional certainty come apart. If we weren't in the leather trade, he said slowly, we honestly might not be able to tell. I gave him a card with the factory address. I'm the director of that garment factory. Then I got on the motorcycle. Take the jacket, consider it a sample. If you decide it's no good, wear it. It's a gift. And I left, and I have it on good authority that he put it on and stood in front of the mirror at the back of the stall, turning around for a while, saying, this young man really knows how to do business. I gave away several dozen jackets that afternoon, over 1,000 Yuan of stock handed to strangers, and every single one of them went to somebody from Wenzhou, deliberately. Because a local trader sells in Qinghai, and by next week there would be 4 stalls with my jacket on them cutting each other's throats over 5 Yuan. A Wenzhou trader gets on a train. Within a week those jackets would be in Guangdong, Sichuan, and, I am not exaggerating, Xinjiang. At the factory gate the following morning, 2 men from the same county arrived at the same moment with empty sacks, saw each other, and both walked faster. Here is the arithmetic that made them run. I sold at 70. Real leather on the market started at 300, lambskin at 400, and the styling was 10 years out of date, so he could sell mine at 100 without breaking a sweat. And a bolder man would simply not mention that it was synthetic and take 300 and turn 5 to 1. 1 sack, 1 night on a train to Guangdong, 1 afternoon of getting into the special zone, and 1,000 Yuan a trip minimum. We sold 2,000 jackets in a single day and took over 100,000 Yuan. The factory did not own a safe. Guo Xiaoping and I took the money to the bank on the motorcycle, him behind me with a hold-all, both of us pretending to be relaxed. Down at the market, a trader called Gao hung a piece of cardboard on his rail. Leather jacket, 100 Yuan. Ming had learned that without a price nobody would ask. A young man in flares stopped, and Gao leaned in and lowered his voice. Keep it down, comrade, this is contraband. Smuggled? No wonder it's so cheap. It's precisely because it's contraband, said Gao, that I couldn't get much stock. Buy it now or you won't get one at all. Guo Lihua brought the company order to the factory personally, which tells you how much he was looking forward to it. It had been cut by 1/3. 300 bus station uniforms instead of 1,200. 500 gowns. And a set of prepared explanations about economizing. The gatekeeper, out of pure habit, waved him toward the warehouse with the other wholesalers. Ming found me in an office with no sofa in it, only benches, reading a book called Flax Textile Technology. I'm the director of a garment factory now, I said. I should probably learn something about garments. Ming put the order form on the desk. I did not pick it up. I did not look at it. Section Chief Guo. Our garment factory doesn't accept this kind of low-end order anymore. Ming made a sound. Ming genuinely made a sound. This is a company order, from the head office. I know your company orders don't make money without having to read them, I said. If they made money, this factory wouldn't have gone 3 months without paying wages. And then, because there is a difference between winning and enjoying yourself, I went to the cupboard and took out a waxed black jacket and put it on and turned around once. Is the jacket handsome? Or is the person wearing it more handsome? Section Chief Guo, would you like one? I'll do it at factory price. I don't want it. If I wore that back to the company, they would laugh me to death. Ming walked home muttering that only a fool would buy such a thing to wear. Then he opened his own front door. His son was standing in the middle of the room with a mop for a microphone, screaming along to a Fengjian song out of the tape player, wearing a black leather jacket. Where did you get that? Market west of the station, 100 Yuan. Guo Hao was delighted with himself. It's smuggled. Look at the material. You can tell it's foreign. Smuggled. His father's voice was flat. Does it need to be smuggled from the transport company garment factory to this apartment? 100 yuan, he said, taking the mop. You handed Ho Guangming 100 yuan. The beating took place to the sound of Fang Jian asking whether he would always have nothing. Guo Hao fled to the yard, where he found two schoolboys smoking behind a post and asked for a light. One of them was my brother, who was smoking cigarettes he had bought himself. My brother's different, Hu Xiaoming explained generously. Ming gives out proper pocket money, 1 or 2 yuan at a time. Guo Hao attempted to confiscate the cigarettes and threatened to tell his brother, I'm his actual brother. Ming loves me most. Ming couldn't bear to hit me. Guo Hao sat down on the step and put a hand on his own backside. So being a biological brother means you don't get hit. I'm also a biological son. I just bought a jacket. Why did I get hit? Am I really my father's son? Qinghe saturated in about a week, which is what I had wanted, and the local traders started cutting each other by 3 and 5 yuan. But by then the Wenzhou men had scattered across the country, and it did not matter. The ledger for the run, 10,000 jackets sold, 30 yuan of profit on each, 300,000 yuan, and then tax. Above 200,000 of profit the rate was 55%, plus turnover taxes on the way, and by the time everybody had been paid, I was keeping roughly a third. Except that wages and bonuses come off the taxable base first, so I signed a bonus for every employee in the building. Auntie Wen, the same Auntie Wen who had worked her row for Gao Qiang, counted her envelope at the window, then counted it again, then said, to nobody, there's 50 extra. It's a bonus. The last bonus that factory had issued was 3 years earlier, and it had been 3 yuan 30. It seems, said Auntie Wen with total sincerity, that choosing factory director Tang was really the right decision. She had voted against me, she had forgotten, I did not remind her, 20,000 yuan went out that afternoon. If you want the horse to run, you have to let it eat grass, and if the grass is also tax deductible, then frankly, you should let it eat as much as it wants. There was a saying then about how you judge an enterprise. Does it build housing, and does it pay a bonus? That is the whole assessment. Secretary Zhou heard about the bonuses and sighed and told somebody that a young man like that ought to be groomed as a successor, and then remembered that he had 2 years left and there would be no grooming of anybody. Chen Changfu called Guo Lihua in. How is the garment factory paying bonuses? I took them the order. Ming wouldn't accept it at all. Ming said our orders were low end. Chen Changfu sat with that for a while. Leather. Where would he get an order for leather? Has he sold to the military sub-district? Which was a reasonable guess, because in those years the army and the police bought leather by the thousand. It's not that kind of coat. It's short, fitted, zips up. Only a fool would buy something like that. And Guo Lihua, who had recently paid 100 yuan for one of them without meaning to, examined the ceiling and thought, there is a fool in my house. Who's selling them? Private traders, in the street market. At which Chen Changfu laughed out loud, because to the general manager of a state enterprise, a private trader was a vagrant with a blanket. Then his garment factory won't last long. The clock started in a workshop in southern Jiangsu, and I could hear it ticking from 400 kilometers away. The trader Gao took a sample jacket home to his 5th elder brother, who ran a large private workshop and who took about 90 seconds to arrive at the right conclusion. I can't make this here. Ordinary synthetic leather can't imitate it. If you sweat in ordinary synthetic leather, getting close to somebody could knock them over. Ming turned it inside out. But this looks imported, and it isn't. There is a domestic factory producing this material somewhere. I've already sent a man to the special zone to ask around. I expect news after the new year. I knew that was coming, because I would have done exactly the same. A state garment factory with 400 employees cannot fight 10,000 private workshops in Sunan. That is not a market position, that is a bear fighting a swarm. The jacket was never the business. The jacket was a window, opened by an information gap, and the only question was whether I could get the next product out before the window shut. The next product started with me pulling a piece of cord apart at the Qinghe No. 2 cotton mill. It was a coarse spun braided cord, and it came apart in my hands with a crack. What I wanted was flax. A flax cord you can braid into a mat, cool to the touch, breathable, takes up moisture fast, and gives it back fast. The workshop head was honest with me, which I appreciated. The few engineers we have are all worker peasant soldier university graduates. The technology they know is decades old. They can't even run the new equipment we've already bought. So who can? Go to a university, find a professor. The nearest serious textile department was at Tianjin University, which meant another trip to Tianjin, and I have to say that city had become extremely profitable for me. I went in through Teacher Fang, the honest interpreter, and found him in a shared office at the worst desk in it, dark corner against the outside wall, furthest from the radiator. Ming really is an honest man. Even the seating plan bullies him. I brought apples and 5 gin of Harbin red sausage. Ming accepted them with real pleasure and did not ask me what I wanted, which I found both touching and alarming, and then walked me down the corridor to the textile department himself. Professor Cheng was about 50 and looked at me the way a wolf looks at a bicycle. Ming accepted the gifts without any warmth at all. If there's a problem, say it. I'm in a hurry to get to the laboratory. So I said it, and he answered instantly and completely, which is the mark of a man who actually knows something. Fine, unbleached, undyed flax yarn, 3 to 24 metric count, no higher. Above that, you have to interlace it with wool or polyester. And if you blend flax with wool, the fibers fly, wrap around the rollers, break the thread, and you generate an enormous amount of waste, which is solved, he said, by an imported braiding machine. And then he left, taking the apples and the sausage. It seems the fruit and the red sausage were worth exactly that many words. I went to the bank and drew 5,000 yuan in cash and paid a robbery of a fee for drawing it outside my region, and then stood outside the laboratory door for 3 hours. Professor Cheng came out and saw me and did not attempt to hide anything. Why is it you again? I was just passing by. Ming started walking. Also, our factory is very interested in Professor Cheng's project, and we would like to sponsor your research with 5,000 yuan. Ming stopped as though he had walked into glass. You have sponsorship? I opened the bag. 5 bundles. I want you to understand what that was. State enterprises came to professors with fruit, 2 bottles of liquor, and 2 cartons of cigarettes, because those things can be run through an accounts department. Nobody brought research money because nobody had a budget line called research money. I had a contract. I needed 1 phone call to my own accountant. Over dinner, he told me everything. 2 warp 1 weft structure. Why a wool flax fabric behaves the way it does. And the real bottleneck, which was that domestic wool, was the problem, and Australian wool would have solved it, except that a garment factory does not get a foreign currency quota, which brought us straight back to the imported machine. How much is the machine? I saw one in the special zone at a Hong Kong owner's factory, Japanese, around 10,000 US dollars. 3 or 4 of those, I thought. 10 million yen. I'll go through the literature and identify the model, he said. If it's convenient, I can look myself. I read English. Which was true. In my previous life, I had hired a tutor for exactly that purpose, a young and attractive postgraduate student, and while I could not honestly assess the pedagogical outcome, I would like the phrase young and attractive postgraduate student to stand. You know Japanese as well? Time really is money once you have somewhere to spend it. Getting a foreign exchange quota through the state channel takes a year, and they have it. For the third sector subsidiary of a municipal enterprise, they would not have it. They would put the application in the bin. So, a foreign trade corporation. Shanghai, a company called Mingtai. There was a crowd outside the gate, so I joined it. Every single man in it was a speculator, and every single one of them was a state employee with a permit slip, because there were no private ones at that level. I borrowed a light off a talkative man and stood there and listened, and what followed was the finest piece of comedy I saw in the whole of the 80s. A man came out of the door. They won't accept RMB slips. 2/3 of the crowd left. The rest edged forward. Somebody asked what stock was actually available, and the answer came back. Cameras, stereo systems, record players, and Walkmans. What Walkman? Said the talkative man. I can be fast. Old Ming, being too fast isn't good. You need to eat some kidneys. Another man came out. Foreign exchange only, no certificates. 2/3 of the remainder left. Spot exchange only. More left. They don't want rubles. A small group by the wall departed in disgust. No North Korean won. No Iranian rial, no Indian rupee, and then the last man came out and delivered the finish. They want West German marks, not East German ones. They're both marks. The talkative man ground out his cigarette and looked at me kindly. Young comrade, you should go too. There's nothing left to see. I'm not here to watch the show, I said. I actually meet all of those requirements. And I walked in through the gate, followed by about 14 extremely interested stares. The receptionist had a small mirror out and was examining a spot on her chin and answered me without raising her head. We don't accept RMB or foreign exchange certificates. We also don't accept rubles. I have foreign currency, Japanese yen, spot exchange, a bank draft. She looked up. She looked at the paper. She counted the zeros. She put the mirror away and took me to Section Chief who wanted to see my permit slip and then discovered that I was not there to buy Walkmans at all. I was there to order equipment. Section Chief Ho brightened enormously because in his entire career nobody had ever walked in and ordered industrial equipment and then asked where I was from. Qinghe Transport Company Garment Factory. Qinghe? Where's that? Transport Company? Garment Factory? How are those two things related? It's a third sector enterprise. Third sector. Of a municipal enterprise, in a prefecture he could not place on a map. I watched him reach for the polite way to remove me, and I put the draft on the desk. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millions. Ming read it up the row like a man climbing stairs. 10 million Japanese yen. Ming recognized the Fuji bank mark immediately, and by the exchange rate that year that was over 60,000 US dollars, which was a large order even for them. A speculator's permit ran 10 or 20,000 and anything bigger started attracting the wrong kind of attention. What are you buying? An XD98 4S from Otsuka Precision Machinery in Osaka, or the 8-6. Ming went to get his general manager. Chin Haoran was about 30, in a suit with a capital accent, and he came into the room like a sword being drawn. You did not have to be clever to work out whose son he was. And on his desk were Japanese property listings, so I went first. CEO Chin, are you interested in Japanese real estate? If so, now is not a good time. Ming gave me the smile of a man being lectured by a provincial. The economists in the capital say the opposite. Japan will overtake the United States within 10 years. Some economists have calculated that if you sold all the real estate in Tokyo, you could buy the entire United States. I let that sit. That is what I mean by a bubble. And then I gave him the rest of it. Global growth, inevitable inflation, Western central banks raising rates, American pressure on the Bank of Japan, capital flowing in, the yen going up further, and the whole thing standing on land valuations that could not be justified by the rent on the land. Chin Haoran looked for a hole in it. Ming did not find one. Then he took out a notebook and started writing down what I was saying, like a student, and I had to look at the window for a moment. I want to be honest about where that came from. I did an MBA in my previous life, mostly to meet people, and I did meet several people, including a number of actresses and models with a considered interest in marrying well. The Plaza Accord and the Japanese bubble were the standard case study taught to me by people who had the answer in front of them, which is a much easier way to be right than the one Chin Haoran was attempting. I should take this back and show it to the old man first, he said half to himself, and my stomach turned over slightly because there is only one thing a man of 30 in that job means by the old man. Ming cancelled the office purchase in Tokyo and moved to a lease. Then he offered me a job with a Shanghai residence permit attached, which in 1987 was worth more than the salary. I've borrowed 500,000 from the bank, I said. Every morning the first thing I do is calculate how much interest I owe. 500,000. Factory director Tang has guts. Ming told me honestly what his markup would be, which I appreciated, and then he tried one last time to save me from myself. Take the 10 million and buy 400 Walkmans. The speculators clear 500 yuan a unit. That's 200,000 profit and you'll have it inside 2 months. I know reselling imported goods is profitable. I want to do solid industry. But you're paying in foreign exchange and selling in RMB. That's the wrong direction. You're converting hard currency into soft. Since I'm willing to spend foreign exchange on equipment, I said, how could the products possibly be sold in RMB? I'm developing a product for export. Chin Haoran put down his cup. You have to understand what that sentence sounded like in 1987. The country ran a trade deficit. What we exported was oil, coal, iron ore, tea, and here was the third sector subsidiary of a municipal transport company announcing an export program. It was a beggar setting the strategic objective of becoming emperor. Ming did not laugh at me. Ming gave me his personal card, which is not a thing a man in his position gives to the director of a subsidiary clothing works, and which I kept. Through the corporation, the machine cost 2.5 million yen instead of the $10,000 it cost in Osaka, so Ming Tai were taking about $5,000 a unit. I did not begrudge them one fen of it. $5,000 was the price of the only alternative on offer, which was not being allowed to buy one at all. I took 4. That was the whole 10 million yen, gone in an afternoon, a month for shipping and customs. Professor Cheng and 2 of his graduate students spent that month finishing the chord formula, and in southern Jiangsu in the same month, a man I have never met laid his hand flat on his first finished jacket and said the material had come through. Nobody had to tell me. I had it circled on a calendar. His wife was delighted, because 30 yuan of profit a coat is a very good living. You silly woman, this won't sell for 70 anymore. Give it a few months, and every garment workshop in Sunan will be making them, and they won't fetch 50. The flood arrived exactly when I had told them it would. Jackets with English letters on the back, jackets with aeroplanes, eagles, stars, and to be fair to them, made just as well as mine. Retail went 100, 80, 70, 60. My wholesale price had been 70, which was now above their retail. I cut to 50 and the orders still stopped. Guo Lihua heard about it at the New Year market, and I would like to thank whoever told him. Ming was buying 20 gin of pork and a bag of sausage casings, and a voice behind him said, leather jackets are down to 60. Ming went over and asked casually where the stock came from. I stopped taking them from the garment factory a long time ago. These are from Sunan. Guo Lihua walked back to the pork stall in a wonderful mood and decided to buy an extra 5 gin to celebrate. Then he remembered that his own son had paid 100 Yuan for one. The mood went. The pork could wait. Next to the pork stall, a man was selling feather dusters, and Guo Lihua stopped and picked one up and tested the handle, and found it to be sturdy and well made, and, in his professional assessment, quite suitable for the purpose. The pork could wait. The feather duster had to be bought immediately. I closed the books on the leather jacket myself. 53,000 made, 51,000 sold, 2,000 written off. I called the workshop heads in and told them we were stopping production, and then I told them, before anybody could go pale, that wages would be paid as normal and there would be a substantial red envelope at the new year. Then I told them about the braiding classes. The excuses were instantaneous and beautifully rehearsed. Our women are over 40. Ours are nearly retired. They've been seamstresses their whole lives. They'll never learn a new machine. Fine, I said. Attendance is entirely voluntary. Relief went round the table like a warm bath. If we don't sign up, will there be a punishment? No punishment. They practically sagged. There will, however, be an examination at the end of the course. That took the smiles off. And every employee who passes the examination will receive 100 Yuan bonus. There was a silence. 100? 100. But you said there'd be no punishment for not attending. Rewards and punishments are different things, I said. If my little brother fails an exam and I don't beat him, that counts as no punishment. If he scrapes a 60 and I give him 50 fen, that is a reward. I would like to stress again that this training is completely voluntary and the factory will never force anybody. The four workshop heads looked at one another. Clever tactics, this young factory director. Auntie Wen could not read the notice, and I want to be clear that this was not her fault. She had been born in the early 40s and learned her characters at an evening literacy class after the war, so she made the woman next to her read it out. I'm old. I'll be retiring soon. I can't learn these new things. It's voluntary. Then I won't go. There's an exam at the end. I'd fail for certain. This is for you young ones. Anyone who passes gets 100 Yuan bonus. Auntie Wen was already moving. Where do I sign up? And then, over her shoulder, to nobody in particular, and with immense dignity. Even at my age, I still hope to improve my professional skills. I am certainly not doing it for the 100 Yuan. The queue went round the corner. Office staff signed up. The canteen signed up. The double benefit, for those keeping score, nobody in this world learns a new skill for free, and wages and bonuses come off the taxable base, and my profit for the year had gone over 200,000 where the rate is 55%. I had budgeted for resistance. The training turned out to be easy. They could all sew, and most of them knitted sweaters in the evenings, and knitting is weaving with worse tools. Auntie Wen mastered several techniques inside a fortnight and had spent the 100 Yuan 4 different ways before she had earned it. Over the new year, in a courtyard in the capital, and I did not learn one word of this until years afterward, Qin Horan sat with his father, who was drinking against medical advice and staring at a page of figures. Imports, $42.9 billion. Exports, 30.9. A deficit approaching 12 billion, which was at least an improvement on the 15 the year before. And what we export is all raw materials, oil, coal, iron ore. These were left to us by our ancestors. This is selling off the family inheritance. A country of 1 billion mouths cannot live by selling what our ancestors left us. Ming turned the page over. Look at Japan, 80 billion a year in surplus. So his son, to change the subject, repeated a lecture he had been given by a 19-year-old in Shanghai about the Japanese property bubble. The old man listened all the way through without interrupting once. Then he said, "Have the secretary write that up as a report for circulation in my office." The 4 machines came in on a truck, and the workshop crowded round them. "Look at that paint," said Gao Jiwan, in a voice you could hear from the road. "So bright." As expected, of imported. And then, to the room. "This is like trading in a shotgun for a cannon. Nobody dared commission them, so I borrowed an engineer from the #1 cotton mill, and Gao Jiwan appointed himself their guard. When I was in the army, I was best at standing guard. Even the military region commander praised me for it. Then I told Guo Xiaoping to draw up an equipment lease. Ming looked at me the way an accountant looks at a man who has misunderstood accounting. "Factory director, you would be leasing the machines to yourself. The money goes out of one pocket and into the other. Do you think I'm taking my trousers off to break wind? Fixed asset lease payments are deducted before tax." Ming opened his mouth and closed it. Lease income was taxed at 20%. Enterprise profit was taxed at 55%, and personal income tax in 1987 was, let us say, aspirational. The 500,000 I had put into the factory was likewise documented as a loan from me to the factory, with a note and an interest rate, because interest is also deducted before tax. A few thousand here and a few thousand there, and it came to over 100,000 yuan. I had to teach Guo Xiaoping every step of it from zero, which took weeks and which was possible only because he was mine. The engineers from the cotton mill got the machines running, Professor Cheng's cords started coming off them, and the freight department moved my flax and my wool ahead of the queue because I used to work there and because Wen Guoliang had told them to. Then I unrolled the drawing. A seat, with a back and a headrest. Is it for a sofa? A dining chair? It is not for sofas and it is not for chairs. It's for cars. It's a car seat cushion. Flax with wool breathes, moves heat away from the body, and does not build up static. Think about what the inside of a truck cab is like in August, I said. It's a steaming basket. I knew car seat cushions would not appear in China until the 90s, first in bamboo, then fur, then the ice silk and microfiber generation. Rich countries never bothered with them at all because rich countries put ventilation and heating in the seat and moved on. And then I made the decision that everybody argued with. We would braid the mats by hand, not on the machines, by hand. Because the garment factory already had to feed 300 and something people every month whether they worked or not, and those people had hands, and a wage that is being paid anyway is a wage you should be getting something for. At the head office, the union chairman was called to the organization department, which everybody understood meant retirement. "It'll be your turn next year," said Chen Changfu to Secretary Zhou cheerfully. Zhou Hongwei was 1 year older than the chairman, which meant 1 more year, which meant Chen Changfu could taste it. The long-suffering daughter-in-law was about to become the matriarch. I had seen the ritual before. Before a cadre retired, he was sent on a familiarization tour. In the 80s, that meant the Terracotta Army, or Guilin, or the West Lake, and for the very top, it meant Hong Kong. Later, it would mean Japan and Europe, and eventually the boldest of them would go and inspect Las Vegas. Then Chen Changfu gave Guo Lihua an instruction. "Of every enterprise in this region, our transport company has the most vehicles. These car seat cushions are not a necessity. Watch it closely and do not give Hu Guangming a single order." "Even without your instruction," said Guo Lihua, "I would not give Hu Guangming a single order." The cushions piled up in the warehouse, and I did nothing at all about selling them, which eventually became more than Guo Xiaoping could stand. "Factory director, we have not sold one single car seat cushion. The factory is running entirely on the leather jacket profits, and that is not a long-term solution. Guo Xiaoping, do our domestic trucks, the ones that are barely holding themselves together on the road, need seat cushions?" Ming thought about it honestly. "It really doesn't seem necessary." "Exactly. These are for foreigners. Look at the cost. Flax is as expensive as silk. Wool is a luxury, and there were plenty of people in that city who did not own a sweater, so the notion of sitting on wool was not going to find a domestic market at any price." I looked at the calendar. "Registration for this year's Canton Fair opens soon, doesn't it?" The Prefectural Foreign Trade Bureau had 3 exhibition slots, and all 3 were taken. Wicker, from 2 counties that made baskets. Porcelain from the Qinghe Ceramics Works, in case a greedy foreigner with a taste for cheap goods happened by, and tea, which even the locals did not drink, and which the Bureau intended to push at the fair on the theory that foreigners do not understand tea either, and 1 or 2 of them might be fooled. I went up to the provincial level and found a corridor full of applicants, almost all of them provincial enterprises, almost all of them selling something that came out of the ground. Iron ore, copper, rare earths, timber. A week later, the answer came back in 1 line. "Your company does not meet the standards for attending the Canton Fair." Fine. I would get in myself and I would find a foreign buyer on the floor and let us see what happens then, because if a foreign merchant specifically asks to buy linen car seat cushions, is the Foreign Trade Department really going to shake its head? I was walking out of the provincial building when I stopped to let an Audi 80 go past, and the window came down. "Engineer Hu, it really is you." It was Master Zheng, the driver of the White Crown at the Yellow River truck plant. The man who had killed an automatic gearbox by coasting in neutral and whose name I had left out of the report. Ming now drove for the director of the Provincial Foreign Trade Bureau. I told him about the Canton Fair. "Why don't I help you think of something? I'm on my way to the hospital to collect our leader." "Ming's in hospital?" Master Zheng looked left. Master Zheng looked right. Master Zheng leaned out of the window. "Hemorrhoids," he whispered. "The doctor says it's from sitting too long. Poor circulation. Everything gets stifled down there." I would like to record that I have had several ideas in my life that made me a great deal of money, and not one of them arrived faster than that one. "What a coincidence," I said. "Our factory's product is exactly what your leader needs. Flax resists bacteria, resists moths, and above all, it breathes. It absolutely will not stifle the buttocks. It's most effective for hemorrhoids." I got out and held the door. Director Tang Yongqiang came out of the hospital wearing a face mask because an ailment in the vicinity of the chrysanthemum is an unspeakable secret, and because if it got out, somebody would arrive at his office with a gift basket of bananas. Ming lowered himself into the back seat sideways, in stages, the way a man does. Then he stopped. Ah, he said, that's comfortable. Master Zheng, who I would hire tomorrow if he were alive, said, without turning round. That's no ordinary cushion, director. That's a specialized automotive flax seat cushion. High-technology flax fiber blended with wool. They have to use an imported braiding machine to make it. Where did you get it? A friend gave it to me. Ming asked me to put in a word for him. Which was exactly the right answer, because leaders like a subordinate who is honest with them and dishonest with everybody else. Tang Yongqiang shifted his weight experimentally and thought about it for the length of one street. We cannot go on earning foreign currency by selling coal and iron ore and oil forever, he said. An international exhibition like the Canton Fair should give more opportunity to industrial products. Then he tapped the seat under him. Tell them this car cushion gets a slot. The fair was on Liuhua Road, and it was cramped, and most of the exhibits were laid out on counters like a department store. Guo Xiaoping had never seen a foreigner before, and within 4 minutes he had located a European woman in a sleeveless dress and stopped functioning. Wipe your chin. I genuinely regret bringing you to Guangzhou. Your sister-in-law is strict, he said, unrepentant. At home, I'm not even allowed a calendar with an actress on it. There's a man outside selling calendars with women in swimsuits. 12 months, no repeats. Ming did not hear the rest of the sentence. We went through the garment area, where I looked at what the country was offering the world and had to stop and breathe for a moment. Red flowers on green leaves, on everything. They must think foreigners are country bumpkins. We got to the daily necessities area, where our half booth was supposed to be. I got there to find a workman on a ladder taking the sign down. The daily necessities area has been cancelled. A large batch of traditional embroidery needs to be displayed. And the exhibits that were going in here? What else can be done? Figure it out yourselves. I gave the attendant a cigarette and got the rest of it, and it was extremely useful. Embroidery had been given its own area because the previous year a European buyer had cleared out a batch for home decoration and come back with partners, so embroidery was now a priority. How do you know in advance which foreigners are coming? Ming shrugged. There are only a few hotels foreigners can stay in. When they check in, they register their work unit. Plus, we have the records of what they bought before. And then he told me the thing that changed how I saw the entire event. Before the fair officially opens, they negotiate with the foreigners. Once the price is agreed, they sign the contracts the moment it starts. Why do you think the first day always has the highest transaction volume? There was a list of important foreign buyers. It sat with the leadership of the provincial bureau. That became my objective at approximately 11:15 in the morning. The head of the provincial delegation was Jin Jianhua, and I found him in an excellent mood. They had been compensated for the cancelled area with half a counter in the ceramics section, and he was proud of it. With that extra half booth, we'll probably earn another $50,000. Ming traded my booth for a black pottery counter and was sitting there being smug about it. Then the Tai Chi began. Textiles was impossible. They display fabric. Garments was impossible. Nobody wears a car seat cushion. Woven goods had no space. Wicker and straw and rush and wool had it all, and the bureau's own baskets had not fitted in. How about your factory makes a sacrifice and shows some spirit? Skip this session. I'll find you a good booth next time. I have met a great many people I disliked, and the ones I disliked most were never the ones who said no. It was always the ones who walked you round in a circle so that you would say it for them. Ming picked up the exhibitor list and found the entry. Flax Automotive Seat Cushion. Your enterprise. Why does that sound like a third sector unit? We are a third sector unit. Of a prefectural level enterprise? You're right. The temperature dropped about 15 degrees. All right, I see. Wait until next year. I still have work to finish, so I won't see you out. Ming did not even bother to give me an empty promise. Ming simply stopped spending words on me. In the corridor, I walked straight into the Tianjin delegation, led by Du Mingliang, whose secretary had once tied my tie the way you tie a young pioneer's scarf. Teacher, how? Ming wanted an interpreter, immediately. I read English as well, I said, which doubled my value on the spot. What I wanted was the list of important buyers, and he agreed to let me read it in his office, not copy it. Read it. It's a foreign-related secret. If the foreign businessmen thought we were monitoring them, it could become a diplomatic incident. We went to the White Swan Hotel where Nixon had stayed, and Bush Sr. and Elizabeth II, and outside it there were rows of taxis, and every one of them was a 6th-generation Nissan Cedric. Even Secretary Joe back at the company doesn't have a car that nice. In the coffee shop, I saw a man from the ministry, Fan Jihong, shaking hands with a European with brown hair, and I made a point of memorizing the European's face without knowing why yet. Then I sat 2 tables away with Du Mingliang and listened to Fan Jihong talk. There's a company in America called Walmart. Have you heard of it? Walmart? Walmart. Ah, I remember. That's the one that runs supply and marketing cooperatives. I had to look at the ceiling. The ministry has been inviting them for years, said Fan Jihong. This year, we finally got them through the embassy in Washington. The buyer's name is Sean Miller. They have stores across the entire country. Their procurement runs to millions of dollars. What do they want to buy? Nobody knows. It's their first time. Once the fair opens, Sean Miller will tour the site. Then we'll see who has the ability to land Walmart's orders. The list of important foreign buyers stopped being important to me about halfway through that sentence. 2 mornings later, I was standing outside the White Swan Hotel in a taxi driver's uniform next to a Nissan Cedric with a flax seat cushion already spread across the back seat. Here is how you obtain a taxi in 1987. I found a driver. I told him the true story about the cancelled booth, which is a good story and buys you sympathy. I put a bundle of 10 Yuan notes in his hand, 1,000 of them, which was more than he made in a month. And when he still hesitated, I handed him my own identity card to hold, because a man without an identity card in that country cannot buy a train ticket, book a room, or exist. Ming gave me the keys and the jacket. It is almost 10. When is this Sean Miller from Walmart going to come out? I waited from dawn until after 2. I did not drink water, because a man who leaves to use the toilet is a man who misses the only 4 seconds that matter. Lunch was 2 biscuits. At 2:20, he came out, looked at the row of taxis, and got into mine. Ming handed a slip of paper over the seat with an address written on it. "Certainly, sir," I said, in English. "Would you prefer the main road or the river road?" I watched his eyebrows go up in the mirror, which is the entire reason I said it. We did the weather, then I did the road surface, then I did the traffic. And then, with the smoothness of a man who has practiced in a mirror, I arrived at the following. In heat like this, driving in a place like this really needs a proper set of flax seat cushions. I assumed this was just a decoration Chinese cars have. I had the bag on the passenger seat. Milk white, which stays coolest but shows dirt, though it washes. Brown, which will not show a mark for a year. Gray, for a dark interior, and any color you want if you order enough. Ming turned each one over. "How much for all of these?" "There are a great many cars in the United States, Mr. Miller. I don't think 3 is going to cover it. I think you need at least 100,000. Ming looked at the back of my head for a while. "You aren't a taxi driver." "No, my booth at the fair is in a very remote place, so I disguised myself as a taxi driver to try my luck." Ming laughed properly for about 5 seconds. "You are a truly clever businessman. You remind me of the Jewish people." Then he gave me the objection, and it was the right one. "Americans like leather seats, and our cars have air conditioning." So I did not argue. I gave him 2 pictures. Florida. You park in the sun for 1 hour, you come back and get in, and your car has air conditioning, and it takes 4 minutes to work, and for those 4 minutes your own sweat is gluing you to that leather seat. Ming made a face. Everybody makes that face. Texas. You can fry an egg on the seat, not as an expression. You could actually cook an egg. And you have to keep a pair of oven gloves in the door, because you cannot hold the steering wheel. Ming stopped making a face and started nodding. And leather and plastic both stink when they get hot. Flax doesn't. Ming was quiet for a block. "What's the price?" And my heart, which had been up somewhere around my collar all morning, came down and sat where it belonged, because I knew that the deal was done. $42 for the set of 3 at the fair price, $29 for a serious buyer, $8 for a front cushion sold singly, $15 for the rear bench, which comes to $31, so the set is $2 cheaper, and I would like you to buy the set. $29 is expensive. For $29, I can buy a household electric fan. I gave him a piece of the cord to pull. Flax and wool are both expensive. Every one of these is braided by hand, and Chinese labor is already the cheapest in the world, so there is nothing left to squeeze. Then the real argument. But the important thing is that this is a completely new product. It has never appeared in the American market, which means you have the pricing power. You can sell it at $100, at $200. You will not get that kind of margin selling rifles in Texas. We can't price a household product like it's high technology. Mr. Miller, there are 2 ways to price a good, cost plus a margin, or according to what the market will bear. As far as I understand it, American companies generally prefer the second. And that is the actual difference between the 2 halves of the world, and it took me 2 lives to see it clearly. A Chinese manufacturer computes his cost and adds a percentage. A Western company decides what the thing is worth to the buyer and charges that, and will destroy stock rather than cut the price. Which is why Western technology is always expensive, and why the moment Chinese firms enter any industry, the price of everything in it falls through the floor. "You really are a fantastic salesperson," said Sean Miller. I gave him 3% off anything over 100,000 units, and he surrendered and produced a business card. "My name is Sean Miller, purchasing agent for the American company, Walmart." "Walmart," I said. "I don't believe I've heard of it." Which was a lie, and a necessary one, because a targeted stakeout and a chance encounter are 2 completely different things in law, and following a foreign national around a hotel in 1987 could put you somewhere with bars on it. "Although," I added, "I have a feeling you're about to become the largest retailer in the United States." which happened in 1990, 3 years later, when they passed Sears. The contract had to be signed in front of an official, and Sean Miller said he would take me to Mr. Fan himself. Outside the ministry office, a young secretary in glasses opened the door, ushered Sean Miller through, and put his hand flat on my chest. Now that the foreign guest has been delivered, we'll take over. Has the guest not paid you? We will cover the taxi fare. Bring your receipt. And shut the door in my face. I was still wearing the uniform. If I had known, I should have gone and changed first. Inside, Sean Miller explained that he wanted to place a large order for Flax automotive seat cushions, and the secretary was sent out at a run to locate the manufacturer. Ming went past me at speed. "Mr. Driver, wait right there. I have an urgent matter. I'll be back in 10 or 20 minutes. Then he searched the entire exhibition. There was no such product on the exhibitor list. In textiles, there were only bolts of cloth. In woven goods, nobody had ever heard of it. And then a large gentleman at a counter waved him over and said, "Car seat cushions? I've got some right here," and produced a circular foam pad 1/2 meter across with a picture of a car printed on it. The headlights were not level with each other. Was Sean Miller blind? The secretary thought. How could he like this? But he took the large gentleman anyway, who announced twice on the way that his was a provincial-level enterprise, and presented the foam pad to the American. "Good heavens," said Sean Miller. "I have never seen such an ugly cushion. Is that an advertisement for a scrapyard printed on it?" The large gentleman was removed. "My supplier," said Sean Miller, "should be right outside." "You came with somebody?" "Yes, the taxi driver. Ming is the supplier." I had gone to the toilet by then, because I could not keep a straight face any longer. The secretary found me at the sink and seized my hand and shook it with both of his. Comrade, could you possibly wait one moment? Let me wash my hands first." "Didn't you just wash?" And I watched the sentence arrive. "How about," he said faintly, "we wash our hands together?" Ming washed them 3 times with soap. Director Fan Jihong's opening position was that I was a con man, which was fair. People did come to the Canton Fair specifically to defraud foreigners, and a 19-year-old in a borrowed taxi driver's jacket is not a reassuring sight. Then he handled the cushion, and it stopped being a fraud, because you cannot fake a wool flax braid with a printed foam pad. So I gave him the 2 facts that a Chinese official in 1987 could not ignore. Imported Japanese equipment, Otsuka Precision of Osaka, and Professor Cheng of Tianjin University as technical consultant. "And your price?" $29 a set. Ming stopped. "You can sell this for $29? I leaned in slightly. "Besides, we're the ones selling, so the more expensive the better." "Right," said Fan Jihong with feeling. "The more expensive the better." Ming started stroking the cushion much more gently after that. Sean Miller's order was 100,000 sets, plus another 100,000 single front cushions. Fan Jihong did it out loud. 2.9 million, plus 800,000, $3.7 million. 3.589, I said. I gave him 3%. You gave a discount as well. We have to let the foreigner feel he's taken advantage of us a little. Otherwise, he won't buy so many. You did the right thing. Export earnings are what matters. Then he began the official praise, and this is my favorite thing that happened at that fair. Your enterprise as a national level. Ming stopped and started again. As a provincial level. Ming looked at me. What level is your enterprise? Prefecture level. Prefecture level. Amazing. Although, I said, our garment factory is only a 3rd sector unit, and Fan Jihong froze the way a machine freezes, because everything he had ready to say was built for enterprises with a glorious history and a brilliant present, and he had nothing at all in stock for a subsidiary clothing works. I told him the version of the story where the taxi was a coincidence. "Should I call you a newborn calf that isn't afraid of tigers?" he said eventually. "Or should I say you are stupidly bold? If somebody had misunderstood your intentions, you could have been locked up for a few years. Are there any difficulties your enterprise is facing?" I had the answer ready, and it was about 70% true, which is the correct ratio. Fine flax yarn and pure wool are expensive. The export cycle is 2 to 3 months before settlement. The factory has been paying wages with borrowed money, and even the production equipment is leased. What would help? Exemption from profit tax for 1 year. Ming agreed almost immediately because for the 3rd sector unit of a prefectural enterprise, it was an easy signature, and because $3.5 million of foreign exchange outweighed every argument anyone could have made against it. The country had run a trade deficit for years, and the reserves were thin, and in 1987, an exporter could ask for almost anything. That window closed in the 90s, when the concessions were redirected to foreign investors, but for now it was wide open, and I was standing in it. In the ceramics section, which I made a point of walking past twice, Jin Jianhua was telling the story of his half-counter. Ming had sold 1,000 sets of black pottery cups to a Malaysian Chinese buyer for $10,000, and he was explaining to his colleagues how correct his decision had been to take the counter instead of the cancelled area. If it were still that so-called car seat cushion, I'm afraid I wouldn't have earned a single US dollar. For export earnings, you still have to rely on the craftsmanship our ancestors left us. Ming was already drafting the report in his head. Cool analysis, decisive judgment. A colleague came over. The ministry just signed $3.5 million with Walmart. Everybody made a noise. What product? Car something. Car seat cushion. That's it. Flax automotive seat cushion. Jin Jianhua went rigid. Impossible. How could a third sector unit earn $3.5 million? Old Jin, could it be the Qinghe Transport Company garment factory? How do you know that? Nobody answered him. Several of them patted him on the shoulder on their way out, in the manner of men leaving a funeral. Ming sat there looking at a contract for $10,000. This was originally $3.5 million. Meanwhile, several hundred kilometers north, Guo Lihua was cycling to work and humming, and I want that picture held for a moment. His son had finally been made a permanent worker, 2 years late, having been robbed of the advanced worker title and then of the dispatcher post by the same person. Ming met Gao Juan on the road, who was going to the printer for coupons, and asked where the factory director was. Ming went to the Canton Fair. Guo Lihua laughed so hard he nearly came off the bicycle. With that third sector unit of yours, do you even know what the Canton Fair is? I figured it's probably about the same as the small commodities market west of the station. The enterprises that go there are provincial key enterprises at minimum. This Hao Guangming is a toad lusting after swan meat. Then wouldn't it be a loss? Gao Juan looked genuinely worried. The train ticket and the guest house, that's several hundred yuan. Back at the office, there was news that the prefecture was going to be reorganized as the city of Qinghe, with 3 districts, new branches, and new bus stations, all of which were plans that Chen Changfu would get to execute. And then an imported Passat came through the gate carrying the deputy commissioner of the prefecture, who held the foreign trade portfolio. Guo Lihua asked afterward what Pan Guang had come for. Vice Commissioner Chen, said Chen Changfu, came to cheer for Hou Guangming. Ming didn't actually sell anything, did he? Chen Changfu put the ministry fax on the desk, stamp and all. How much foreign exchange did that garment factory earn? $3.5 million. That much? That's 2 months of income for the entire freight department. It's US dollars, said Chen Changfu. $3.5 million US dollars. Back in Guangzhou, the organizers found me a display case in the woven goods area inside about 6 hours, complete with a real car seat mounted on a stand so that foreigners could sit on it. A Singaporean buyer tried to grind me down. Ming had a friend who had built a factory in one of the special zones, so he knew exactly how cheap Chinese labor was, and he told me so at length. I genuinely cannot lower the price, I said, because the contract we have signed with Walmart is at this same price. Ming stopped talking. Before long, this product will be in every Walmart store in the United States. That's quite a good selling point for you as well. 1,000 sets, $29,000. Here is why the price worked, and why it would only work in one country. In 1987, $29 for a car accessory was affordable in America and essentially nowhere else. Saudi Arabia was at $6,000 a head, Qatar a little over 10. The Asian tigers had not taken off. Europe and Japan have maritime climates and survivable summers, but American median household income was around $50,000, and a blue-collar worker had a house in the suburbs, 2 cars, 2 children, and a dog, and spending $40 to protect his own backside was 2 fewer takeaway meals. $29,000, I thought, and then I caught myself. Even a mosquito is meat, however small. Am I becoming arrogant? $29,000 has become mosquito meat. Then somebody put a cup of tea in front of me. Jin Jianhua had made it personally and dropped a piece of Huazhou tangerine peel into it. Relieves coughs, reduces phlegm, clears the lungs. You can't buy this where we come from. Ming called me Factory Director Tang every second sentence for the rest of the week and moved around that stand considerably more diligently than any restaurant waiter I have ever employed. By the close of the fair, we had another $500,000 on top of Walmart. Over $4 million US dollars. They hung a red cloth over a board at the factory gate. The deputy commissioner and I pulled it off together while the cameras went. Advanced Collective for Foreign Exchange Earnings. The company leadership stood at the edge of the photograph because they were not entitled to stand in the middle. When Guoliang found me afterward, Ming was being transferred to the Land Administration Bureau, which he explained without bitterness. New emperor, new courtiers, the union chairman was gone, Secretary Zhou had a year, everyone in the old set was going to be moved. Your garment factory generates $4 million, he said. Do you think Chen Changfu is going to let you keep the contract? Probably not. Don't underestimate him. That man is ruthless. If the company decides to take the factory back, I said, I have a backup plan. And if the head office wants to play dirty with me, I'll let them find out that without Butcher Chen, they won't be able to eat a pig with its hair still on. The meeting to take it back happened the following week. Chen Chengfu opened with the principle, a third sector unit's profits belong to the company. Therefore, take it back. Zhou Hongwei objected, and I want to be fair to him. We contracted it out when it couldn't pay wages, taking it back now that it can. Isn't that a bit unethical? But Chen Chengfu had done his preparation. The contract had no term. 7 days' notice was all that was required. $4 million was 15 million yuan at the official rate. That was more than a dozen staff dormitory blocks. That was dozens more trucks. And production was by hand. So, and this is the sentence that killed it, even without Ho Guangming, as long as the workers remain, the export task will not be affected. Then he closed. Ho Guangming remits 20,000 yuan a year. On an income of $4 million US, he pays 20,000 and everything else goes into his private pocket. If we take it back, that 4 million is shared among all employees, including you and me sitting in this room. The room went over in under a minute. A leader who wanted a new car said the garment factory must be taken back. Somebody proposed compensation, an out-of-turn promotion to middle management. Somebody else observed that the union happened to have a section chief vacancy, and that would suit the young man nicely. Zhou Hongwei was alone, and he had 1 year left, and in 1 year, the whole company would belong to Chen Chengfu. Intelligent people pick a side early. The new factory director would be Gao Qiang. Guo Lihua would be attached to him as an advisor. Guo Lihua came to deliver the news personally, and he did not knock. Ming walked into the middle of a production meeting I was running. Factory Director Tang, I don't think you need to continue this meeting. The company has decided to terminate your contract. This time next week, I will be here to take over the garment factory. I took the paper off him and read it. Wen Guoliang was right after all. Since you have come looking for trouble, do not blame me for being ruthless. In front of the workshop heads, I was serene. The garment factory belongs to the transport company. I'm a contractor. I intend to fulfill my duties right up to the last day. Then I shut the office door and told Guo Xiaoping what we were actually doing. Leave exactly 20,000 yuan in the factory account. Move the rest to my personal account as the contractor's dividend. Exactly 20,000? That's the annual remittance in the contract, not 1 fen short and not 1 fen over. Ming looked at me and started to see it. If they don't stop production, I said, how am I supposed to get the factory back? Second, the 4 imported braiding machines go on a truck. They were bought by me and leased to the factory. If a factory has no money, the head office can send money. If a factory has no equipment, the head office is helpless. Guo Xiaoping sat down slowly. When you had me draft that equipment lease, you already expected this. If a man does not plan ahead, he will find trouble at his door. Third, go to the tax office and pay 20% personal income tax on the dividend. Today, that one he actually argued about because in 1987, approximately nobody paid personal income tax, and volunteering to hand the state a 6-figure sum looked like a form of madness. At this exact moment, I said, I do not want to give anybody a single piece of leverage over me. And then the last instruction, in 2 days, help me spread a rumor. There's no money in the factory account. This month's wages will be delayed and the bonus is cancelled. Ming wrote it down, and then he said without looking up, if you can't come back, I won't work here either. I'll follow you. I signed the handover and rode out of the gate. Gao Qiang was in a wonderful mood, and I know that because he told a remarkable number of people about it. After going all the way round the circle, the garment factory was his again, and this time it came with a $4 million order attached. You ended up sewing my wedding dress for me. Ming gave an inaugural address of about 10,000 words. The deputy director, who was deaf in one ear, yawned twice. Does everyone have the confidence to complete this task? Ming put his fist in the air. Absolute silence. I should have warned him. Those workers do not talk. They had not talked to me either for the first 2 months. Ming had to applaud his own speech, alone, in front of 400 people. In the first workshop, nobody clapped, and a single voice came out of the middle of the crowd. Auntie Wen, I heard this month's wages are going to be late. Is that true? Gao Qiang's face did something complicated, and I am told he muttered, what are you shouting about? I didn't hire you as a shill this time. And what about the bonus? I got 60 yuan last month. Why would there be a bonus? Because I heard there's no money left in the factory account. And Guo Xiaoping, standing at the back, performing embarrassment with the skill of a man who has finally found his art form, said, there's only 20,000 left. It really isn't enough for wages. Gao Qiang had checked. Ming knew the leather jacket money had been 500,000 or 600,000. The workshop came apart. No wages, no work. When factory director Tang was here, we had a bonus every month. Let's go to headquarters and demand an explanation. Ming swore on his ancestors that everybody would be paid and barely got out of the room. In the accounts office, Guo Lihua found the transfer. That money went to factory director Tang's account. Ming told you to transfer it and you just did it? Ming's the factory director. If he signs, it transfers. Ming embezzled it, said Gao Chang. Ho Guangming isn't that stupid, said Guo Lihua, who was, whatever else, not a fool. Nobody embezzles that blatantly. It's the contractor's share of profit, said Guo Xiaoping helpfully. And there was the hole in the floor, because in 1987, not one person in that building, in that company, or arguably in that province could have told you with certainty whether a contractor was entitled to it. They went to Chen Changfu for an advance to cover wages, and he waved them off. What's the rush? It's more than 10 days to the 15th. I'm not in a rush. The workers are in a rush. They stopped work this morning and wanted to march on headquarters. Ming signed it with the expression of a man swallowing a stone. Doesn't this company have a disciplinary inspection office? Take the ledgers and go. I went in with a receipt in my inside pocket. Secretary Chen opened with the standard formula. The organization will not wrong a good person, nor will it let a bad person get away. Understood. Did you appropriate public funds? I put the first document on the table, the handover record from the day I took the factory over, signed by the previous director. Balance in the account, 43 Yuan, 20 Fen. Secretary Chen, how would a man embezzle several 100,000 yuan out of a factory that had 43 yuan and 20 fen in it? Second document, the handover record from last week. Balance, 21,852 yuan 4 fen. The contract requires me to remit 20,000 a year. I've exceeded it, in under a year. The contract does not say the profits are yours. It also does not say they are not. And in December, the state issued a decision to extend the contract responsibility system nationwide. Ming hit the table. Do you understand that you are resisting the organization's investigation? So I put down the third document, a tax receipt, with the vermilion seal of the State Taxation Administration across it. I have already paid personal income tax on those dividends. If my dividends were illegal income, would the State Taxation Administration have collected tax on them? Ming looked at the seal. Secretary Chen, do you believe the conclusions of our company's inspection office are qualified to be weighed against national law? Is this office greater than the state's legislature? Ming did not have an answer, and there wasn't one. That receipt is the whole trick, so let me be plain about it. Before 1988, there were no rules about a contractor's share. None, which meant that in practice the rule was, if they see you making money, they take the enterprise back, and you get nothing. So I deliberately left the gap open when I signed. The contract specified 20,000 a year in remittance and said nothing whatsoever about profit share. Because the moment you mention a share, you are negotiating a percentage, and there is no world in which they would have given me 100%. And at the time, nobody on their side thought about it either, because the factory was dying, and everybody assumed I was doing it for a line on my personnel file. For all their experience, the old hands of the planned economy could not outmaneuver a man who had spent 30 years clawing his way through a market one. Guo Lihua did the arithmetic on my tax bill and, to his credit, said it out loud, 20%. Ming paid over 100,000 yuan. The man is detestable, but his nerve is genuinely something. Then Gao Jiwan came in to report that Workshop 1 had stopped. Why? We've run out of raw material. Then go and buy some. Purchasing was always handled by Factory Director Tang and Accountant Guo. I only manage production. Guo Xiaoping volunteered immediately, got as far as the door and came back. Are you bringing enough money? There's still nothing in the factory account. If we take goods without paying, we might get beaten up. So Gao Qiang went to his uncle for money and got it and filled the warehouse. And then Gao Jiwan came in to report that Workshop 2 had stopped. Why? There are no raw materials. I bought them yesterday. They're in the warehouse. Those have to be braided into core-filled cord first. We haven't got any. Then braid some. We can't. We haven't got a braiding machine. Before you arrived, Factory Director Tang took all 4 of them away. Nobody had told him because nobody knew. The lease existed between me and Guo Xiaoping and nowhere else. The deputy director and 4 workshop heads lived by a single principle, which was that you do the task you are given and you collect your wages on the 15th, and asking about equipment ownership was somebody else's job. The second summons to the inspection office had a certain déjà vu about it, although Secretary Chen was confident this time, because this time the evidence was conclusive. Secretary Chen, who told you those 4 braiding machines are state assets? Does the garment factory have purchase receipts? Have you found them anywhere in the accounts? We can obtain them. I put the Mingtai contract on the table. Please read who Party A is. Party A, Ho Guangming. Ming looked up. Is there a problem? If the garment factory had bought them, Party A would be the garment factory. Wouldn't you agree? They were mine. I had leased them to the factory under a written agreement. I had terminated the lease and collected my property, and I had paid the freight department the standard tariff for the truck that moved them because I did not take 1 fen of public money, and I had the receipt for that too. Chen was already thinking about Gao Qiang, who had made him look ridiculous twice inside a fortnight by reporting things before establishing them. Guo Lihua worked out the plan and explained it to his nephew. Ming removed the machines to demonstrate that the production task cannot be completed without him, then the company has to invite him back. So we buy our own. Chen Changfu swore at him at some length. Clever cook. I gave you the rice, where is the meal? All I can see is hot air. Then he signed for over 100,000 yuan because 16 million yuan at the swap rate makes a man extremely reasonable. They bought 2 domestic braiding machines and the cord started coming off them, and Gao Qiang picked up a length and pulled it and looked pleased with himself. There doesn't seem to be any technical difficulty here. This stuff sells for $4 million. A few machines and some skilled workers and anybody could make it. Ming blew the wool fibers off his palms. Guo Lihua was not comfortable. That boy is full of tricks. How could there only be these 2? In the workshop, the air had already gone hazy. Auntie Wen was coughing and asking for a scrap of cloth to sew herself a mask. Somebody squeezed a length of the core braid and loose hemp came out of it. Somebody sat on a finished cushion and stood up with wool all over the back of her trousers. It's broken again. That's the 3rd thread this hour. I had the number from Guo Xiaoping the same evening. Not one item out of several thousand passed inspection. Gao Qiang called a meeting and shouted, and 5 men looked back at him with the blank identical faces of 5 confused ducks. Tell me exactly what's going on. The quality is substandard, mainly due to excessive fly lint, excessive hemp shedding, and frequent thread breakage. That is written on the report. I am asking why it is like this. Because the quality is substandard. The circle closed, and he could not hit anybody because the man in front of him was a disabled war veteran. Ming went round the table. I don't have any thoughts. I don't either. Neither do I. Same here. Like a roll call. Then Gao Jiwan delivered the finish without meaning to. In the past, whenever we had a problem, the factory director solved it himself. At which point Guo Xiaoping raised his hand, apparently reluctantly. It might be the machines. The old ones were imported. Does a 3rd sector garment factory really need an imported braiding machine? I wouldn't know. Factory director Tang brought them in. Imported, domestic. Who cares? We just use them. And then the accountant added the finishing touch. Of course, if the export order isn't completed, I'm afraid the leaders above won't let us off lightly. Gao Qiang thought, it is not us, it is me. I am the primary responsible person. The technical reality was the thing Professor Cheng had told me in the first 10 minutes of our first meeting. Wool and flax do not match in fineness or in elasticity, and the only thing that holds that process together is an imported machine. Gao Qiang went back to his uncle, and I would have paid real money for a chair in that office. When you come here, apart from asking for money, what else could you possibly want? How much does a clever housewife like you lack now? 30,000. Only 30,000? You've turned over a new leaf. Ah, it has to be US dollars. Chen Changfu came out of his chair. Then he sat down and explained reality to him, which I would have paid to watch. Yuan he could sign. Foreign currency he could not obtain. Not $30,000. Not $3,000. And even if he fought for it, the application goes from the company to the bureau, from the bureau to the administration, from the administration to the ministry. Can that be done in under 6 months? And if you have the equipment by this time next year, you should thank heaven. I'm afraid that's too late. There's a delivery date on the order. So you do know it's too late. His only remaining advice was to tour every textile mill in the city and the prefecture in case one of them had an imported braiding machine sitting idle, which was optimistic since most of them were running Soviet equipment from the 50s. Then the secretary knocked. Deputy Commissioner Pan Tong had arrived to inspect the garment factory. Gao Qiang's legs went out from under him and he nearly sat down on the floor. I was not in the building for this, and I have regretted it ever since. Pan Guang stood in the middle of a dead workshop with his hands behind his back and said, Secretary Zhou, you have certainly given me a hard time. And Zhou Hongwei, who had 1 year to retirement and no intention of spending it on this, produced the minutes of the meeting. I opposed it. The decision was collective. The new director was personally recommended by General Manager Liu. Pan Guang read the minutes and thought, and I have this from a person who was in the room. These people are too greedy. They know only how to be selfish and they have no sense of the larger picture. This company will be ruined in their hands sooner or later. Ming had come to that factory to put his own protection over that order. Now he was going to be the man who had to explain a failed $4 million export contract. So he went back to the prefectural committee and found somebody whose words carried weight. 20 minutes later, the telephone rang on Chen Changfu's desk, and it was Commissioner Chen Zhenbei. Qinghe has finally produced one enterprise capable of earning foreign exchange, and you have managed to shut it down. Do you not want to work anymore? I am giving you 1 day. Restore normal production. If you cannot, then stop being a general manager and go and clean toilets for me. Chen Changfu came to my apartment that afternoon with 2 cartons of cigarettes and 2 tins of malted milk. I had the tea already made. I knew you'd come this afternoon, so I got it ready. As soon as you knocked, I poured the water. Ming sat down. Last time Section Chief Guo came to my office, I added, I fobbed him off with tea dust. 3 conditions. 1. The contract continues exactly as before, and the head office does not interfere in the management of the factory. 2. 20,000 yuan a year. Everything above that is mine. Ming tried one warning shot on that. Be careful. If the policy turns, there'll be another campaign to smash the local tyrants and divide the land, and you will be standing there as a wealthy landlord. Our country is only going to open further. I've simply realized the 4 modernizations a bit earlier than everybody else. 3. And this was the one that mattered. Peace. And I want to give you the argument in full because it is the best thing I said that year. Whether the contractor is Ho Guangming or Gao Guangming or Guo Guangming, as long as there is $4 million on the table, the factory gets taken back, so I don't take it personally. It isn't about me. Second, have you ever seen me take a loss? Do you think I would have accepted that order without arranging some follow-up measures first? Third, if you kill me, I can still splash blood on you. And fourth, Secretary Zhou retires next year and you take over. Right now, the more you do, the more mistakes you make. If a $4 million order collapses on your watch, do you believe you will still move smoothly into Secretary Zhou's chair? Ming was quiet for a while. For a family, he said, harmony is the most important thing. Ming undertook to keep Guo Lihua on a leash and stood up to go, and then mentioned in the doorway that he personally preferred pu'er and that if I ever came across the Tibetan kind, he would be grateful. Is that the round cake sort, I said, that Tibetan families put outside to dry? Probably. And then, as he went down the stairs, apparently to myself, although, aren't the round cakes Tibetans dry outside their houses actually cow dung? Ming missed a step and had to grab the rail, and I understand he went back to his office and spent some time looking at a round cake on his shelf. People ask me why I made peace instead of finishing him, because even if I had beaten Chen Changfu, there was nothing on the other side of it. The top job was not going to fall to me. I would simply have burned $4 million to prove a point. The next morning, I drove the 4 machines back through the gate. Gao Qiang signed the handover and left, and during his brief reign he had made me 3 gifts. Ming had paid a month of wages. Ming had filled my warehouse with raw material, and he had bought 2 domestic braiding machines which were entirely useless to me. All of it stayed. Ming could not take state property with him, and he was not going to sell it because the money would not have been his either. That is the whole difference between working for yourself and working for the public. I counted every fen and dug 3 feet down to take everything that was mine. Gao Qiang patted his backside and walked away. I stood in the doorway of a full warehouse and thought, rounding up, I have made another 100 million. The delivery dates had not moved, so we needed to catch up, which meant overtime, and the moment I said the word, my 5 silent men became extraordinarily articulate. Our workshop is all women with families. They have elderly parents above and children below. We have women who are about to give birth. We cannot take responsibility for that. Usually they cannot produce a fart. Mention overtime and they turn into orators. You're right, I said. Overtime will be entirely voluntary. Nobody will be forced. Relief around the table. The canteen will stay open in the evening. The factory will subsidize it 3,000 yuan a month for the food. Somebody did the arithmetic out loud. 100 yuan a day, 70-odd jin of meat. I watched 4 workshop heads privately conclude that a man could eat dinner and go home 5 minutes later. And the length of the overtime is up to each individual. Those with more to do at home should do less. I don't want to damage family harmony. They were nodding by then. Which brings me to the last point. Since employees control their own overtime hours, the overtime pay should obviously reflect the hours worked. There was a pause. Overtime pay? There's overtime pay? You didn't have overtime pay before? Who would give overtime pay? How can there be no overtime pay? Isn't that exploiting the workers? I stopped. No, that isn't right. We're a state-owned enterprise. There is no exploitation in a state-owned enterprise. 1 yuan per hour, recorded by name. And I will emphasize one final point. Overtime is entirely a matter of individual choice. The factory will never force anybody. The 4 workshop heads looked at each other. At 1 yuan an hour, was there anything left to choose? At the notice board, I watched the same staircase run again, and Auntie Wen climbed every single step of it. Overtime? Why is there overtime again? The children are waiting for me to cook. It's voluntary. Good. At my age, my body can't take it. There's dinner in the canteen. The factory's putting in 3,000 a month. A meal of meat is enough to buy me off, is it? It's 1 yuan an hour. Auntie Wen stopped moving. 3 hours a day. 30 days. 90 yuan, plus dinner, on a wage of 100. Overtime is wonderful, she announced to the board. I love working overtime most of all. At 9 in the evening, I walked through and the workshop was still lit. Chin Feng packed up at 3 hours, which was 3 Yuan, which was a pair of white canvas shoes for each of his kids. Auntie Wen, going home? You go, I'll do another hour. Aren't you tired? Not tired, it's only been 3 hours. I feel like I could do another 3. Ming stood there looking at a woman he had worked beside for 10 years and did not recognize. Was this really the same Auntie Wen who was always first out of the gate? This country has never lacked hard-working people. What it lacked was money. We used to do overtime for the passion. The passion is gone, so now we talk about money instead. It hurts the feeling slightly. It is genuinely a lot happier. At home, there was a roast chicken and an argument about my brother. Ming had finished middle school with grades that closed the door on both senior high and technical school, and my brother-in-law, being now a street committee man, could place him almost anywhere. I ruled out the transport company immediately, on the grounds that in a few years there would be private operators everywhere, and the transport company would not be glorious anymore. Option 1. The municipal construction company. I was strongly in favor, for reasons I could not give. Within 3 years, migrant labor would arrive and every permanent man there would become a foreman. At the end of the 90s, they would turn the company into a shareholding enterprise. And by 2008, the dividends alone would be paying the old hands $500,000 or $600,000 a year. I'm not carrying bricks, said my brother. It's bitter and tiring. Option 2, the power station. The purest iron rice bowl in existence. What would I do there? Shovel coal or shovel the ash. Shoveling ash is worse than bricks. At least bricks don't choke you. Option 3, the West Side department store. No, I said. Absolutely not the department store. The department store is great, said my brother, nodding like a toy. I could not tell them why. In my first life, he went to the department store. Ming carried boxes. Ming gave the right people the right gifts and became a very junior stores clerk, and he stayed there for 25 years, and when he was in his 40s, the department store closed. First the foreign hypermarkets, then the malls, then the internet. The owner sold the land for $100 million. My brother was unemployed at 45, too embarrassed to sell things in the street, and sat at home while I lent him $100,000 or $200,000 a year that both of us knew was not a loan. My father took his side because he always did, and my mother, who is the most practical person in that family, said the sentence that ended the discussion. If you find him a job he doesn't like, he'll quit inside 3 days. One dissenting vote was clearly insufficient. Jin Jianhua walked me into the provincial foreign exchange swap center personally. There were 2 rates then, the official one at 3.71 and the swap ceiling at 4.2, which the state had set the previous October. $4 million came out at 16.8 million yuan. After the factory's costs and the wage bill and the income tax, what came to me personally was not less than 10 million. I had gone from a man with $100,000 sewn into a jacket to a man with 8 figures in yuan, and I stood in a room full of clerks and did not allow my face to do anything at all. The right to retain a share of your own foreign exchange was, at that point, reserved for the special zones and foreign invested enterprises. 1 more year, I thought. They opened it in '88. Jin Jianhua, out of gratitude, offered to obtain me anything that was in short supply. Although if you ask me for enriched uranium to build an atomic bomb, we cannot do that. A car, for me personally. Ming had a Ford Sierra available. To be honest, it's a bit ugly. Ming was being kind. The front end was described at the time as avant-garde, and they were putting them into taxi fleets. But in the first quarter of next year, there's a batch of Nissan Bluebirds coming in, 7th generation, some of them with electric windows. Ming lowered his voice. I'm only telling you, don't spread it, or every unit in the province will be here asking for cars. Then I'll wait. By then you can have any color you want. For the record, in 1987 the policy did not prohibit a private individual from owning a car. It simply did not mention it, and in that country it was not enough for a policy to fail to prohibit something. The policy had to explicitly permit it. I did the bonus list myself, and I corrected it upward. Workers, 300 instead of 200. Workshop heads, 3,000 instead of 2,005. Gaoji Yuan, 10,000 instead of 5, because the production of that factory ran entirely on the sound of his voice. For Guo Xiaoping, I took the 500 on the sheet and added a 0 and a 2 in front of it. 25,000. I can't take this. It's more than Gaoji Yuan got. If it gets out, the effect will be bad. Then don't let it get out. This is a bonus for your work. You didn't steal it and you didn't rob anybody. Ming sat down on the corner of the desk. I never imagined that I, Guo Xiaoping, would live to become a 10,000 yuan household. Then I gave him his next job, which was to go to every market in the city and buy me 1 sample of every kind of shearling sheepskin available. You cannot ride one trick forever. Gao Yuan told me the next part himself, months afterward, and I have never enjoyed a story more. Ming came from a village. Ming had a city residence permit because of his war wound and nothing else, no money and no authority, and his wife, who was a city girl, had been telling him about it for 11 years. That evening he came home with 10,000 yuan in a canvas bag, and the recital started before he had his shoes off. My third sister just bought my father a color television. My second brother-in-law got promoted, his salary went up 30. Old Shen next door bought his wife a forever bicycle, red, no crossbar. I married a good-for-nothing. Are you finished? Go and make dinner. I'm hungry. She came off the chair. Do you dare hit me? Go on, hit me if you have the guts. She had used that one for 11 years because he had never hit a woman in his life, and she knew it. Gao Jiwan reached into the bag and threw a bundle of notes in her face. I'm going to divorce. And stopped because it was raining money. Where did you get so much money? 10,000 yuan bonus. That's 1,000. There's 9,000 more in the bag. 10,000. We're a 10,000 yuan household. She was already on her knees. How can you throw money around like that? We need to pick it all up. She got it into her apron and stood up and had entirely forgotten that her cheek was stinging. You're hungry, aren't you? What do you want to eat? Noodles with bean sauce. And she went to make them, thinking, with real warmth. Being hit in the face with money feels wonderful. I watched Auntie Wen wheel a new bicycle across the compound the next morning at approximately walking pace, greeting everybody she had ever met, to the neighbor with the bad knees, to the woman from the third floor, to the man who ran the boiler. Didn't I get a 300 yuan bonus? So I bought a new bicycle, and eventually, inevitably, to Guo Lihua at the gate. Director Guo, you look wonderful today, very rosy. What is it? Are you angry at your son again? No. Educating children needs rewards as well as punishments. My daughter got into technical school, so I bought her a new bicycle as a reward, all thanks to the factory giving out a 300 yuan bonus. Ming produced a smile with visible effort and spat once she had gone. Do you think Ho Guangming is really that kind-hearted? Ming's buying people. That's all it is. Then he went home and found his elder brother sitting in his front room with a sack of fresh peanuts. Guo Lihua was a village boy. Ming was the only man in that family who had ever obtained a city residence permit, which meant that for 20 years every relative he had came to him for everything. Ming slipped his brother 30 yuan while his wife was out of the room. It's about my boy. Ming's finished middle school. Put him in as a temporary worker. Big brother, I heard it's very hard for a temporary worker to become permanent these days. Didn't your Guo Hao take several years? Then a third sector unit. It's easier to go permanent. That's what I was thinking. Which one? The garment factory, said his brother, brightening. I asked around before I came. High wages, plenty of bonuses, they even pay overtime. I heard everybody got 300 yuan. Then, with concern, Big brother? Why are you clutching your chest? Every sheepskin Guo Xiaoping brought me back from the market was stiff. This is fine for us, I said, turning one over. Export it and the foreigners will send it straight back. So I did not go looking for better sheepskin. I went looking for a bucket. I gave Guo Xiaoping a shopping list. Scales, beakers, volumetric flasks, thermometers, litmus paper. Ming read it twice. You're going to do a chemistry experiment. In my first life, I came back from Japan with 200,000 yuan and opened a chemical works, which is a grand phrase for a rented shed with a second-hand boiler, a second-hand reactor, some stirrers, and a row of hot plates. The first product I ever made was a textile softener, stearic acid, epichlorohydrin, glacial acetic acid, plus additives, heat, and agitation. The whole difficulty is holding the pH. I did not invent it. I bought the formula for 30,000 yuan from an engineer at a joint venture in one of the special zones who was fond of money at a time when patent law in that country was a decorative feature. That formula built everything I had. Then I went into second-hand machinery and met the Sakurada Corporation, and you know how that ended. The smell in my office reached the ceiling within 20 minutes. I forgot to have you buy gas masks. We tied towels around our faces. After I get home today, said Guo Xiaoping through the towel, your sister-in-law absolutely will not let me into the bed. A few hours later, I had a beaker of softener. We soaked half a sheepskin in it and dried that half with a hairdryer Guo Xiaoping fetched from his own home on the back of my motorcycle, and then we laid the treated half next to the untreated half on the desk. Just by touch, he said, these are two completely different materials. That formula was mid-90s technology arriving in 1987. It was, without exaggeration, the best softener in the country that day. I did not patent it. Anybody with a high school chemistry certificate can reverse engineer a softener, and in that period, the day after you finished registering a patent, a crowd would follow the patent documents straight into production. In that country, at that time, the only thing you could protect was the thing nobody could copy, which meant I needed a reactor, and I did not have a month to build one. Borrow a hen to lay the egg. Qingyi Chemical Plant Number 2. The director was Ren Jigang, past 50, a technical man who had built that plant from nothing and then filled every post in it with his own people and his own relatives. Ming ran it like an iron bucket. When the prefecture sent him a deputy, he did not argue. Ming simply arranged for that deputy to have nothing whatsoever to do until the man asked to be transferred. Ming identified my sample in about 4 seconds. This is shearling from Inner Mongolian sheep, so it cannot possibly be imported. Ming rubbed it between finger and thumb. And this did not use an ordinary softener, did it? So I made my offer. My formula, his reactors, 30% of the profit, 25, 20. Plus you supply my garment factory at cost. If you want to cooperate, said Ren Jigang, all the profit goes to me. This factory will pay you 3,000 yuan for the formula. 3,000 yuan. 3,000, he added helpfully, is more than 2 years of an ordinary person's wages. If I took this formula to one of the bosses in the south, somebody would pay 100,000. Then go and find them. Here, your formula is worth 3,000. And then he told me why, without embarrassment, because he genuinely believed it. In all of Qinghe, only chemical plant number 2 can produce softener. Why should I spend money and effort upgrading my technology? Because somebody else will. Who? The main chemical works is fully committed under the plan. The county workshops? Ming actually laughed. Can their scale compare? Can their technology compare? That's a fantasy. I have heard that speech before and since, delivered in different rooms by different men, always about a competitor who does not exist yet. The transport company leadership were making the same speech that year about private truckers. Both of them got eaten. It took the chemical works longer because the barrier to entry in chemicals is real, so the private operators did not arrive until the 90s. When they did, chemical plant number 2 lost to workshops. But that was no help to me in 1987. Building my own reactor meant a custom order and a month minimum, and the next Canton Fair was closer than that. And partnering with a small plant meant giving up equity, and nobody gives up equity. I was standing outside the chemical works gate being annoyed when I noticed a man loitering by the wall. 50-something, black from the sun, a loose shirt, a long pipe stuck through his belt, dark blue trousers, and rubber sandals with dried mud on them. Ming looked at me twice. Are you Chen Chunhong's younger brother? Ming was my eldest sister's husband's second uncle, which in that family made him my second uncle, and his name was Qian Chang Ming, and he was the party secretary of Shenfutun village. I had met him perhaps 4 times in my life. What brings you here? They've got old saponification equipment they're scrapping. I wanted to buy it for the village. Ming shifted the pipe. They quoted me a price that isn't a price. And to be honest, I couldn't even get through the door, and my brain did something that I felt physically. Uncle, if your village workshop can make laundry paste, then it has a reaction kettle, doesn't it? There's a 2-ton kettle and 2 1-ton kettles. And a boiler? We make laundry paste, he said, mildly offended. How could we not have a boiler? Over rice wine in a roadside place, he told me the whole story of that village. The household contract system had fed them. Peanuts had given them their first actual cash. And with the cash they had all chipped in and built a village enterprise which boiled laundry paste, an unlicensed no-name product that his 2 sons carried around the rural markets in buckets and sold by weight to people on the edge of town who could not afford soap. Ming had wanted to add soap. The chemical plant would not let him pass the gatekeeper because he was a peasant. I handed him the treated sheepskin. Ming went quiet, working it between his hands. This hide is so soft. Ming looked up. We slaughter sheep in our village. No sheepskin is this smooth. Here's what I want. I give you the formula and 100,000 yuan of investment. I take 50%. Qian Changming put the sheepskin down and shook his head. No. All that junk and scrap iron in our workshop isn't worth 100,000. If I take 100,000 off you and only give you 50%, then I'm cheating you, and your brother-in-law will go around saying I swindled my own relative. I want it on record that in a decade of business, the only person who ever tried to give me back equity was a village party secretary in rubber sandals. So I explained where the money went. Raw materials, upgrading the kettles, a small truck for the village, and the last item, which was the actual point, and a dividend of 1 to 200 yuan to every household. Ming put his cup down. Every household? Every household, otherwise the villagers will have objections to me, and I don't want a single one. I could have simply bought the workshop. I did not, for 2 reasons. The first is that a village enterprise is a clan. Walk into that workshop and you will greet a round of 2nd grandfathers, 3rd uncles, and 4th cousins before you reach the boiler. An outsider does not take over a place like that. Handing out money to every household was the only door in. The second reason is that private enterprises did not legally exist in China until 1988. If anybody tells you they were running a private enterprise before that, they are talking nonsense because it was fundamentally illegal. Your options were to attach yourself to a township or to register a shareholding cooperative, which counted as a collective enterprise. Exactly 50%, not 51. Because if the private share exceeded the public share, it might attract attention, and if I were arrested as a capitalist over 1 percentage point, that would be a genuinely stupid way to lose everything. Once the dryer started producing soft sheepskin, I pulled all 4 workshops off the flax cushions and moved them onto wool. Gao Jiwan rubbed a piece against his own cheek. This is too comfortable. This would be fine made into underclothes for me. Using it for car seat cushions is a bit of a waste. Made into car seat cushions and taken to the Canton Fair, it earns dollars. Then I give you a bonus. Car seat cushions it is. 1 sheepskin per set, and the cost was over 100 yuan. A month of Guo Xiaoping's salary sitting on the bench in front of us, which is why we have to sell them at a high price. This set has to go for over $100. Foreigners are terrible skinflints, said Guo Xiaoping doubtfully. I watched one haggle over a porcelain plate at $1. The foreigners you saw were poor foreigners, poor brothers from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This product is for Americans, Canadians, and Scandinavians. And then I told them the part they did not want to hear. The flax cushions will be copied by the next fair. Copied? By whom? By everyone. That braiding machine is not a secret, and it is not hard to buy. Every enterprise at the Canton Fair is provincial level at minimum. Some of them have their own foreign exchange. We earned $4 million in public, in front of all of them. Do you have any idea how many companies are looking at us right now? The lesson, and I have not changed my mind about it since. The flax cushion was too easy to imitate. It was good for exactly 1 Canton Fair. A factory our size can only survive on differentiation. We must have what others do not have, and be better at what others do have. Flax is summer, wool is winter. By the way, 30 years later, a set like that sells for 1,500 yuan. I had the Shenfutun laundry paste workshop renamed the Shenfutun chemical plant, product line, textile softener. Chen Changming's elder son ran the production, his second son ran the deliveries and the money, and I rode out there myself on the motorcycle for 2 buckets for the towel factory because I had taken over sales because I had spent a year as a planning dispatcher and I knew which factory in that prefecture needed what. Mid-90s chemistry against everything else in the city. Qinghe was ours inside 2 months. They started planning a second building and a bigger reactor. And at chemical plant number 2, in a meeting room I would eventually hear about in a great deal of detail, somebody reported that 20 tons of finished goods had spoiled in the warehouse, most of it softener. Planning blamed sales. Sales said carefully, several factories that used to buy from us have stopped. I assume they found another supplier. In this city, said Ren Zhigang, apart from us, what other chemical plant can produce softener? And then he remembered a young man who had come to see him with a piece of sheepskin. His face changed. Go and find out. Immediately. Which other chemical plant in this city can produce softener? At the autumn fair, Jin Jianhua booked me the best stand in the section without being asked, because as long as you could bring Jin Jianhua a benefit, he would genuinely help you, which made him far easier to deal with than the men who smiled at your face. Ming was in a poor mood himself. The province had lost a stand to the Taishan 750 motorcycle, a descendant of the old military heavyweight, which had not sold a single unit in several fairs. The space went to a Yamaha CY80 from Shancheng, the ancestor of every scooter this country would ever build. Then we walked into the woven goods area. There was an entire row of flax automotive seat cushions in the best positions, and 2 or 3 of them were mine. Jin Jianhua was delighted for about 4 seconds, believing we had been given extra counters, until a colleague came over and said pleasantly, "The flax car seat cushions from our province's #1 hemp textile factory are no worse than yours, are they? Plus the offerings of about 10 other provincial foreign trade corporations." Jin Jianhua went off like a firework. "These are our product. How dare you produce them? Why can you produce them and we can't? Look at the tea, the silk, the fabric, the porcelain. Aren't the foreign trade teams of every province selling those? You're plagiarizing. Cushions have existed for thousands of years. If we're copying anybody, we're copying our ancestors. There are woven straw mats thousands of years old among the artifacts excavated in our province." The organizers, delighted, announced a dedicated exhibition area for automotive seat cushions. Everybody was pleased except Jin Jianhua, who stood there like a man watching a duck take off from his own hand. I was smiling, and he did not enjoy that either. Today was entirely within my expectations, I told him. If a third sector unit from a municipal enterprise can produce them, how difficult do you imagine it is for a large state factory? So what do we do? With a dozen sellers in one hall, the price will be under $10 by lunchtime. The whole market will collapse to about $2 million split between all of them. Each company gets 100,000 or so, which is not even as much as the black pottery. Jin Jianhua's ears went red. On the morning of the opening day, I said, we put the wool cushions on the table, let them see the trump card, and then we crush them completely. I set out a few wool sets before dawn, in the middle of an ocean of flax, like a husky dropped into a flock of sheep, so that everyone entering that hall saw them first. Then I sat down in the corner to wait for Sean Miller. Mr. Zheng, my Singaporean from the spring, came straight to me, ready to take another 1,000 sets at 29. The man at the next counter was on his feet before Zheng had finished the sentence. Our flax car seat cushions are only 25. Mr. Zheng apologized to me. I smiled and told him not to worry about it at all. 22. 21, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. Mr. Zheng was surrounded by happiness. They were cutting prices the way a man loses blood. It was like watching gangsters in old Tianjin competing to prove which of them could be more ruthless to himself. I moved back a few steps to get a better view and genuinely regretted having no melon seeds. Here is why it happened, and it is not stupidity. Only large state enterprises had been able to copy me, and for the director of a large state enterprise, foreign exchange earnings mattered more than profit. Foreign exchange was a political achievement. It went in the report, and the report went upward, and upward was where promotions came from, so it did not matter if they lost money on every unit, as long as the units were sold in dollars. And when a state enterprise loses money, it is not the director's money that is lost, it is the state's. By lunchtime, the price was under $10, and the volume had gone up beautifully. Zheng took 2,000. Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Malaysia, Thailand, and 2 buyers from the Middle East all came in. 30,000 sets sold that morning. For less than $300,000 between all of them. I want to record what Fan Jihong was doing at that hour, because I liked the man. By then almost a deputy director general, he was eating a boxed lunch at the fair rather than going to a restaurant, with a single concession to rank in the form of a roast goose leg. Somebody mentioned the 30,000 sets. 30,000! I remember a set sells for $29. That's 870,000. If Sean Miller orders another 100,000, this cushion alone earns 5 million. Section Chief. I'm afraid not. Those 30,000 sets came to under 300,000 in total. Ming put down his chopsticks, looked at the table of figures, and went pale. Then he said something in his home dialect that I will not translate. I spent that morning working as an auctioneer at other people's counters. There was an Arab buyer in a headdress with no interpreter, and I speak English, so naturally I helped. That gentleman is saying 18. This gentleman here is offering 15. Oh, and that one has lowered again, 14. I got him down to $9.20 and then shook the seller's hand. Factory Director Zheng, congratulations. An order for 3,000 sets, $27,600 in total. Same to you, said Factory Director Zheng through his teeth, at a price below his own cost. Jin Jianhua came and stood next to me. You haven't sold a single cushion all morning, you're just helping other people. I've also watched several excellent shows. A factory from Shanghai got it down to $8.80 just now. You're not watching. I think you're deliberately stirring it up. 1 monk fetches water and drinks. 2 monks carry water between them. 3 monks have no water at all. I did not bother denying it. If they knew how to cooperate, they wouldn't have produced my cushions without consulting anybody. Who told them to copy my product? I should be honest about myself here, since I have been honest about everybody else. I am a sophisticated egoist. Concepts like synergy and cooperation and price alliances were simply not on my list. Somebody should have built a price alliance in that hall, and that somebody was the ministry, and it did not, and frankly, I wanted those companies to go under. State enterprises that occupy an enormous share of the nation's resources, do no research of their own, and know only how to plagiarize, should go bankrupt as early as possible. I let Sean Miller tour the fair for 2 full days, and he found nothing. Fabric and silk were no use to Walmart, since American customers were not going to sew their own clothes. And the finished garments were, in his own words, difficult. Red flowers with green leaves would make people laugh out loud. So he came to the cushion area, and the avalanche started. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 950, 920, 9, 850. Sean Miller looked genuinely bewildered. Why are your flax car seat cushions so cheap? I was here last spring. A set was $29. Secretary Chen said something about expanded production capacity, and Sean Miller, who had been buying things for a living for 20 years, understood exactly what he was looking at and privately felt ill. Something worth $9, and I paid $29. I lost money. A great deal of money. Then he straightened up and said the sentence that killed the entire hall. Gentlemen, I am very sorry. I do not intend to purchase flax car seat cushions. Is our price still not low enough? I am very satisfied with the price, but Walmart has no demand. It is autumn in America. Winter is coming. It will snow across most of the country. Even in the deserts of Southern California, there is no need for this. And this is the part that the entire row of state enterprises did not know, because none of them had ever sold anything to an American in their lives. A retailer is not afraid of thin margins. A retailer is afraid of stock. I had 30 years to learn that, and they had none. I can afford not to make a profit. I absolutely cannot afford to overstock. American supermarkets do not build inventory, even ahead of a hurricane, and nobody, anywhere, buys a summer product in October. October orders are Christmas orders. A dozen enterprises had copied my cushion without once asking themselves why an American would want to sit on flax in February, as if his backside were not cold enough already. They stood there in silence, and I got up out of my corner with a wool cushion over my arm. Are all the beggars finished making noise? Then it is my turn. Mr. Miller. It has been half a year, and you have not changed at all. Sean Miller smiled at me and thought, and later told me he had thought, here is a businessman with even less heart than a Jew. I sold him winter with exactly the same technique I had used to sell him summer, turned inside out. Think about New York in January. The wind comes down the avenues and freezes Central Park solid. You walk to your car, you open the door, and the leather seat is a block of ice. You sit on it and the cold goes straight up your spine. Ming winced. Everybody winces. Then I gave him the cushion. Pure shearling. Warm, breathes, does not mind snow, and moths will not touch it. So at the end of the season, you throw it in the garage and take it out next winter. Ming turned it over and over. This reminds me of Australian wool. The softener. But I did not say that. Our cars have heaters. There is always the time between starting the engine and the warm air arriving. Gasoline is cheap. We start the engine in advance. Mr. Miller, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and New York, a man sitting beside an open fire still feels cold. A car heater can, at most, stop a person shivering. This cushion makes him as warm as his mother's arms. I let that land. And think about older passengers. Cold gets into the joints. We could simply wear more clothing. If you worked on Wall Street, would you put on 2 bulky down jackets or a slim wool coat over your suit? I find it difficult to imagine a man in 3 down jackets squeezing into an elevator on Wall Street. Sean Miller laughed and put his hands up. You should come and work in procurement at Walmart. $129 a set, $39 per front seat, $57 for the rear bench. That is very expensive. 1 sheepskin is not even enough to make a single front cushion. And then the real answer. And I am pricing according to market demand. I believe Walmart also prices according to market demand. Secretary Chen leaned in and hissed at me in Chinese. Why won't you lower the price? Don't frighten the foreign businessman away. Ming won't be frightened away. The wool comes off the sheep. I sell at $129 and he will dare to sell it at $300 or $400. How do these Americans sell things even more heartlessly than you? Nonsense. If I weren't heartless, who would earn foreign exchange for this country? Those manufacturers over there who only know how to copy. I gave him 3% off anything above 20,000 sets. Sean Miller did it on a pocket calculator. 20,000 sets and 20,000 front cushions came to $3.36 million, and after the discount, $3.259. At the neighboring counters, a dozen men who had not sold a single set that day watched a contract for over $3 million being drafted. Jin Jianhua was radiant because this one was signed through the province and not the ministry, which meant every dollar of it landed in his column and might well be worth half a rank to him. Ming could not restrain himself. Old Gao, Old Ming, Old Zheng, did you see that? An order for over $3 million. Congratulations, said Old Gao in the voice of a man at a graveside, and then I leaned on the table. Mr. Miller, have you forgotten about the Canadian market? Ming stopped with the pen in his hand. That's right. There's also Canada. 26 million people living in a climate that produces the exact problem I had just spent 10 minutes describing, with the incomes to solve it, and for an American retailer the 2 countries are one market anyway. Another 5,000 sets and 5,000 front cushions. Another $800,000, $4.07 million, and I had not raised my voice once. Behind me I could hear the reviews. Are Americans all suckers? One casual sentence, and they buy another $1 million worth. Ming couldn't have recited some kind of incantation, could he? 1 sentence, over $1 million more. That's more powerful than 1,000 pieces of gold for a single word. The moment Sean Miller left, 6 men came over to touch the sample. How is it so soft? This has to be imported wool. Don't touch it, said Jin Jianhua, batting hands away. You'll break it. I told them the truth, out loud, because I wanted it said in front of witnesses. It's the softener. An old textile man among them shook his head immediately. A softener can soften shearling, not to this extent. Factory Director Tang is still holding something back. We use a new type of softener, I said, with advanced foreign production technology. which was true in every word and false in its entirety, and I watched them all conclude that it was imported. I heard one of them murmur to another as they walked away. Factory Director Tang is young and doesn't seem like someone with a devious mind. Coax him a little and he'll tell us everything. $4 million in the spring, $4 million in the autumn. 3 years earlier, I had been sitting in the dirt outside a truck shed, scratching a year into the ground with a stick and rubbing it out again in case somebody asked me what it meant. Nobody in that hall asked me anything anymore. They just stood behind me and did arithmetic. And behind me in that hall stood a dozen enterprises who had just watched me do it twice, who had lost their shirts on flax, and who had all reached the same conclusion at the same moment, which I could read on every one of their faces. Since wool car seat cushions earn foreign exchange, why not simply copy the answer, bring out the same product at the next fair, and take a share? They were welcome to try. The wool was not the product. The softener was the product. And 140 kilometers away, in an office at chemical plant number 2, Ren Zhigang was reading a report about which chemical works in that city had started producing textile softener and had just found the name of a village.